The tale goes that 5,000 years ago, in a time of despair, humanity was near extinction, the celestial scriptures were being erased, and chaos reigned. To save the world from utter collapse, 4 heroes, who had fought for mankind, confronted Erebus, the source of all evil. The first was Luna, the great elven mage and poet of the stars, whose weapon was a staff imbued with magic. The second was Dwayno, the master dwarven blacksmith, a holy artisan whose weapon was a heavy iron hammer. The third was Aaron, a brave beast warrior, and last but not least, Lycinas, the wise dragon king. His true form was a mighty black dragon. The scriptures recorded the heroic feats of these 4, chronicling all the good they had done for humanity in a thick tome. This was the story of 5,000 years ago, when blood rain poured from the sky, and the heavens were perpetually overcast, casting no sunlight. Among the ruins, a white-haired figure lay still. The rain was relentless. The heroes, exhausted, had fallen some distance away. Dwayno's hammer could be seen, and nearby, the beast warrior Aaron lay unconscious. Standing before them was Lycinas, seemingly casting magic to heal his comrades. At that moment, a pair of eyes fluttered open, and a weak voice called out, "Kyle, Kyle!" The person addressed continuously transferred energy into Lycina's body. "Don't speak," he said. Lycinas seemed extremely weak, but with the added energy from Kyle, he barely managed to open his mouth and say, "Take my dragon heart, and keep going forward." Kyle, covered in wounds and blood, interrupted Lycinas. "I will save you, so be quiet." Lycina's dragon eyes opened slightly, his voice trembling. "It's too late." Kyle, not wanting to hear those words, cut him off. "I can't focus on healing if you keep talking." But before he could finish, Lycinas coughed up a large amount of blood. Kyle, in disbelief, stared at the scene. Lycinas struggled to stay conscious. "Kyle, do you remember the first time we met?" As he spoke, Lycinas pulled out his dragon heart and said, "We will save the world." Kyle was stunned, unable to do anything as he felt his strength was no longer enough to save them. He gritted his teeth until they bled, and then, through clenched teeth, he said, "You foolish god." Lycinas only had a few breaths left, but he tried to reply, "I'm sorry for leaving everything to you." He couldn't finish his sentence, but Kyle could understand the implication. Kyle trembled as he reached out to take the dragon heart from Lycinas's embrace. He was in excruciating pain as he called out the names of his fallen comrades, Lycinas, Aaron, Dwayno, and Luna. As he held the dragon heart, its power began to radiate outwards, wanting to enter Kyle's body. Soon, only a small piece of the heart remained in Kyle's hand. He recalled the images of his 4 comrades, thinking, "Thank you all for being with me." From the power of Lycina's dragon heart and Kyle's own innate strength, a massive pillar of ice shot into the sky. It didn't stop but continued to grow, piercing the blood-rain-filled sky. A truly bizarre spectacle. Kyle's body was continuously absorbing more power, and an energy aura enveloped him. No matter what happens, Kyle thought to himself, 2 forces, fire and ice, collided. A shadow stretched across the sky like the Grim Reaper. Kyle's surging power warped his surroundings, and with unwavering determination, he shouted, "Even if this body turns to ashes," the deathly power within Kyle surged like a wild beast, threatening to destroy everything. In anguish, he cried out. At any cost, Kyle bit back the pain, enduring the 2 powers warring within him. He ground out each word, "I will." Kyle gripped his sword, his resolve unshaken. Finally, the power left by Lycinas's dragon heart had been almost entirely absorbed by Kyle. He coldly stated, "Devour their souls." Kyle would later be known as the hero of the beginning. Empowered by the dragon's strength, Kyle wielded his sword against Erebus, the one who threatened to destroy humanity. The clash of dark and light power tore at the atmosphere. Kyle swung his sword, imbued with his power, towards Erebus, showing no mercy. Transitioning to the present, a young woman held a book and read. On a night when the sky echoed with a thunderous boom, thanks to the sacrifice of the wise king, Lycinas, they pushed back Erebus, the source of all evil, the end. After she finished reading, a wah resounded in the room. Suddenly, a deep male voice, sounding helpless, said, "Reina, haven't you read that story to him 100 times already?" The woman, Reina, replied gently, "But Leo likes this book the most, see?" In the cradle, a white-haired, red-eyed boy named Leo stared up innocently. "So," Reina continued the story, "my dear Leo, Mommy will read the story of the heroes of the beginning again, a long time ago, even before ancient times, or more precisely, 5,000 years ago." Leo, unable to speak yet, only responded with a few obligatory goo-goo sounds. Reina chuckled happily. See, he likes it so much. Leo frowned and made an a-boo-boo sound, thinking angrily. Stop reading that damn book. It's not like I like listening to it, Reina, unperturbed, continued to read. Once again, 5,000 years ago, Leo was utterly confused, thinking, what does that mean? What happened? He remembered being Kyle, who had just won the battle against Erebus, standing on a cliff raising his sword in victory, he thought. So, I defeated Erebus. Now, Kyle, a grown man's soul, was trapped inside the tiny body of Leo, who had been born just a few months ago. He was utterly bewildered, thinking, then why am I the only one erased from history? History books no longer mention Kyle, the hero of the beginning. The scene shifts to a dozen or so years later at the Royal Academy of Dalan. Inside a classroom, the teacher's voice rang out, "Attention, everyone." The teacher, standing at the lectern with his hands on the desk, looked down at the class and said, "As you all know, we are currently living in," he paused to take a breath and then said loudly, "the age of heroes." The teacher proudly recounted the events of 5,000 years ago. It has been 5,000 years since the first heroes appeared in our world. Below, the students listened intently to the teacher's words. The room was silent, save for the teacher's voice. The world has undergone many changes since then. He thumped his chest proudly and said, "The Royal Academy of Dalan, for example, has been chosen to host this year's Lumine entrance exam." The teacher's face flushed with excitement as he spoke of this important event. "Among you will be those who possess the qualities of a hero. Those who will pass the entrance exam and one day have their names etched into the annals of heroism." And therefore, as he spoke enthusiastically, a loud snore echoed from the back of the class. The teacher tried to continue, but the snoring repeatedly interrupted him. Infuriating him, the whole class turned to look at the student at the back of the room, by the window, sound asleep, completely unaware of what was going on. The teacher slammed his hand on the desk in anger and shouted, "Pay attention." He called out to the sleeping young man. "Leo." The young man raised his head, and the teacher continued, "Clearly, you've mastered all the course material to the point that my lecture is putting you to sleep. I'll quiz you." As per usual, the teacher asked, 5,000 years ago, what rituals did one have to undergo to be called a hero? Leo leaned back in his chair and stretched, then scratched his head and answered, "If you've just made a name for yourself, people will naturally worship you." He was Leo Plove, 15 years old, of the Plove family. The teacher sighed, running a hand over his face in frustration at Leo's answer. Sigh. Does anyone else want to answer? After he finished speaking, a hand shot up from the front of the class. A red-haired young man sitting to Leo's left spoke up. "In ancient times, there was no way to be recognized by the gods," the red-haired young man continued. "Heroes were chosen through sacred rituals, for example, the blood ritual." At this, Leo glanced at him with a knowing look, then leaned back in his chair. The teacher, delighted with the response, laughed heartily and praised the red-haired student. "Excellent." He looked at the young man sitting seriously below and announced, "Our kingdom's greatest magic prodigy, Gulliver Trodden." So, he was Gulliver Trodden, of the Trodden family. The teacher then turned back to the topic of the exam. "We have high hopes for this year's Lumine entrance exam." Below, while Gulliver basked in the admiration of the teacher and his classmates, he glanced at Leo with a smug look, but Leo seemed indifferent, sighing as he read his book. Looking at the dense text, Leo fell into thought. Back then, meeting the gods was so easy. Sacred rituals, huh? Leo remembered his companions Dueno and Aaron and thought, to honor the great heroes who fought against Erebus and Luna and Lycinas, the gods gave the mortal world a miracle. The heroic annals. Closing the heroic annals, Leo sighed. Leo glanced out the window, lost in thought. But why do they treat me like I'm invisible? Forgotten. A special note, the great hero Kyle reincarnated. Meanwhile, Gulliver watched him closely. Outside the classroom, a commotion arose. Inside Leo's classroom as well, the students were all looking out the door, some of them shouting in excitement. "They've arrived," a classmate responded. Where? Another pointed. Look, it's the Zardinger family crest." But in a corner of the room, Leo was lost in his thoughts and didn't care about what was going on outside. In the wide hallway, a well-dressed man walked, followed by a girl dressed in white, probably his daughter, and a squad of guards behind them. The students excitedly discussed among themselves. "Amazing." One student recognized the girl and exclaimed, "That's Celia Zardinger." In Leo's classroom, as he was pushing his chair back to stand up, the school's loudspeaker announced, "All students, please gather in the auditorium immediately. No exceptions. The Zardinger family has come to visit our school." Gulliver noticed Leo standing up and remarked, "Leo, are you trying to impress the Zardinger family? Do you think they'd notice you?" Leo raised an eyebrow, confused by Gulliver's statement, but calmly explained, I'm going home now. Leo, with his hands in his pockets, casually walked out of the classroom. I'm not interested in those kinds of things. Unlike you, hearing Leo's sarcasm, Gulliver was stunned, unable to respond. He flushed with anger and yelled at Leo from behind. I'm not interested either, I just want to see Celia Zerdinger as a rival. But Leo wasn't listening and simply waved goodbye. Gulliver was still trying to explain. I mean it. Back at home, Leo quickly changed clothes and headed to the training room. After training for a while, he now held a wooden staff. Staring at it intently, lost in thought, Leo touched the wall and thought, even though I'm not neglecting my physical training, after a moment, he picked up a wooden sword from the floor and headed to the courtyard. My body is definitely better in this life, he thought, as he was pondering. A voice called out, what are you thinking about, so deep in thought, sensing danger? Leo looked up. He saw his mother, Reina, swinging a sword towards him. Leo quickly raised his sword, blocking the attack, but because he hadn't been paying attention, he was forced to step backward. Leo landed gracefully and swung his sword through the air. It's not just, but Reina interrupted. It's been a while since I've trained. Reina assumed a fighting stance, her eyes fixed sharply on Leo. You can't get into Lumine with mediocre talent. With that, she swung her sword. This is your final test, Leo. She leaped into the air and swung her sword at Leo. Leo blocked the attack, the two swords colliding and sending sparks flying. Reina smirked. Should I get a little more serious? Leo's hand trembled slightly as he blocked the attack. After a brief struggle, he pushed Reina back into the air and retreated, his sword clanging against the ground. Leo, not giving up, panted heavily, sweat pouring down his face. He raised his sword. Aren't you being too harsh, Mom? But Reina was unyielding, swinging her sword with a fierce expression. While blocking all my attacks, and then like a demon from hell, she charged at Leo. What are you talking about? But as she realized something was wrong, Reina's eyes widened. Oh no, I used too much power, as Reina's sword was about to pierce Leo's eyes. She thought, if Leo can't dodge this, but right then, Leo dodged to his right, avoiding Reina's sword by just a few strands of hair. Leo became serious, watching his mother's sword movements. Then he charged forward, swinging his sword unreservedly towards Reina. In her ruby-red eyes, the image of the sword was reflected. A second later, Leo had knocked Reina and her sword to the ground. He stood over her, asking, Are you okay? Mom. Reina looked at the sword close to her face, then up at Leo and thought, just how deep is this child's talent? After taking back her sword, Reina brushed the dust off her clothes and asked, Leo, are you still planning on going to Lumine? Lumine Academy, the hero academy for humans. Leo occasionally looked at himself in the mirror, connecting his reflection with his past life. Kyle, among the 4 hero academies of different races, where the heroic annals are recorded. This is where my record is most likely to be kept, and with that, Leo smiled at his mother and replied, Of course, Reina, already aware of his intention, said, The Zardinger family is visiting Delan and will be staying at our estate. Leo was surprised. The Zardinger family is staying at our house, Reina explained. Yes, I'm not too happy about it, but I'll ask Viscount Gis Zardinger to pass on the Zardinger spirit technique to you. She patted Leo on the head, smiling. With that technique, you'll be strong enough to enter Lumine next year. Leo, looking at his mother's hand patting his head, replied, The Zardinger spirit technique, dragging out the last few words adorably. Then, Leo sighed and smiled at his mother. Mom, but I'm planning on going this year, outside the Plove family residence. In a corner of the courtyard, guards stood watch on all sides. On the back of a carriage, sounds could be heard from within. Someone was thinking, why is he relying on a place like this? Black-booted feet stepped down from the carriage. It was Celia Zardinger, 15 years old, a swordswoman, of the Zardinger family. She looked around blankly, wondering, why didn't they just rent a whole hotel? After placing her large suitcase on the ground, she was still thinking, I just want to focus on the Lumine entrance exam. Why a small house like this? At that moment, a man's voice called out. Celia, it was Gis Zardinger, the Viscount of the Zardinger family. He seemed to recognize Celia's displeasure and apologized for someone having said they didn't care about the Zardinger family. Hearing this, Celia scoffed arrogantly. A knightly education that doesn't know the usage of a bell is not worth seeing, is it? Gis Zardinger didn't pay any mind and said, My opinion differs somewhat. The scene shifted to inside the mansion, where maids were busy carrying Celia's luggage. Gis and Celia were standing before the owners of the estate. Gis bowed his head. It's a pleasure to meet you, Reina Plove, the lady of the Plove family, said. Welcome, Gis Zardinger. Standing beside her was Leo's father, Dade Plove, the head of the Plove family. Gis turned to Celia and said, "Greet them, Celia, and this is Count Plove." Celia put a hand on her chest and bowed politely. "I am Celia Zardinger," she said coldly. "I look forward to your care." Reina kindly approached her. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Celia," she thought to herself. A young plump little lamb. When she first saw Reina, Celia was taken aback, thinking, wait, black hair, red eyes. She saw Reina's presence and thought, could she be someone from the family? As if sensing her thoughts, Reina introduced herself. "Reina Plove, what's your relationship with her?" After the introductions, the maids were carrying Celia's luggage to her room. Inside her room, Gis's voice could be heard. "We stopped by the Royal Academy of Delan earlier. Next to them were bowls filled with white, fluffy treats. It was bustling with all the students gathered there," he continued. "But I heard that Leo said he wasn't interested in us and had already gone home." Gis stated this, and Reina, not too surprised, responded, "The Zardinger family's mighty reputation is truly disappointing." She bowed with a joyful, flushed face, saying, "If that makes you unhappy, I apologize on behalf of my son. He only cares about training." Reina picked up a steaming cup of tea. Suddenly, Gis asked, "What kind of child is Leo?" Below, in the training yard, Leo and Celia were sparring, their swords clashing loudly. In the room, Reina replied, "Indeed." She stirred the sugar she had just added to her tea and said, "He possesses unbelievable talent." Gis, seeing his sister's conviction, asked, "Do you really believe that Leo is worthy of inheriting the Zardinger flame?" Below, the spar was approaching its end, Reina responded. "It's not because he's my son. I believe he's more than worthy." Gis smiled gently. "If you say so, I'll look forward to it." But after a brief pause, he suddenly became serious. "However, I will need to examine his potential myself." Below, Leo unleashed a blow on Celia, putting her on the defensive. Unable to retaliate, Leo's determined gaze was unyielding, confident of his victory over Celia. In Leo's private training room, he sat in the middle of the floor, focusing his energy. A blue aura emanated from the silver ring on his left hand. His eyes were sharp and resolute. Leo smiled, looking at the blue energy on his hand, and said, "Finally, a vessel that can contain everything is complete." He pondered the reason why he hadn't learned aura manipulation yet. It was so that when he received aura, his body would naturally adapt to it. Leo recalled the events of 5,000 years ago when Erebus launched his all-out attack on humanity, and his comrades had fallen in battle. He thought, if only in my previous life I had been able to completely control that power and the essences of those people. Kyle had seemed helpless. But Leo was different. He was thinking, it was a disaster, but in this life I will control it perfectly. Leo slowly stood up, thinking, first, aura manipulation. At that moment, a voice called out from behind him, "You're Leo Plove." "Right." Leo turned around, puzzled. It was Celia, standing there with her hand on her hip, looking at him. Celia smiled at Leo and said, "Looks like you've mastered the basics quite well. I'll give you special instruction in swordsmanship." How does that sound? Celia was thinking. And I can get some praise points from her too. But Leo didn't pay attention to her offer of swordsmanship instruction. He asked, "Who are you?" Celia introduced herself proudly. "I am Celia Zardinger." She opened her eyes wide and confidently said, "The world calls me the Sword Princess." An average person would have been thrilled to hear that, but Leo simply stood up and replied indifferently, "Is that so? Thanks for the offer, but I have no intention of taking lessons from someone with inferior skills." Hearing this, Celia's face turned red with anger. She yelled, "Are you saying you're stronger than me?" But Leo calmly explained, "If it's a fight to the death, you might be stronger because I can't use aura yet. But with swordsmanship, that's a different story." As if a switch had been flipped, Celia's eyes suddenly turned cold, staring intently at Leo. Then, she looked around, noticing a row of wooden swords on a rack in the center. She went over and pulled one out. Celia swung the sword and walked toward Leo, seemingly wanting to have a match. "All right, if you're so confident in your skills, then let's have a sparring match." But Celia was probably too confident in her abilities. So she acted as if nothing was happening, thinking, "You think if you learn aura, you'll be stronger than me? I'll teach you a lesson." At the same time, Celia also made a bet. "If I win, you'll be my servant for a week." Leo was intrigued and smirked. "And if I win?" Celia didn't hold back, pointing her sword at Leo. Then, she grinned and said, "Then I'll be your servant." Hearing this, Leo bent down and picked up a wooden sword from the ground. Leo held the sword, pointed his finger at Celia, and said, "Then let's begin. Shall we?" As soon as he finished speaking, the two lunged at each other. Two energies, blue and red, clashed, the sound of wooden swords clanging echoed. Celia, avoiding Leo's attacks, thought, his speed is not bad. Seeing Leo charging towards her, Celia didn't hesitate. She also ran toward him, thinking. However, that's not enough. Leo was a man of few words and many actions. He hadn't said a word since the beginning of the match. Leo focused on his battle, his eyes calm. As Leo swung his sword, a huge amount of energy was hidden inside. Even Celia, when she blocked the attack, had to take a few steps back. She thought, what kind of power is this? The force of Leo's attack made the floor crack, forcing Celia to quickly retreat, but Leo became even stronger. Not stopping but continuing to run toward Celia with his sword, Celia, terrified, stood frozen, thinking, I can't block that. The sword Leo was wielding formed an arc and pointed straight at Celia's face. But she couldn't react in time. Leo, unsurprisingly, was indifferent and said coldly, Aura armor. Isn't this supposed to be pure swordsmanship practice? Now, a red aura was surrounding Celia, protecting her. Hearing that, she stammered, it's just a reflex. Leo, seeing this, intentionally teased, well, it seems like I was going to win anyway. Understanding the mockery in his words, Celia shouted angrily, what? Leo turned his wrist as if to remove his ring, and said, controlling aura is a difference like the heavens and the earth. After taking the ring off, he threw it to the ground and said, let's test that, shall we? Seeing the heavy ring as it clunked on the floor, Celia thought, a magic, weighted bracelet. Leo smirked, staring intently at Celia. Then, he furiously charged toward Celia with his sword. It was like Leo was possessed, relentlessly attacking the shield around Celia with his wooden sword. Seeing her wooden sword shatter, but Leo still wouldn't stop. Celia's eyes widened in shock, and she thought, how can this be? Seeing the emotionless face swinging toward her, Celia thought, he's so barbaric, a madman. The scene shifted to outside the yard where Reina and Gis were talking. As they walked, Reina noticed Leo standing in a corner of the yard, lost in thought. Reina called out, Leo. Leo quickly approached her. Reina introduced Gis and said, please introduce yourself, he is our guest. Leo respectfully bowed and said, I am Leo Plove. Gis also calmly extended his hand and said, I am Gis Zardinger. You probably already know, but I am your uncle. Leo also politely reached out and shook his hand. Gis said, it's a pleasure to meet you. Reina shrugged and asked, have you met Celia yet? Leo glanced back at the two knights carrying Celia out on a stretcher, and hummed in response. Celia, now unconscious, was lying on the stretcher with a dazed look, as if she still couldn't believe what had happened. The soldiers were shocked and said, my lady, what happened? Get the lady to a doctor. Gis anxiously ran over, asking, what happened? A soldier replied, it's like this. After hearing everything, Gis was shocked. He looked at Leo, who was annoyed by the noise, and thought, he defeated Celia with a body that hasn't grasped aura manipulation yet. Gis approached him and said, it's amazing that you defeated Celia. Leo didn't hold back, and replied truthfully, she underestimated me. Gis wasn't surprised by his niece, and asked, what did you two bet? Leo said proudly, the loser will serve the winner. Thinking about Celia obeying him, Leo was excited and said, Celia Zerdinger will be my maid for the next week. Gis chuckled. Gis suddenly turned serious and said, keeping your word is important, but Celia is from the Zardinger family. Gis tried to intimidate Leo, saying, you can't order her around like a servant. Sensing the oppressive atmosphere around Gis, he quickly retracted it and extended his hand gently, saying, I hope you will. In return, I'll give you another reward. For example. But before he could finish, Leo refused directly. I decline. Gis was shocked. He didn't expect someone to refuse his request like that, Leo calmly explained. This is a bet between me and Celia, as long as she carries the Zardinger name. She needs to take responsibility, Gis countered. Even if I were to offer to teach you the Zardinger family's aura control method, Leo shrugged, I believe a method given to me in exchange for letting your niece keep her dignity wouldn't be worth learning. Hearing the mockery in his words, Gis said sternly, Leo Plove, you just declared that you will use the Zardinger family's direct descendant as your servant. And the Zardinger family's aura control method is worthless, is that correct? Leo replied without fear. Yes, Gis calmly said. Don't you see that such a declaration is rude? Leo replied. I have no intention of disrespecting the Zardinger family. Leo placed a hand on his chest and said politely, Sir Gis, if your intention was to reward me for defeating Celia by teaching me the aura control method, I would have happily accepted it. He wasn't lying, nor did he feel he had done anything wrong, Leo said. However, you said that it was a gift to cover up Celia's defeat. That means, at this moment, two soldiers ran to them. My lady has finally woken up. Over there, Leo continued. You believe that if Celia wasn't careless, she wouldn't have lost to me. However, even if Celia had been fully focused, I still would have won. Hearing that, Reina was very pleased with her son's response. Gis smiled, thinking, he refused because he doesn't like my way of acting. Truly, an extraordinary child. Then he waved at the two soldiers, but in his mind, he thought, if only a child like him was a member of the Zardinger family. Gis didn't test Leo anymore. He ordered the soldiers, take Celia to the servants' quarters. Hearing this, the two soldiers were utterly shocked. After giving that order, Gis looked at Leo and called, Leo. Leo replied respectfully, yes, Sir Gis. Gis said gently, in an informal setting, you can always call me uncle. Hearing this, Leo smiled and replied, yes, uncle. The sun was setting, and the moon had risen into the sky. Gis watched Leo's back as he left. Then, he turned to Reina. Sister, you asked me to teach the boy the Zardinger's aura control method. Right, Reina nodded and hummed in agreement. Gis placed his hands on his hips and said, as for my brother, I will try to convince him to let Leo learn the Phoenix breath. The next morning, in a bright and clean room, light streamed in, creating a beautiful scene. Celia had woken up, her face red with anger and said, I am Celia, and I'll be serving you for the next week. Celia was wearing a maid's uniform, her face red, and stood before Leo, saying, young Master Leo. Leo, who had been engrossed in a book, looked up, a smirk playing on his lips. It suits you well, he said, seeing Celia still blushing and bashful. Leo made an honest remark. Who would have thought that your usual elegant style would be so fitting with this simple maid outfit? Quite the combination. Celia was trembling with anger. She clenched her small fists and said, I know I'm beautiful, but if you keep saying things like that. Leo, not wanting to listen, interrupted her, saying, I didn't mean to make you angry. Sorry. Leo suddenly recalled his past life. It seemed he was thinking of Dueno. There was a hint of sadness in his voice as he said, I had a friend who greatly admired beauty. It seems his habits have influenced me. Leo sighed helplessly as he remembered his friend, but his eyes were filled with sadness and longing. Leo remembered a colorful box. He remembered Dueno's calm words. The beauty of eternity is unparalleled. If I return to this world, I will. At that time, the blacksmith Dueno was sitting in a field full of green grass, surrounded by fawns and white rabbits. He laughed heartily and said, spend the rest of my life spreading beauty to everyone. Hearing this, Celia sighed and replied, you have a wonderful friend who knows how to appreciate and praise beauty. Leo's thoughts drifted back to the joyful days before the war, 5,000 years ago, when all five of them would gather. Someone said, the problem is, he's too honest. Back then, even though she was very assertive, Lycina's was still more beautiful than anyone. Even Luna. Because of his art, Dueno was very humble and said, please be my nude model. I even brought a sketchbook. Lycina's was speechless. Then, both Lycina's and Luna pounced on Dueno, giving him a good thrashing, while Lycina's and Aaron stood by, laughing at the scene. Back in the present, Celia noticed the book on Leo's lap. She thought to herself, is that some kind of training manual? She stared at the book, then asked, what are you reading? Leo held up the book for her to see and asked, this. I used to read this a lot when I was little. After a moment, he said, The Great Hero of the Beginning. Celia recalled reading the same book when she was 5. She was doubtful. Huh? A storybook? Celia just hummed and didn't reply. She ignored Leo sitting on the chair and, looking around, went straight to the bookshelf. Celia looked up at Leo's bookshelf. She said, looks like you like The Great Hero of the Beginning. Huh? She added. The average research on that great hero probably can't compare to yours, Leo honestly replied. I'm just gathering the results. Celia curiously reached out to take a book from the shelf and said, but, she pushed the book back. There seemed to be a lot of books about Kyle, huh? Leo nodded honestly. In the stories of the great heroes, there are many things that are difficult to attribute to a specific hero. Leo suddenly smiled in the sunlight. He seemed lost in thought and said, I think those achievements are probably his. Celia closed the book she was reading and said in surprise, he's probably a con man who wants to steal the achievements of other great heroes. Leo looked up at her and called out a very familiar name. Kyle. Celia pushed the book that had been handed to her and said, most people think so. Of course, I think so too, Leo said in shock. So that's what everyone thinks of me. Huh? Celia asked. Puzzled, Leo got up from the chair and looked at Celia, saying, let's have breakfast and start training. Shall we? Celia, looking extremely obedient on the surface, said, young master, if you allow me, may I train with you? But in her heart, A sinister plan was forming. I will find out the secret behind your strength, Leo. As if sensing Celia's intentions, said, it's a bit hard to keep up. Are you sure you'll be all right? Hearing this, she paused, as if trying to understand Leo's words. After realizing what he meant, Celia angrily yelled, I am Celia Zardinger, and so, the clatter of wooden swords clashing filled the training room. Celia, now changed into her training clothes, was panting heavily on the floor, sweat pouring down like rain. Leo, on the other hand, showed no signs of fatigue. He rested his sword across his shoulders and looked at Celia. When your stamina reaches its limit, your speed and reaction time will slow down, and there will be more gaps between your movements. When that happens, you'll reveal your weakness, just like before. Celia, sitting on the floor, gasped for breath. Is overusing your body really beneficial for training? Leo replied, yeah, I think young people these days are too weak. Then, Leo secretly affirmed to himself, compared to the past, aura technology has developed a lot. Maybe that's why people don't care about physical training as much as they used to. Aura can enhance the body's strength. Celia, feeling mocked, trembled and pushed herself up, replying, what do you mean weak? But Leo didn't pay much attention. He just sighed and thought, if the body is trained, aura will also be strengthened. Celia was now extremely angry. She stood up, wiped the sweat from her face, and pointed her sword at Leo. Her face was flushed with anger. Don't underestimate me. Celia, sword in hand, charged at Leo, yelling, you white-haired jerk. But Leo just used one move to send Celia flying a distance away. She fell heavily to the floor with a painful thud. This made Celia even angrier. She shouted furiously, Why can't I win? Seeing this, Leo went over and said, hard, isn't it? Celia looked up at him with angry eyes, a hint of confusion mixed in. Then, Leo gave her the magic bracelet he had worn for a long time, saying, take it. Celia reached out and took it, saying, thank you. But as soon as she touched the bracelet, its weight made Celia kneel to the ground. Leo, not too surprised, explained that it was a bracelet with gravity magic. Leo's face looked extremely pleased as he said, from tomorrow onwards, wear it during training. The scene changed to that afternoon in the backyard of the mansion. The sun was gradually setting. Celia seemed to be training. She was out of breath and said, stop. Behind her stood Gis. Watching the training session, he stroked his chin and thought to himself, this will be a good experience for her. Before she goes to Lumine, crushing her pride at least once will be a good thing. With that thought, Gis called out to Leo, who turned to look at him. Leo calmly walked to the tree where Gis was standing and replied, you called. Gis said, Leo, I'm thinking of asking the head of the family to allow you to inherit the phoenix breath. Leo seemed quite surprised when he heard that. He thought to himself, the phoenix breath. In his mind, he pictured a phoenix spreading its wings. He wondered, is that the origin of the Zardinger family's aura technique? It's said that only those who are recognized within the family can inherit that technique. Hearing the conversation, Celia interrupted, almost 100% certain that father won't agree so easily. Hearing this, Gis said, that's why I have a condition. Celia asked, puzzled, a condition? Gis calmly said, pass the Lumine entrance exam. Hearing this, Celia came closer, puzzled, huh? The Lumine entrance exam is an actual battle. Celia couldn't believe it and said, hey, a kid who can't even use aura, it's too dangerous. Leo, who hadn't said anything so far, smiled confidently and said, real combat experience, yeah. It's true, I have nothing. At this moment, he remembered Kyle from his past life. He too had fought alone against those who had harmed humanity. Leo could affirm that, in this life, this was it. Gis turned to ask Leo's opinion. What do you think, Leo? Leo replied, father and mother. Leo bowed his head slightly and said, assuming they agree with my wish, then I agree. Hearing his answer, Gis smiled knowingly. He thought to himself, as expected, the boy intends to take the exam this year. After giving a satisfactory answer, Leo ran back to the training field and said, we've rested, let's start again, shall we? Seeing this, Celia was also not to be outdone. She started running after him and replied, you think I can't keep up? The scene changed to a week later. It was the day of the Lumine entrance exam. In the waiting hall, students were standing around talking to each other. Spotting Celia standing in the middle of the room, the students started discussing animatedly, that's Celia Zardinger. I can't believe we get to see the Sword Princess. Someone noticed that she had someone with her and said hesitantly, who's that guy next to her? Celia, who was used to this, turned to Leo and said, are you worried, young master? Leo let out a breath and said, not at all. Leo kindly reminded her, shouldn't you change your way of speaking? As if enlightened, Celia exclaimed. Just then, they heard someone call out from behind, Celia, Both of them turned around at the same time to see who was coming. It was Gulliver. He couldn't hide his surprise at seeing Leo. Leo Plove, Gulliver, showing disdain for Leo, said, "You can't use aura, why are you here?" But he was respectful to Celia, saying, "Celia, it's been a while, how have you been?" But as soon as he finished speaking, both Leo and Celia ignored him, not even answering his question. Gulliver was left with no choice but to introduce himself. "I am Gulliver Trayton. The last time you came to the school, I greeted you," he said confidently. "I am known as the greatest genius archmage of Dalan." Hearing this, Celia replied arrogantly, "Sorry, but I don't remember who you are at all." With that, Celia took Leo's hand. Ready to leave, she pulled Leo forward and said, "Let's go," leaving Gulliver standing there, stunned. However, after walking for a while, they heard someone call out, "Celia." From behind, two white-haired figures approached. Celia seemed surprised when she saw them, while Leo looked puzzled about who they were. The taller white-haired one was Abad Llewellyn, 16 years old, from the Llewellyn family. The shorter one was Chelsea Llewellyn, 14 years old, also from the Llewellyn family. It seemed that the students were siblings. One of them said, "Long time no see, Celia." The Llewellyn siblings approached Celia, noticing Celia's tension as she tightly clenched her fist. Leo quietly asked, "Who are they?" She quickly replied, "The Llewellyn siblings." Celia didn't seem to like them much. She said, "From the same lineage of heroes of the Lordran Empire. Children of the Llewellyn family." The more she spoke, the more agitated Celia became. "Those two will be with us, so we absolutely can't lose to them. Leo, we can't let the Zardinger family lose to the Llewellyn family." Leo hummed in response, "Even though I'm from the Plove family." Abad and his younger sister approached and said, "Long time no see." Celia, with her hands on her hips, coldly replied, "Yeah, it's been a while." Abad Llewellyn, he looked at Leo and asked, "Who's that standing next to you?" Celia coldly waved her hand and replied, "This is Leo from the Plove family, a noble family in the kingdom of Delen." Hearing this, Leo frowned and pictured his small, warm home. Upon hearing that it was just a noble family from a small kingdom, Abad coldly glanced at Leo and said, "Just a small fry? Huh, I see." Feeling insulted, Leo also glanced at Abad. The Llewellyn siblings arrogantly turned to leave. Before disappearing, Abad sneered, "The top spot will definitely be mine. Celia, let's go." Chelsea, the young girl, obediently replied, "Yes, brother." Celia hated arrogant people like them. She said angrily, "Those arrogant people, I'll definitely crush them." Just then, a golden-haired man appeared on the upper floor. The light from the lamp shone directly on him. He looked around and said, "It seems everyone has gathered here." Hearing the noise, all the students turned to look. Both Leo and Celia looked up seriously. The golden-haired man, who was adjusting the microphone, was Albi Zarin Jumani, a professor at the Jum Academy. He tapped the microphone and said, "My name is Albi." Celia was shocked to hear this name and exclaimed, "Impossible! Albi, the sorcerer of Mon." Leo, clueless, asked, "Who is he?" Celia, speechless, turned to explain, "Really? You don't know? He's a hero who is written down in history books." Hearing this, Leo thought to himself, "So, he's one of the so-called heroes of this era." He looked up and carefully observed Albi, who was reading on the high platform. Leo could sense a power hidden in Albi's left eye. The mana in his left eye must be. Leo saw a golden power and a red power, he guessed. The challenges include duels and monster extermination. At this moment, Albi was informing the students that they would take turns fighting, but then, a flame burst from his hand and burned the announcement paper. Albi said casually, "However, I find this method." After throwing away the remaining ashes, he said proudly, "Too boring." The students below were stunned by this action. Albi pulled out a book on the high platform. When he opened the book, a dazzling light erupted. In mid-air, a notification jumped out. "Open the book of heroic deeds, Albi's world." Albi snapped his fingers, and the pages of the book flipped back and forth. Another notification appeared. Opening chapter, The Wilderness. Then, a formation surrounded all the students in the hall. Albi raised one hand, and the words in the book danced in mid-air. It seemed he was trying to bring the students into the world of the wilderness. Celia hadn't had time to prepare. She and the other students were confused. Before the teleportation, the only thing she heard was, "I hate inefficiency." Albi's left eye emitted a large amount of mana, but his gaze was cold. Leo's body was also being pulled into the world of the wilderness, but he was calm as if nothing had happened. He heard Albi say, "So, I'll combine everything and get it over with in one go." Suddenly, Leo remembered when he was studying at the Delen Noble School. His teacher had said, the book of heroic deeds is not just a simple historical record. Its true value lies in its ability. The teacher explained that the realization of the hero's world contained the experiences of past heroes. When warriors could bravely face danger and monsters, they would become heroes. Moreover, when reaching the hero's world, they would be blessed by the gods, and people could inherit the power of the heroes before them. At that time, Leo thought, this is almost like a kind of hero training system. Isn't it? The scene changed to the present. As he had predicted, it was indeed a hero training system. At this moment, his eyes were gradually closing. All the students had been teleported by Albi into Chapter 1 of the Wilderness. Unlike when they were in the waiting hall, everyone now had a weapon they usually used. A voice echoed, "This place is called the Wilderness. The goal is simple, survival," the voice continued. "Whether you cooperate or eliminate each other, do whatever it takes to survive. Those who wish to give up can break the orb they are holding and return. That's all." A student, confused by the voice, asked, "Where is that sound coming from?" Leo looked around for a moment and said, "This place looks exactly the same." He took a few steps forward. In his mind, he pictured the scene from 5,000 years ago, when the forest hadn't been destroyed, and people lived happily together. This place was once a forest of the elves before it was polluted by the witch queen Seletna. Suddenly, a student's voice echoed from afar, full of confusion and fear. "What is this? It's scary." Another student lamented, "I want to go back." Seeing this, someone from the group that had been with Leo spoke sarcastically. "It's just an illusion. How pathetic." But as Leo observed his surroundings, he replied in his mind, "No, you're wrong. Even if this world comes from the memories of the appraiser, everything that happens here is real. The mortal dangers here can really kill people." Thinking this, he suddenly heard a sound, and Leo's eyes widened. Then, a force rushed towards him. Fortunately, Leo was quick and dodged to the side. Behind the trees, a small figure appeared. Leo looked towards it. Behind him was someone who had stabbed deep into the ground. The little girl's footsteps came closer and closer. She said, "We've met before, haven't we?" The one who came was Abad's younger sister, Chelsea. She confidently walked forward and said, "I'm glad I can eliminate someone from the Zardinger family." Leo remained calm and replied, "I'm a member of the Plo family." But it seemed Chelsea didn't care much. She waved her hand, and a source of energy appeared. Chelsea's voice was cold as she said, "You were with Celia." She waved her hand, and then a weapon appeared in her hand, a wind scythe. Leo frowned slightly. It seemed he was thinking, that's a technique that didn't exist in the past, but he quickly drew his sword. Leo thought to himself, basically nothing has changed. Chelsea noticed that Leo had drawn his sword, but she seemed confident that she would win. With that, Chelsea let out a mocking, disdainful smile. Chelsea looked Leo up and down and said, "Even though I'm right in front of you, you're still so calm." It seems that this sentence also did not cause Leo to think. He was still very calm. Then Chelsea held up her weapon and spun it a few times in the air, creating a blue wind. Chelsea used her strength to throw the wind scythe towards Leo, but Leo remained still, like a statue. He didn't move to dodge. Leo was waiting until the wind scythe was about to hit him before he quickly used his sword to deflect it. Chelsea's wind scythe was deflected by Leo and plunged into the ground a long distance away. Chelsea was puzzled. Did he stop it? "I didn't feel him use aura. Is it a difficult to detect type of aura?" After deflecting Chelsea's weapon, Leo sighed and said, "That attack was too simple. Instead of that, why don't we join forces?" Leo wanted to form an alliance and said, "Here, the ones who survive the longest will get the most points. As a mage, don't you need to pass at least one test?" But as soon as he finished speaking, while waiting for a reply, Chelsea suddenly burst out laughing. It seemed that Leo's attempt to cooperate was unsuccessful. As Chelsea silently created a wind that made the surrounding leaves swirl, Chelsea said coldly, "Unfortunately, I am a battle mage," meaning a mage who participates directly in battle. Suddenly, her wind scythe reappeared in her hand. Chelsea was surrounded by layers of wind. She said, "You said my attack was too simple, didn't you?" Leo, on his side, shrugged and replied calmly, "Did you hear me? I mean, for wind magic, that attack was too simple for its power." Feeling lectured by someone of a lower status, Chelsea angrily said, "Are you trying to teach me about magic?" A direct descendant of the Llewellyn family. Because of her anger, Chelsea released wind arrows towards Leo. "Let me crush you with these so-called simple attacks." Wind scythe. Wind arrows. But as soon as she released her magic, Chelsea suddenly realized that Leo was no longer where he had been standing. She thought in confusion, "He's not there." Chelsea worriedly thought, "I can't even sense a trace of mana." But as Chelsea turned around to look for Leo, He was already preparing to throw a punch at her. Chelsea thought in confusion, why? When she saw the punch about to hit her, Chelsea let out a scream of terror. Chelsea's wind scythe was thrown into the air, and the birds flew out in all directions at the sound. Unable to withstand it any longer, Chelsea knelt before Leo, groaning in pain. Leo still held his fist, looking coldly at Chelsea and said, "So, should I politely ask you to cooperate with me again?" The scene changed to outside the wilderness world. A screen was projected in the middle of the room where the teachers were sitting to evaluate the students. Someone said in surprise, "Wow, it's finally starting." The screen flickered for a moment. Inside the wilderness, Chelsea was tied to a wooden stake. Below her, Leo was squatting down. Starting a fire, Chelsea shouted a few times, wanting him to let her down. But at this moment, Leo's smile had changed. He looked at Chelsea as if she were delicious prey. The evening quickly arrived, and nocturnal animals gradually emerged to hunt. Below, Leo was still diligently tending the fire beneath the wooden post where Chelsea was tied. By now, she was covered in a chaotic sweat, and she half opened her eyes with an annoyed grunt. Suddenly, a gust of wind blew, scattering sparks. To avoid them, Chelsea tried to pull back, but realized she was bound. Seeing the flames rising higher, she panicked and exclaimed, "What is this, Leo?" Adding more firewood, asked, "Will you cooperate with me?" Chelsea, stubbornly gritting her teeth, refused, "Never." Suddenly, she angrily yelled, "I don't need anyone but my brother, Wind Scythe." But when she tried to summon her weapon, she found she couldn't. A small magic circle was appearing on her wrist, and she was bewildered, realizing that Leo had anticipated this and prepared thoroughly. Leo tugged on the rope in his hand and said, "It's a mana-restricting skill." He thought to himself, "I don't have much mana, so it can't last long." Leo coldly jerked the rope and continued, "You think I'd let you concentrate like that?" Then Leo acted mysteriously. Seeing the rope about to be untied and the flames spreading towards her, Chelsea panicked and screamed, "Wait, stop, it's too hot." The high flames caught the hem of her dress. Taking advantage of this, Leo quickly probed, "Cooperate, and I'll stop." This time, Chelsea obediently replied, "I will." Seeing that she had agreed, Leo still did not untie her. He calmly stated, "Swear on your family's name." Chelsea responded, "I swear." Chelsea seemed truly terrified, and she cried as she said, "I swear on the name of the Llewellyn family that I will cooperate." Seeing this, Leo cheerfully loosened the rope. He thought to himself, "Kids are so easy to manipulate." After the rope was loosened, Chelsea fell from the wooden post. At this point, Leo slowly stood up. He quickly caught Chelsea gently, and when she opened her eyes, she heard his voice. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Llewellyn Mage." Once again, the scene shifted back to the hall of the lecture room. Most of the students and teachers were intently watching the screen in front of them to see how this year's students would perform. At the highest point, Professor Albee was also focused on the students. On the screen, two students were fighting each other, seemingly very enthusiastically. Albee thought to himself, "None of them are up to par, choosing to fight each other. How foolish." The screen seemed to switch to other students. Albee frowned and thought, "Only two of them are getting straight to the point." Albee looked at the screen, thinking of the names of the two people, Celia Zerdinger and Abad Llewellyn. In the wilderness, they were cooperating to kill a monster. And it seemed this was what Albee wanted. Albee was highly impressed with the two. The future of the Republic will be bright. At this moment, the screen switched to Chelsea and Leo, who were also cooperating to fight a monster. Albee seemed interested in this and grunted in acknowledgement. Looking at Leo's cold and serious face, he thought, "Leo Plove." Then, thinking about the scene where he used fire to threaten Chelsea, he mused, "That fire trick was childish, but getting Chelsea Llewellyn to cooperate will ensure a passing score. Their power is the same as Celia and Abed." But, looking at Leo's face, which showed no panic or fear, Albee exclaimed, "He's a surprising dark horse." Meanwhile, in the wilderness, Chelsea's arrow pierced through the monster's body. Following that, Leo jumped up and swung his sword, slicing off the monster's head. After dealing with the monster, Leo landed softly on the ground. Chelsea, standing beside him, remarked, "I have to say, being with a knight really makes things much easier." Then she turned to Leo and asked, "Let me ask you something. What kind of aura do you use?" "I can't sense any mana from it." "Ask this," Leo honestly replied. "I don't know how to use aura." As if hearing a joke, Chelsea laughed and said, "What? How can you not have an aura?" Leo also honestly explained, "Like everything else, the foundation is important." At this moment, another monster was lurking behind them. Leo continued, "For example, wind magic. What is the foundation of wind magic?" By now, Chelsea had noticed something was amiss. Her eyes flashed, and she glanced slightly behind her. Chelsea swung her hand, sending a wind scythe towards the monster hiding in the distance by the tree. When she confirmed that the monster had died, with blood flowing from its body, she lowered her hand. After one move that killed the monster, she proudly boasted, talking about wind magic in front of a Llewellyn. "You are truly audacious," but Leo didn't seem to care much about those words. He moved forward and said, "You have power, I admit. But you use it wrong." Chelsea, behind him, angrily yelled. "You are really," but before she could finish, Leo raised his hand, signaling to stop. "Wait, stop." Leo slowly walked towards the monster that had just been killed. Chelsea followed. When she saw the slimy thing Leo was holding, she asked. Confused, "It's like a mummy," Leo explained. "I've been through similar things before." He thought to himself, "Now I understand the condition to pass this exam." But just as he could figure out a way to complete the exam, something was approaching, and he opened his red eyes to look at it. Leo quickly and nimbly grabbed Chelsea, who was standing beside him, and leaped away from the sudden and unidentified attack. At this moment, a familiar voice rang out. "Almost got her. We need to take down Chelsea Llewellyn first." As Leo pulled Chelsea back, they both looked up to see who was attacking. Rapid footsteps were approaching. Gulliver spoke with a disdainful tone. "The other one is nothing," he sneered provocatively at Leo. His eyes filled with disregard. Then Gulliver commanded the other students. "Attack together." Leo, now standing, clenched his fist, looking at Gulliver and the other students rushing toward him. His eyes flashed with a powerful light, yet they were filled with cold detachment. He quickly threw a punch, knocking down the white-haired student who was rushing towards Chelsea. One punch was all it took to defeat the student, and Gulliver's face was filled with panic. He didn't expect that someone inferior to him could so easily defeat a student. Before engaging in battle, Leo instructed Chelsea. "Watch my back." Chelsea, still not recovered from the previous attack, replied with a trembling voice. "Okay." Gulliver, realizing that his team was in trouble, shouted an order. "What are you waiting for?" At this moment, Chelsea unsheathed her wind scythe, while Leo was ready to fight at any moment. Leo coldly glanced at them, appearing very excited. After a while, it seemed the fight wasn't going well. Now, Gulliver was frantically running away from Leo. Looking at the endless forest ahead, he thought in fear, "I can't end up like this." He gritted his teeth and sprinted ahead, thinking, "I just need to find another group." On the other side, when Celia saw a familiar figure running past, she thought, that guy is... However, she couldn't remember where she had seen him. She turned to Abad and said, "Let's go this way." The two went forward, suddenly stopping, their expressions identical, stunned. In front of them were Leo and Chelsea, with a few monsters and a group of students lying scattered on the ground. When Chelsea saw Abad, her eyes lit up and she called out, "Brother!" She rushed to hug Abad tightly. He stroked her head and said, "Chelsea, you are safe," Celia asked suspiciously. "Why are you two together?" Leo rubbed his hair and sighed before explaining. "I suggested a partnership." Celia replied, confused. "Never thought that stubborn girl would agree." Leo smiled mischievously and said, "I persuaded her." Sensing something was suspicious, Celia stepped closer and said, "What did you do?" Leo did not answer but instead went to a student lying on the ground, who was now getting up. He said, "Let's go." Chelsea exclaimed in surprise, "Why is he helping them?" The student who was helped up rushed to his companion, asking if he was all right. It was at this moment that Leo spoke. "We don't have to fight each other anymore. Let's work together to fight this world." Everyone was shocked and confused, asking, "Fight this world?" Leo then explained, "There is a change in the wilderness. Have you seen these corpses?" he said. And Abad and Celia finally noticed the monsters behind them. Leo walked to one of the monsters, the blood from which was now evaporating from the ground. It's as if their moisture has been completely drained. Then he turned to the other three and said, "That's not all. Where did all the other monsters go?" As soon as he finished speaking, Celia realized, surprised and praising, "Wow, you are right." Leo continued to explain, "It's as if they are all scared of something. There's a high-level monster that appeared and scared them off." At this point, the other three seemed to understand. Abad said, "I see. The hero's battle albi is to defeat the high-level monster." As soon as he finished speaking, a thunderous sound echoed from behind them. A mystical light appeared, along with the silhouette of something moving. A dark power was engulfing everyone. Everyone was panicking and worried, except for Leo, who was the calmest of them all, who stated, "It's finally revealed itself." The scene shifted to Gulliver, who was wandering alone in the deep forest. Because it was too dark, he had to turn on his light. He seemed unaware of the danger approaching. Gulliver said, determined, "By any means, I will make you fail, Leo." After walking a little further, he suddenly stopped, seeing something on the ground. When he bent down to look, he cried out in horror, what is that? The light on his lamp was extinguished by a slimy substance. In front of Gulliver, several strange figures appeared, and Gulliver uttered a confused grunt. His yellow eyes were spinning around, and slimy saliva appeared on his face. Facing Gulliver was a high-level spider monster, with its huge mouth wide open, as if it wanted to devour him. The scene shifted to the academy. Inside, some students had already returned, and the screen was showing the conversation between Leo's group. While Albie was intently watching to see how they would handle the situation, below, a student with reddish-brown hair was boasting, "I took down 15, maybe 16 of them," to which another student quickly replied, "I got about the same." Professor Albie looked down, counting the students who had been transferred back to the academy hall, and said, "Currently, there are about 500. All of them have failed." Just then, another teacher rushed onto the platform, frantically whispering, "But Professor Albie, even so, you have to choose 100 people, like other areas, yet in the exam, there are only 50 students left." Albie adjusted his glasses, not wavering in his decision, and replied, "If they don't meet my standards, I am prepared to fail them all." Headmaster Callion, even knowing this, entrusted me with the responsibility. He looked back at the scene of Leo helping the other students up, thinking, a true hero can only be found in times of difficulty. He narrowed his eyes to get a clearer view of Leo. He was certain that Leo Plove had discovered the anomaly in the forest. On the screen, the scene of Leo helping up a female student he and Chelsea had knocked down earlier was playing. Albie wondered, but can he defeat this world? In the wilderness, the remaining students were running together towards a source of strange light. A student with purple hair, while running, complained, "Damn it, it's so dark." Meanwhile, Celia, running ahead, stopped and pointed her sword at the monster, exclaiming, "Hold it, there's something ahead. Be ready." Her sword touched the air, and a small red dot appeared at the tip, surrounded by swirling red energy. When the light was revealed, Gulliver was visible, half his body in the monster's mouth. Celia exclaimed in horror. So, the one behind was the real deal. Abad's expression was no different from Celia's. After regaining his composure, he drew his weapon and aimed at the monster, yelling, "Wind!" But before he could finish his move, Leo stopped him. He looked at the scene and said coldly, "Wake up, Gulliver. Break the crystal." Gulliver, now 2/3 swallowed, managed to open his eyes at the familiar voice and rasped, "Leo." Realizing that Leo's words were true, he gave up his struggle and crushed the crystal in his hand. A beam of light shot out of the monster's mouth and slowly disappeared. Everyone watched this scene intently. This time, no one was there to stop him. Abad raised his staff again and released Wind Fang. He aimed his staff at the monster, small explosions occurring around it, causing the monster to bleed and cry out. The wounds Abad inflicted healed quickly. And he thought, so that's not enough. The other three were watching the scene with their mouths agape, except for Leo, who remained calm, looking at the spider monster lunging towards them. Leo studied the pattern on its body and confirmed, "Indeed, it's a spider princess, Tarantula." On the other side, the purple-haired student jumped up and swung his weapon at Tarantula, saying, "Damn it, take this." But before his weapon could touch it, one of the spider's legs swept across his body, and the student cried out in pain. He was then flung mercilessly to the ground. Seeing this, Celia said, "I will end it with one blow." She placed a crystal on the tip of her sword and unleashed Light Spot. Celia's attack created a large hole in its head, and the monster seemed enraged as it let out a scream, but the wound quickly healed as if nothing had happened. Tarantula bared its sharp fangs and roared at everyone. Seeing her attack was ineffective, Celia exclaimed in disbelief, "No way!" As she said this, Abad was being suspended in the air by the wind and, holding his staff, he stated, "The attacking power of a knight and a mage is as different as day and night." Abad waved his hand, unleashing a tornado. Winds from all directions gathered in one place, and the other students had to hold on to something to avoid being blown away. The winds, like sharp blades, were cutting into the spider monster, causing blood to spray out of it continuously. However, when the tornado stopped, Abad's face was stunned as he stared at the monster in disbelief. Immediately, darkness engulfed him, and Abad's eyes reflected fear as the spider monster lunged toward him. Below, Chelsea drew her wind scythe, looking worriedly at her brother, and said, "Brother, Wind Piercer." Above, Abad had been injured on his arm by the spider's leg. Luckily, Chelsea's attack caused the monster to retract its leg. Abad fell to the ground, and Chelsea rushed to help her brother, asking, "Are you all right?" Abad replied, "I'm fine, thank you." Chelsea, sitting by a tree, the purple-haired student watched the scene in fear and exclaimed, "What kind of monster is that?" Everyone was in a state of panic and worry, someone said. Its regeneration is terrifying. As the spider monster approached menacingly, they could not think of a way to deal with it. At this moment, Leo, who had been quiet until now and had not rushed to fight the monster, stated, "It's the daughter of Salatna, the queen of Tartaros. A monster from Erebus' army that leveled the dungeon." Upon hearing the name, they all thought of the same terrifying name, Tartaros. It was then that Leo thought, Albi's left eye's magic is indeed the magic of the Spirit King. He recalled that in his past life, Tarantula was the disaster that caused the wilderness to become a ruin. It had destroyed the Spirit Tribe's forest, and the right hand of the Spirit King had fought against it. I thought Luna had already destroyed Tarantula. Looking at the monster again, he realized that, it seems the Spirit King's right hand and Abad's body saved it. Or more accurately, it's the infinite life energy within that hand, which is the ring of life. Abad, hearing this, pointed his staff and said, "If this monster is the key to solving the test." "I'll defeat it," Celia quickly interrupted. "Who asked you?" Then both of them charged at the monster at the same time. Collisions and explosions reverberated off the monster's body as it let out several cries. It was then that Leo said, "It will continue to regenerate until you two run out of mana." Hearing this, Abad and Celia turned to look at the spider monster, which was regenerating as if it had not been hurt at all. Celia quickly turned and asked Leo, "So, what do you suggest?" Leo replied, "You two need to cooperate." Hearing the word cooperate, Abad refused without even listening to the plan, stating, "I refuse. I will be the one to score the highest." Celia was not to be outdone. She turned to him and said, "No, it will be me." However, Leo remained calm amidst their rivalry and explained, "If we cannot conquer the hero's world, then we will all fail." Thinking about failure, neither Celia nor Abad wanted that to happen. So they both fell silent. Abad, because of the previous injury, was breathing heavily, and he asked, "Even if we cooperate, we need time to form an attack strong enough to kill it instantly, and no one but the two of us can hold it off long enough." Celia fell silent after hearing this. Behind Leo, Chelsea was staring at him intently, as if deep in thought. Leo, seeing that everyone was discussing without reaching a decision, confidently nominated himself. "Leave it to me." Hearing this, Celia exclaimed in shock, "What? That's suicide. You can't even use aura." Leo stepped forward and replied, "I know, I can only stall for 5 minutes." Abad expressed doubt. What if the attack fails? But Leo turned to him with a confident smile. He bent down and picked up an axe that had been abandoned on the ground and casually responded, "I don't think that will happen." Standing in the bright moonlight, Leo said, "Wind and fire have always been good friends. They are always harmonious together." Seeing this, both Abad and Celia turned to assess each other. Meanwhile, Leo looked at the spider monster lunging towards him, and he smirked mockingly. He suddenly smiled and said, "This reminds me of the old days." Leo gripped the axe and prepared to fight the monster. He swung the axe at the spider monster, and his blue energy swept across it, causing several of its legs to break. Amid the commotion, Leo said to the monster, "Long time no see." Below, Celia and Abad were stunned by what they saw. They didn't expect him to be so strong. Above, Leo quickly launched another attack at the monster, leaving it no time to react, and its head was caved in again. Leo glowed, and with a smirk, he announced, "Monster of Tartaros," while fighting the spider monster. Leo suddenly remembered an incident from 5,000 years ago. Back then, a young boy, also fleeing from a spider monster, got lost in the forest, but ultimately, he was bound by the slow, sticky silk threads. Desperately trying to break free, he cried out, "HNNGH, please," but things were not looking good. As the spider monster bared its sharp, slimy fangs and lunged towards him, the boy, terrified, screamed, "Help!" In his desperation, the boy with the spirit closed his eyes, weeping, and could only call out, "Mommy." But then, a powerful voice exclaimed, "Step back, you vile creature." The boy saw a glimmer of hope. He opened his tear-filled eyes, thinking, "Light." In front of him was a woman, her body enveloped in light, and she held a staff in her hand, seeing her homeland being ravaged by the monster. She spoke coldly, "You dare desecrate my home and devour the right hand of the contract holder." Luna used her power to make the spider monster recoil in fear, but it seemed it was too late. Luna's power had surrounded the monster. However, it was too late. After encasing the monster in power, Luna detonated it, and a blinding golden light enveloped the sky. From the smoke and dust, a young man emerged, saying, "I didn't expect Erebus's influence to spread this far." The boy was startled by the sight of the person in front of him. Kyle approached with a smile, bent down, ripped away the sticky silk threads, and asked, are you okay? The scene shifted back to the present. After delivering a blow to the monster, Leo was now lost in thought. Reflecting on the past, regaining his focus, Leo quickly swung his axe. He thought, indeed, this is the limit when I don't have aura. After pondering for a moment, he suddenly looked down at Chelsea and called, Chelsea. She responded with a confused grunt. Leo turned back and stated firmly, use your wind magic and propel all the weapons nearby toward me. As soon as he finished speaking, a massive leg lunged at the spot where he was standing, but Leo managed to dodge to the side in time. Chelsea, still slightly worried, asked, if you move that fast, you will be hurt while it's being done. Leo, as he blocked the spider monster's attack with his axe, replied to her, I'll grab them, so don't worry, just do it quickly. Hearing his confidence, Chelsea did not think much further. She quickly launched her spell. Asking, which weapons, Leo, while still blocking the spider monster's relentless attacks, replied, any of them. Chelsea's hands swiftly controlled the weapons scattered on the ground, propelling them toward Leo. Meanwhile, Leo's ears were also moving to listen for sounds behind him. He thought, based on the sounds, as he leaped into the air, weapons flew past. Leo could discern that one was a curved short blade and the other was a mid-length sword. Sensing the weapons approaching, Leo quickly grabbed both. Leo coldly glared at the monster and said, taste these. He used the short blade and mid-length sword to continuously slash at the spider monster's legs. Finally, he slashed at the monster's body, causing blood to splatter out. Seeing that the sword he was holding was broken, he commanded, next, below. After hearing that word, Chelsea quickly used wind magic to send more weapons flying towards Leo. A dagger flew up, followed by an arrow. Leo quickly caught them. Next was an axe, which he also grabbed. Leo flung the arrow powerfully at the monster. Then he rushed in and stabbed it with the axe. Seeing this, Celia thought, he's about our age, but that scene, seeing Leo fight without wavering, she thought, it's like the fighting style of a martial god. Below, Celia was still seriously watching the fight, lost in thought, when she suddenly declared, turns out he's not just a pawn. Behind her, Abed faintly heard the comment and looked surprised. Above, the monster's leg hit Leo, causing blood to flow from the wound. Leo's face was fierce. He glanced down at the wound on his cheek and smiled, thinking, I can still feel. He gripped the sword in his hand tighter, thinking, if I can't endure a beast like this, the others will laugh at me in the afterlife. Thinking of his comrades from his past life, Leo felt even more motivated. He cut off another leg of the monster. Next, below, Chelsea said friendly, that's the last one. Leo replied in a slight panic. What? Just then, Celia jumped in, her hand holding her sword and her entire body engulfed in a brilliant red aura. Her hand was slightly trembling as she said, I'm ready, move aside. Celia unleashed a vortex-like attack on the monster, asking, how do you like this, you bug monster? The monster's entire body was engulfed in flames. From within the burning body, a ring fell out, the ring of life that Leo had mentioned. When the spider monster's burnt body fell to the ground, an announcement sounded, Albi's world. The prologue, the wilderness, has been cleared. Celia, exhausted from using all her power in her previous attack, collapsed to the ground, saying, it's over. Celia looked at Leo's back and thought, he really held off the monster for 5 minutes. She was about to say, Leo, what are you doing? When Chelsea excitedly yelled, amazing, that was absolutely amazing. Chelsea's eyes sparkled, and she yelled enthusiastically, you look like a hero, like someone out of a story. Leo calmly replied, is that so? Chelsea continued, yes, I want to become a battle mage, so I want to learn more about close quarters combat, which I'm weak at. Please teach me. Behind them, Celia muttered darkly, I really hope you get to experience Leo's training at least once. Chelsea, naive, still did not understand what was going on. Leo quickly walked over and picked up the ring of life from the ground. He looked at it for a moment and thought, the item is this ring. A faint light emanated from the ring of life, and then a spirit appeared. Seeing the familiar face, Leo immediately knew it was Prince Silid. Leo was happy to see a familiar face and said, Silid, do you remember me? It's me, Kyle. But Prince Silid only smiled and quickly faded away. The light was drawn back into the ring of life, Leo affirmed in his mind. It seems he has become the Spirit King. It seems it's thanks to the treasure that I'll be found. He's obtained the Mana Eyes. A few seconds later, the space in the wilderness shattered and an announcement sounded, starting the countdown to return to the examination area. The countdown started from 5, 4, 3, as each person fell into different spaces. Leo heard a voice. The reward for clearing is the Oath of the Spirit King. Leo was shocked to see a vague figure appear. The space was shattering more and more. Leo opened his eyes wide in shock and said, "It's..." The vague figure looked up at him. The space around them had nearly broken apart. Space returned to reality, and the Lumine Academy was in sight. In a certain building, an old man picked up a notice and read it, stating, "It seems the exam for the western area is over." That man was Alian Biidian, a swordsman and the headmaster of Lumine Academy. A brown-haired boy next to him rubbed his hair in frustration and said, "But the other areas still have many more, by the way." "How many people did Professor Albi pass?" Headmaster Alian cheerfully replied, "Considering the person we're talking about is Albi. That's actually quite a lot, 40 people." The brown-haired boy sighed, saying, "Is that a lot?" Headmaster Alian chuckled and responded, "Don't fuss so much, I was thinking it would only be around 10 people." The boy could only sigh in resignation. He asked, "I'm guessing Celia or Abed came out on top." Headmaster Alian flipped through a few pages and replied seriously, "I heard it was very difficult to choose. And there is someone being recommended to be the representative of the new recruits." The brown-haired boy was shocked. "Professor Albi recommended someone. I can't believe it. Celia Zerdinger or Abad Llewellyn, who is it?" The headmaster was also surprised, but he was very kind as he replied, "It's a name I've never heard before." The brown-haired boy asked, "Really?" In the main hall of the academy, the students who had returned early were looking at the screen, cheering the names. Celia, Abad. But what caught Albi's attention was Leo. He seemed contemplative, observing Leo's actions earlier. Finally, Professor Albi went to see Headmaster Alian, saying, "I recommend Leo Plove as the representative of the new recruits in the Knights Department. The reason is," the headmaster, now stroking his beard, recalled the situation and stated, "I didn't expect Albi to praise him so highly. I wonder what kind of student he is." The reason Professor Albi recommended Leo was that he had the talent to become a hero. In the Academy's bathhouse, steam filled the room, blurring the air. Water overflowed from the soaking tubs below as someone commented, "Such pain needs careful treatment and time to recover." Leo was immersed in a bathtub, murmuring contentedly, "This feels good." He then submerged himself in the water completely, looking utterly relaxed. Suddenly, he remembered the vague figure from the system announcement. The reward for completion is the Oath of the Spirit King. He also recalled the Ring of Life and thought, "When passing through the world of an unknown hero, I won't receive any rewards." The voice echoed, "So why only me?" Leo abruptly sat up in the tub, asking, "What was that?" Before him, Reina suddenly appeared. Leo exclaimed in surprise. "Mother," Reina said. "Leo, do you know why I was expelled from the Zardinger family?" Leo seemed startled and alarmed by his mother's meaningful words. Reina recounted, "When rescuing comrades, she hugged her arm, speaking somberly, 'Ultimately, I lost the fire of Zardinger.'" Leo didn't say anything, but slightly lowered his head. Reina continued, "However, even for a single moment, I don't regret that decision." Then, Reina smiled brightly, looking at her beloved son, and said, "Leo, I want you to use your power and talent for justice. And congratulations on being accepted into Lumine Academy." Then, Reina disappeared. At the space gate of Lumine City, as Leo stepped onto the grass, he heard a voice, "Welcome to Lumeria City, standing tall." Leo looked down at the skyscrapers below. The announcement still echoed, "Please ensure you've collected all your belongings before leaving the gate." Leo looked straight ahead and suddenly said, "The center of the world, Lumeria." In the distance was the academy he had wanted to reach since gaining consciousness in this world. He thought, and that is Lumine Academy. While he was lost in thought, Gis Zardinger, seemingly having arrived some time before, said, "How was your past month, Leo?" Leo greeted him. Gis approached and shook hands with Leo, congratulating him on his victory. "Congratulations on passing the entrance exam." Leo replied honestly, "Thank you. But why are you here?" Gis explained. "Our family has been caught up in an endless debate for the past month. You know why, don't you?" Leo didn't hesitate and answered, "Is it about inheriting the phoenix breath?" Gis put his hand in his pocket, nodded, and said, "Exactly. Although your aunt is no longer a member of the family, you, her son, not to mention." He took something out of his pocket, placed it in Leo's hand, and continued, "The elders were very impressed when you passed the famous Western Region exam." Leo looked at the intricate key in his hand, saying nothing. Seeing this, Gis stated, "This is the subspace key," he instructed. "Open it." And Leo immediately inserted the key into the space beside him. When he touched it, he could see flames engulfing the area. In front of Leo, a door appeared, on which there was a book that looked very precious. The book automatically opened, and a wave of heat came out, causing Leo to squint, but all the pages inside were blank. without a single line of text. Seeing this, Gis said, "Drip your blood onto the page." Leo quickly obeyed, biting his thumb. The drops of blood fell onto the pages. Once again, light shone from the book, illuminating the area. After the blood was dripped, words appeared in the book. Gis asked, "Now you can read this book." Gis placed his hand on Leo's shoulder, empowering him, and said, "Learning the secret arts of the Zardinger family isn't easy, but I feel you will master it in a short time." He smiled kindly and said, "Congratulations on becoming a member of the Zardinger family." The scene shifted to a corner in the town. Leo stood idly, looking around. He muttered, "Is this where Celia wanted to meet?" At this moment, a girl carrying a large stack of books approached. Not looking where she was going, she bumped into Leo, causing the books to fall to the ground. Because they collided, both Leo and the bespectacled girl fell to the ground. With books scattered all around them, the bespectacled girl cried out, realizing that she had bumped into someone. She quickly picked up her books, and also bowed her head apologetically. "I'm sorry for walking without looking." Leo didn't respond from beginning to end. After the bespectacled girl hugged her books and walked away, he suddenly saw something on the ground. Leo bent down and picked up the student ID that was lying on the ground. On the ID was a picture of the bespectacled girl from earlier. Leo read, "Chloe Muller, new student at Lumine Academy." In a cafe, the door of the shop opened, seeing Leo had arrived. Celia said, "Why did you take so long, Leo?" Celia's hands were already full of bags of stuff. Seeing Leo dawdling, she asked, "Uniforms, textbooks, and so much more. There are so many things to buy." Leo, full of remorse, replied, "Sorry, I had to meet with Gis." Hearing that, Celia excitedly asked, "So they've made a decision. What was the result?" Hearing this, Leo held out his hand. A flame suddenly appeared in his palm. Then, his eyes turned a fiery red. Leo's entire body was engulfed in flames. From his back, he unleashed 2 fiery phoenix wings and asked, "Is this how you use it?" Celia was utterly surprised and dropped all her belongings to the floor. She exclaimed in shock, "No way!" Seeing Leo using the family's phoenix fire so skillfully, Celia thought to herself, "It took me 3 weeks just to get familiar with this secret art." Celia was so shocked that she sat on the floor in disbelief, thinking, "What the hell is Leo?" The scene shifted to the next day. At the shore where the waves were crashing, in the sky, seagulls were soaring, and below, a massive ship was docked. Someone said, "A ship has arrived." A student said in surprise, "Wow, it's huge." Behind Leo and Celia, someone was approaching. The person walked to the center of the dock and said, "It is a pleasure to meet all the new students. I am Professor Ain Ilendu, the instructor for the new night students." The students quickly turned their heads to see who was speaking. Professor Ain pointed to the ship on the sea and said, "We will be departing to Lumine now. Everyone, get on board." Professor Ain Ilandu was an ice knight and a lecturer at Lumine Academy. After all the students had boarded the ship, Professor Ain had his people move the ship. On the ship, snacks were prepared for the students to eat. Professor Ain was leaning on the ship's railing, enjoying his glass of wine. The professor's gaze fell directly on Leo and Celia. As Leo was looking around blankly, someone approached him and said, "Hey, you two over there, want to chat a bit?" Hearing someone associate her with Leo, Celia looked over with an angry and dark expression, and said in an icy voice, "What do you mean, you two?" The other person quickly introduced himself. "I'm Kartamer. From the Kingdom of Moria. I'm a 10-year-old alchemist," Kartamer stated arrogantly. "From potions to weapons, I sell everything." He quickly handed his business card to Leo and said, "Don't hesitate to stop by if you need anything during your time at school." Leo took the card and thought, "An interesting child." He replied politely, "It's a pleasure to meet you. I am Leo Plo from the Kingdom of Delon." Kartamer said, "Delon, that means you passed the Western Region exam. Impressive." Next to Leo, Celia was still very angry and snorted. Leo looked around and said, "Am I the only one who feels this situation is strange?" Hearing this, Celia also looked up to observe. Kartamer asked, "What do you mean?" Leo looked at the students grabbing food and said, "It's so peaceful. It feels cold." Celia sighed, seeing that he was too suspicious, and replied, "It's a warm welcome for the new students who have passed the exam. Isn't it normal?" But Leo looked at Professor Ain, who was now watching some birds flying in the sky. Kartamer picked up a cake and said, "That's right, they probably won't be hostile to the students before the start of classes." But just as he finished speaking, the ship suddenly started shaking violently. The furniture on the ship was also shaking. Only Leo was quite calm, as if he had prepared for this. At this moment, from under the sea, a gigantic tentacle rose out of the water. Leo replied to Kartamer's previous comment. Perhaps that's right, they do that. As soon as the tentacle appeared, it slammed down onto the ship's deck where Tomer was standing. He quickly dodged and said in a panicked voice, "What the hell is that?" The other students also screamed in terror. A terrified student cried, "Professor Ain, help me," but the professor was leisurely swirling his glass of wine. Looking very relaxed and saying, "Help, you wish." Professor Ain lifted his glass and took a sip. Then, he said to the students in a serious voice, "All of you are students of Lumine Academy. Candidates for heroes. In danger, you must overcome it yourselves." As he finished speaking, the giant octopus monster rose completely out of the water, aimed at the ship, ready to attack. Below deck, chaos erupted. Food was scattered on the floor, and students trampled over it. The monster began attacking the ship frantically. Amid the chaos, Leo instructed Celia, "Stay calm, Celia." At the same time, he drew his sword and sliced off one of the Kraken's tentacles. Celia also drew her sword, retorting, "Worry about yourself." The monster glared its yellow eyes at her and then splashed a wave of seawater at Celia, causing her to exclaim, "Leo." Too familiar with such situations, stated, "It's a natural reaction for a Kraken. It reacts to heat by spraying water. It's basic knowledge." Celia, completely soaked, angrily glared at Leo. While the two were discussing, a student was grabbed by the monster, who wrapped its tentacle around him and dangled him upside down over the sea. The student cried out in panic, "That damn octopus!" Seeing someone in danger, both Leo and Celia rushed over. Celia slashed the monster's tentacle, causing the student to fall. Leo was no less effective, calmly slashing at the Kraken's body. The tentacle Leo cut off fell right in front of Tomer as he climbed out from under a table. He looked surprised and said, "Celia, being the top scorer in the West is understandable, but what is up with Leo?" While he was wondering, another frozen tentacle fell near him, causing Tomer to freeze in place. He angrily stood up and shouted, "Hey, watch it!" Above him was the bespectacled girl who had bumped into Leo in town. Leo recognized her and thought, "It's that girl." He remembered the scene in the town that day. At that moment, Chloe Muller was using her ice magic to attack the monster. Chloe Muller coldly glanced below and said, "If you can't protect yourself, why not step back?" Although she said this, Tomer wasn't very angry, but just sighed. "Humph, the strong never care when we are caught in the middle of their battles." As if to prove his point, another tentacle fell in front of him, causing Tomer to retreat in fear. This time, the pair who appeared were the Llewellyn siblings. Abad, seeing that everyone was in danger, moved away, saying, "The competition isn't over." Celia Zerdinger. Celia replied angrily, "That feeling is mutual." Only Chelsea looked back at Leo. Noticing her gaze, Leo also looked over. Meanwhile, Professor Ain calmly poured himself another glass of wine, saying, "There are many monsters in the lake leading to Lumine Academy, the Kraken." He then looked at the monster and praised, "It's perfect for a welcome party." Professor Ain watched the students fighting with all their might, and frowned, thinking, as expected, the standout leaders are emerging. First, there was Chen Xia in the east. Then, there was the rival pair, Celia Zerdinger and Abad Llewellyn in the west. Next was the person Leo had bumped into on the street, Chloe Muller in the north. Then, there was the tan-skinned, white-haired youth, Walden Titan in the south. And lastly, Duran Moira in the center. Watching 6 or 7 students working together to fight the Kraken, Professor Ain said to himself, "This year's recruits are excellent." He then lifted his glass and took a sip. When he lowered his glass, Professor Ain's eyebrows furrowed, but the one who impressed me the most, recalling Leo's image of wielding his sword decisively and being utterly calm when facing the monster, Professor Ain thought, "It's that unknown recruit. His swordsmanship has no wasted movements, and he moves as if he knew the Kraken's next move." Suddenly, he smiled with deep meaning and thought, "I will meet him soon for the night course." The ship finally reached the dock. Below, some students were lying on the ground, soaked and disheveled. Tomer, dizzy. The said, "I didn't expect to use up all the elixirs I brought." From the deck, Professor Ain jumped down lightly and said, "You will have to cross this chaotic lake, so it's best to get used to it quickly." After reaching the school grounds, Professor Ain guided the students. "Now, please move to the main hall." At Lumine Academy, in the Electra training field, there were some small discussions. "See, I told you that there wouldn't be anyone normal. I hope there are some interesting ones this year." On the loudspeaker, an announcement was made. "Now, we will begin the entrance ceremony." The outstanding students of this year were organized into rows by Professor Ain. In front of them, he clapped his hands and said, "Please line up by region. The top scorers stand at the head of each row." The announcement rang out again. "The headmaster will give a speech. The person who stepped up was a dignified old man, Kalia Baedian, a swordsman and the headmaster of Lumine Academy. He began his speech. New blood has once again arrived here this year, hoping to become heroes. I have a few words for you, everyone. Please listen carefully. If your dream is to become a hero, then always bet your lives and overcome your limits. Everyone was listening intently. The headmaster threw a punch at the platform he was standing on. After it shattered into pieces, Headmaster Kalia said, "Or you do not belong here," after a series of cool actions from before. Headmaster Kalia was now scratching his head in embarrassment and said, "Was that a bit much?" The students below were speechless. Earth-shattering screams resounded from below. Headmaster Kalia smiled kindly and said, "I can't hear you." The two professors below him were crying silently, thinking the same thing. The longer they teach at Lumine, the more the headmaster's dignified image crumbles. After the headmaster's speech ended, the MC stepped forward and announced, "Now will be the speech from the representative of the new recruits." The MC paused for a moment, inviting the representative to speak. Celia and Abad also looked up at the stage. Chen Xia and Chloe were also waiting. Walden Titan and Duran Moira were also waiting to see who would be called. The MC read the name. Leo Plove. At first he looked shocked. Then, he looked at Albie. The MC said, "Please come up to the stage." Seeing Professor Albie smiling at him, Leo finally understood. Professor had nominated him. He walked towards the stage and took the speech papers. Stepping in front of the entire student body, Leo began to read slowly and confidently from the first line. To all the professors and seniors, the students below were chattering. The representative isn't one of the top scorers. Leo Plove, I've never heard of him. Among them, Duran Moira was silent. Leo read, "We, the new recruits, will now join the ranks of the proud members of Lumine." Walden Titan frowned uncomfortably, thinking, that gaze and that attitude. After reading, he closed the speech and said, "Thank you. I am the representative of the new recruits, Leo Plove." The MC replied, "Thank you, Leo." He continued, "Now, please tell us what your goal is as the representative of the new recruits." Leo smiled. With this smile, he understood something. They wanted him to provoke those who were almost eligible for his position instead of him. But Leo did as they wanted. He said, "Hello, I am the representative of the new recruits, Leo Plove." Behind them, two professors were discussing Nan. "This representative is handling this well. A model student isn't bad," the other replied. "It seems it will be a peaceful entrance ceremony." Leo, with his hands in his pockets, looked confident and stated, "If you want this position, then come and take it." Below, Abad was smirking, and Celia looked surprised. Below, Chen Xia was stunned, while Chloe remained indifferent. This time, both Walden Titan and Duran Moira were dissatisfied and angry. Leo, on the stage, continued provocatively, "No matter who it is." That afternoon, at the Lumine Academy dormitory, someone praised, "You did well today." The professor who led the students to the dormitory said, "Starting tomorrow, for 1 week, exploratory classes will begin." He said, "During this time, regardless of what major you desire, you can choose any class you want. Through this process, you will select the 3 main areas you wish to study. All right, go back to your rooms and rest early so you won't be late for the first class." After he finished speaking, the students went to find their rooms. Leo's room was number 302. Car Tomer's room was 303. He looked around and said, "Leo, our rooms are right next to each other." He opened his room and looked at Leo, saying, "I'm really excited for tomorrow. Have a good rest, Leo." Leo smiled and replied, "Yeah, see you tomorrow." In his room, Leo flopped onto his bed. He placed his hands behind his head and thought, "What I want in Lumine is the library. The place where the history of heroes is stored. That's my goal." He wanted to learn about his past self, and he hoped to find something that he believed was there, a record of his heroism. The next morning, in the Academy's dining hall, the students were eating breakfast. Leo was calmly eating his breakfast when Car Tomer approached with a stack of bread and milk, greeting him and saying, "Leo, eat with me." Leo, putting a piece of meat in his mouth, replied without turning his head, "Okay." But just as everything seemed peaceful, a disdainful voice rang out. The representative of the new recruits. The person heavily placed his bowl of food on the table. Leo, with an air of indifference, looked up and asked, "Who's that?" The person on the other side was none other than Duran Moira, the leader of the central region. He looked at Leo with a displeased expression, stating, "What did you mean by what you said in your speech yesterday?" Leo, still calmly chewing his food, replied, "Perhaps my words yesterday were a bit provocative. It would probably be true if a stranger came and provoked you like that." Duran Moira's eyes were filled with envy and resentment as he said, "Do you not know who I am?" the leader of the central region, but as soon as he said that, no one paid much attention. Both Leo and Car Tomer were ignoring him because the food was too delicious. The fire in Duran Moira flared up again, and sparks surrounded him. Car Tomer was horrified at the scene. Duran Moira angrily kicked the dining table at the canteen, sending the food of both Leo and Car Tomer flying into the air. Leo quickly jumped from his seat. In his hand, he held a plate, catching his flying food. He then quickly grabbed his tray and placed his food back on it, neatly arranging it. Below, Car Tomer was deeply moved, his eyes tearing up because Leo had saved his precious tray of food. When Leo set the tray of food down, a perfectly assembled burger had appeared. He declared, "A burger with the best ingredients, the double cheeseburger king." In front of Duran Moira's dark and angry face, Leo still was not angry. He looked at Duran Moira provocatively and stated, "It's unforgivable to waste such precious food," teased. Duran ground his teeth and replied, "I'll pull you down from that throne immediately." He roared angrily in front of the academy dining hall, unable to stand seeing someone weaker acting so arrogant. Just as he was about to attack Leo, another hand was placed on Duran's shoulder. It was Professor Ain. He put his arm around both Leo and Duran. Behind Professor Ain, a threatening aura emanated as he stated, "Let's see." Professor Ain, expressionless, said, "One of you is the leader of the central region, and the other is the representative of the first-year students." Duran looked tense while Leo remained calm, but both had the same thought at that moment. "When did he get here?" Professor Ain glanced at the two of them and said sternly, "Fighting on the first day at Lumine." At this moment, sensing an aura of hostility surrounding them, and with a few drops of water from melting ice on their faces, Professor Ain said coldly, "You must be ready." After breakfast, at the exploratory night class, Professor Ain was standing with his arms crossed, waiting for his students. A student asked, "Excuse me, Professor, it's almost time for class to start." Nearby, Celia was looking around, wondering, why isn't Leo here yet? Just as she finished her thought, a commotion sounded outside. Both Leo and Duran Moira came into the classroom. Panting, Celia quickly ran up to ask, "Leo, what happened?" Leo was standing there, wiping sweat off his face. Celia asked, "Did you fight?" But Leo's gaze was fixed on Duran Moira, who was angrily entering the classroom. Leo was covered in sweat, and he grumbled something, but it wasn't clear what he meant. After the two entered the classroom, Professor Ain said, "Everyone's here. Let's start class, shall we?" He smiled at his students and continued, "Greetings, new students. I'm Ain Du, the instructor in charge of the first-year night course." Below, Leo and Duran were secretly glaring at each other, but it seemed that only Duran was still very upset about what had happened earlier. Car Tomer looked at this scene and thought helplessly, "Oh no, has a psychological battle already begun?" Professor Ain Ilan stepped forward and asked, "There are three powers that originate from mana." He walked around the classroom and asked, "Magical energy, soul energy, and aura. Among them, aura is the most difficult to control. Does anyone know why?" As he asked this question, Professor Ain's eyes turned toward Celia. She immediately spoke up, "Because aura loses the flexibility of mana during the transformation process." Hearing the answer, Professor Ain Ilan said, "Correct." He began to explain that inside a person, while magical energy and soul energy use mana in its natural state, aura absorbs mana and processes it to better suit the body. A surge of energy emerged from the palm of Professor Ain Ilan's hand. He asked, "Now, can anyone explain how we use aura?" The energy from ice surrounded Professor Ain Ilan. He said, "Is it stored inside the body?" "No." Below, Celia also tried to move the power in her hand, thinking, "It's not just released after using some power." At the same time, Leo in the back row spoke up, "We utilize the power of aura by burning mana." Professor Ain Ilan seemed very surprised that Leo was able to answer this question, and he said admiringly, "Correct. Then do you know what is the most important thing when burning mana?" This time, Leo looked at Duran Moira, who was still panting, and said, "Vitality." Professor Ain Ilan looked at Leo and stated, "Impressive, Leo Plove. Have you studied aura before?" Leo replied honestly, "No, I have not." Professor Ain was even more satisfied with Leo. He smiled to himself, thinking, "I never expected that someone who has never properly studied aura would be able to grasp its essence." Having thought this, he said to the students, "Now, let's put the theory aside." As if matching words with action, Professor Ain moved his body and said, "Let's warm up a bit," and the students had a chance to watch, admiring Professor Ain as he showed off his skills. All they saw was Professor Ain lightly creating steps to ascend into the air. He looked down at the students and said, "This is the light steps. The basic principle is to focus the aura on your feet. After that, Professor Ain landed lightly and continued. And there's more. Professor Ain's face was full of understanding and arrogance when he said, its application potential is limitless. After explaining, Professor Ain Elen let the students start practicing themselves. Some students managed to rise into the air, but their legs were still shaky. Some pairs of students were practicing with weapons provided by the academy. Meanwhile, Celia was very skilled at using aura. She landed safely behind Leo and said confidently, if you call me Big Sis, I'll teach you. But Leo was also not to be outdone. He replied coldly, I don't need to. The operating principles of aura are not that different. Hearing this, Duran Mora was still glaring at Leo with resentment, his eyes showing unwillingness, and Professor Ain Alen noticed all of this. Duran Mora looked quite tense, and he was biting his finger. That action made Professor Ain smile. Immediately after that, he clapped his hands to get the students' attention. Attention, as you know, there was some chaos this morning, Chelsea said, confused. What is he talking about? Nearby? Car Tomer whispered. Oh, I'm not kidding, I told you so. Being drawn in. Chelsea asked, What happened? Up above, Professor Ain Ilan called out sternly. Come here, Duran. Leo. The two quickly approached. Professor Ain lowered his head and asked Duran Moira, what made you so angry? He turned his head away, avoiding the sharp gaze of the professor and replied, I'm not angry. Professor Ain raised his head and stated, let's consider that later. Then, Professor Ain Elen made a request. The leader of the Central Region, Duran Moira, and the representative of the new students, Leo Plove, please compete in a one-on-one race for the class representative position. Ain looked at the two with a serious expression, saying, in this match, you are allowed to use aura without limitations. Hearing this, Duran looked quite shocked. A lesson combined with a competition was about to begin. On the side, the merchant, Car Tomer, took out a sign from who knows where and hung it around his neck, stating, come on, place your bets. He said seriously, the genius of the Moira family and the descendant of a hero, Duran Moira, master of thunder aura. Below was Duran's face, looking serious and resentful. Car Tomer continued to introduce, with the dark horse from the outskirts and the mysterious one who suppressed the leaders of every region and became the representative of the new recruits. Leo Plove. On that side, Leo had crouched down into his starting position. The whispering of the students began. He's the representative of the new recruits, so he should show something, right? From what I saw earlier when he was talking to Celia Zardinger, it seems he can't even use light steps, a student replied. Right, did you hear what he did yesterday? I can't stand him. More dissatisfied comments arose. Not just anyone can be the leader of the Central Region. On the other hand, the new recruit representative hasn't proven anything yet. Breaking the tension, Professor Ain Alan spoke. Okay, the first one to reach the finish line wins. Whoever wins must accept the result. It's called sportsmanship, he said seriously to Leo and Duran. On your mark, get set, Celia thought, truthfully. Leo can't win. Looking at Duran Moira, who was full of energy, with sparks crackling around him, and then looking at Leo, who had no aura around him, Celia thought, but that guy always exceeds everyone's expectations. Professor Ain Elin shouted, start. Both Leo and Duran simultaneously set off for the finish line. Duran, in his starting position, turned his head slightly and confidently said to Leo, I will be the best, newbie. As soon as those words left his mouth, both Leo and Duran pushed off and began their race. The people around them were in awe, exclaiming, wow, Duran is something else, he's so cool. On the other hand, the new recruit's representative, Leo's feet were quickly moving along the track. The students on the sidelines frowned, assessing him. It's unbelievable, he's quite slow. That's right, that bastard became the representative through a scam. Unbelievable. Unlike those students, Chelsea put her hands to her mouth, forming a megaphone, and yelled loudly, cheering, go, Leo, you can do it. On the track, Duran was focused, running with full concentration. Car, seeing this, was a little worried, thinking, Duran is already halfway. On the field, Duran was now far ahead of Leo. Leo continued to run forward steadily. Suddenly, while running, he abruptly changed direction. Celia, seeing this, called out in confusion, where is that idiot going? Leo didn't pay much attention to the whispers around him. He stomped his foot hard on the ground. Using the momentum from the stomp, Leo launched his body high into the air. He landed on a high platform, turning his head slightly to look at Duran running ahead. Leo's foot continued to stomp hard on the ground below, cracking it. Leo then used the momentum to launch himself forward. Duran, seeing this scene, paused for a moment. He turned his head to look at the platform behind him. And then there was a loud bang. Leo's body, with incredible speed, rushed ahead. In no time, Leo had caught up to Duran. He smirked and said, "I'll be the best." Slowpoke. Duran, hearing this, angrily yelled. What? Leo didn't bother with him. His body was light as a feather, and in no time, he had landed on the ground. Duran, seeing this behind him, broke out in a cold sweat. Leo turned his head slightly and gave a bright smile. The ground near the platform cracked. The students around them, seeing this scene, were wide-eyed with surprise and exclaimed, "Did you guys see that? It's no joke." Duran was supposed to be the fastest first year, but unexpectedly he was defeated by him. But I'm sure I heard that he hasn't learned the light steps. Celia, beside him, also couldn't believe what she saw. She thought in disbelief, "That's not light steps, it's phoenix steps. That guy really." Car cheered excitedly. Leo won. "Leo, you're so cool." Chelsea, beside him, also enthusiastically exclaimed, "Wow, Leo, you were amazing." Instructor Ain stood still with his arms crossed, deep in thought. Duran used his ultimate technique, Thunder Aura, and boosted his speed. "I predicted it, but that speed is truly amazing." Meanwhile, although slower, Leo Plov applied it better. He gathered and focused his fire aura on his feet, and created a powerful light step. It's an excellent application. At this moment, on the track, Leo walked toward Duran. He held out his hand, smiling and stated, "It was a good race, Duran." If it was a long-distance race, the results would have been different. Duran still couldn't accept the results. Brushing Leo's hand away, turning and walking away, annoyed and saying, "Get lost," Instructor Ain, standing still, smiled to himself. Among the disciples of this generation, a hero might finally be born. Chelsea stood still, clenching her fists with determination, and stated, "Leo, that was amazing. I want to train with you too." Car, hearing this, was unwilling, and asked Celia, "But why is she always focusing on him and not me? She should pay attention to me too." Celia, hearing this, crossed her arms and said indifferently, "Isn't it obvious?" Car didn't understand, but he also didn't pay much attention to it. He waved his hand and said, "Oh well, class is over. Let's go to a cafe, everyone. It's my treat today." Hearing this, Leo immediately refused. "I'm sorry, but you all can go by yourselves." Everyone was surprised by this. Leo didn't say anything else, turning and leaving. Car, seeing this, called out, "Where are you going?" Leo replied nonchalantly, "To attend the summoning class." Receiving this answer, Car rubbed the back of his neck, wondering, why would a knight student attend a summoning class? Celia also replied in confusion, "I don't understand what he's thinking." Leo walked slowly through the campus, he thought. "There's one thing I still don't understand. Why did the Spirit King give me the oath as a reward? The rewards from a hero's world are connected to the power of the world's owner. The reward I received is related to summoning, but Professor Albee is a pure mage and has nothing to do with summoning. Usually, I would receive a magical-related ability. Furthermore, to make a contract with a spirit, I have to go to the spirit realm. For now, it's useless." As he was thinking, a voice suddenly rang out behind Leo. "So you're attending the summoning class too?" Hearing this, Leo turned around cautiously. Seeing who it was, Leo murmured, "The leader of the West." The person who had arrived was Shen Xia. She smiled and greeted, "It's a pleasure to meet you, Leo." Leo slowly approached and replied, "It's a pleasure to meet you, Chen Xia." Chen Xia nodded slightly and said, "Please, just call me Xia. I believe you, Leo, are a student from the night department. I didn't expect that you would also be interested in summoning." As they spoke, the two of them walked slowly forward. Leo turned and said, I'm interested in spiritualism." Hearing that, Xia smiled and said, "Then we'll see each other often." "Could you tell me which spirit you've made a contract with?" Xia asked, and then she took out her spirit and stated, "And you, Leo, could you show me your spirit?" Hearing this, Leo replied, "I haven't made a contract yet." Xia was quite surprised by this. She asked, "Really? Well, if you need any help in the future, just feel free to call me. I'll give you some advice about summoning spirits." Leo did not refuse the offer. He nodded and replied, "I'll count on you then. But how old are you?" "I'm 17, Xia replied, narrowing her eyes. "You're 15, Leo, right? I saw you talking to Celia." Hearing this, Leo frowned, thinking, 17, huh? She looks so young, even younger than Chelsea. The atmosphere suddenly became strangely quiet. Xia looked at Leo and then approached him suspiciously, asking, "You were thinking something inappropriate, weren't you?" Leo, hearing this, quickly replied, "No." Then, Xia said, "But, Leo, I was deeply impressed by your match against Duran." Hearing her say this, Leo asked, "Oh, you saw it?" Xia nodded. Yes, I did. As if remembering something, Xia suddenly straightened up. She said with determination, "One day, I ask that you accept my challenge too." Hearing this, Leo laughed and replied, "Of course." Receiving his answer, Xia narrowed her eyes and smiled contentedly. At the summoning department, in the exploratory class, the students had mostly arrived. Leo and Xia walked slowly to the area. Seeing the small group of people, Leo asked in surprise, "Is that all of them?" Xia rubbed her chin and stuttered as she explained, "Well, summoning isn't a popular choice, and this is an exploratory class." Hearing that, Leo nodded and said, "Well, that makes sense, but I didn't expect the class to be held here." As soon as he finished speaking, a fluttering sound echoed in the sky. Someone shouted, "A black wyvern, where did it come from?" An unknown black wyvern flew and landed, and it lowered its face close to the person who had just spoken. That person fell backward in fear and shouted, trembling, "Get away!" At that moment, another voice rang out, "It's doing that because it likes you, kid. Nice to meet you, first-year students. My name is Yura Marin. I am the summoning teacher who will teach you for the next year." Hearing this, the students were admiring. "I want to become the teacher's summon." Leo, standing on the side, observed quietly. He recalled Dueno's words. She's a woman with a different kind of beauty from Luna and Lycina's. I can't help but be drawn to her." Recalling a statement like that, Leo smiled to himself thinking, if Dueno was here, he'd definitely lose his mind. After a quick greeting, Yura had the black wyvern sit down and rest by a tree. Then she stated, "All right, you fresh green sprouts. By being here, it means that all of you have some talent to become summoners, right?" Hearing their teacher say this, all the students responded in unison, "Yes." Yura, hearing this, continued, "Good. Answering clearly like that is good. We'll immediately move to the practice area." Having said this, Yura called out a name, "Carlo." As soon as she said the name, a foot with sharp claws landed on the ground from above. A man with a smile stepped down, hugging the neck of his giant bird. This man was Carlo, the assistant professor for the first-year summoning class. Yura then stepped over to Carlo and the bird and stated, "You will fly together in groups of 2. Get on the griffins." As soon as she said this, many griffins descended one after another beside the students. One student, looking slightly scared, said, "This is our first time riding griffins, Professor." Yura, hearing this, had eyes as cold as ice and said, "Sounds like you don't want to listen to my lectures." After saying this, she leaped onto the black wyvern's back, leaving the student with one sentence, "If you think you can't do it, then go back." As soon as she finished speaking, the black wyvern immediately spread its wings and flew high. It opened its mouth and let out a loud roar. A huge gust of wind stirred. The students below watched this scene intently, seeing that the black wyvern had taken Yura far away. Carlo said, "All right, everyone, let's quickly follow the professor." The students, hearing this, did not delay any longer and quickly climbed onto the backs of the griffins. These birds were much gentler than they had imagined. Just as they thought that, a griffin opened its beak and snatched a student up into the air. The student, startled by being snatched up, cried out in a panic, "Let me down." On the side, Xia turned to look at Leo, who was leading a griffin, and asked, "Can I hold the griffin's reins, Leo?" Leo turned his head slightly and politely replied, "Feel free to do as you please." The students were soon ready. They, in teams of 2, mounted the griffins and quickly chased after Yura. The students were very excited, talking to each other while flying through the sky. "I didn't expect that we'd get to ride griffins. Lumine is really something else. Hey, let's switch places. I want to ride too." "Ah, wait a little longer." On the other side, Leo and Xia were riding the same griffin. Xia, controlling the reins, said with excitement, "I was a bit worried, but he's gentler than I thought." Leo, sitting behind her, reminded her softly, "It's always better to be careful. Griffins are hard summons to control for first-time riders." Hearing this, Xia asked curiously, "Even if it's this friendly?" Leo nodded and said, "That's because," but before he could finish his sentence, Yura in front suddenly took out a whistle and blew a loud note. The whistle echoed through the vast blue sky. The griffins, hearing this sound, suddenly had sharp and intense looks in their eyes. They opened their beaks and roared, and the sudden change had the students crying out in fear, "Oh no, they're not listening to us anymore. Why are they acting like this suddenly? Professor, help us." Leo wasn't surprised by this situation. He murmured, "They are still listening to the professor, even now." Riding on the back of the black wyvern, Yura smiled and stated, "Did you really think you could call yourselves students of Lumine Academy when you can't even handle a griffin? Try controlling them yourselves." Her words rang out through the air, and the griffin that Xia was controlling completely stopped listening to her. Seeing this situation, Leo reached his arms in front, grabbed the reins, and whispered. Griffins have a strong sense of pride. So, using force to dominate them will only make them resist more. Xia was quite surprised by this. She turned her head slightly, and said a bit shyly, Leo, what are you doing? Leo's hand was now holding Xia's, and he was controlling the griffin through the reins. Leo did not answer Xia's question, but smiled and said, let's go. Following Leo's control, the griffin obediently flew forward. Yura and Carlo, seeing this scene, both focused on observing him. Yura thought to herself, look at that, not bad. Thinking this, she turned to Carlo with her arms crossed and asked, Carlo, the first-year representative is a candidate for the night department. Right, Carlo. Hearing this, quickly flipped through the documents, checked, and responded, yes, I believe that is so. Hearing this, Yura asked, does he have his own griffin at home? Why is he so good at riding? Carlo quickly skimmed through Leo's profile and shook his head, replying, no, he does not belong to a noble family that could have a griffin. This information made Yura quite interested. She smirked and said, so, he's a natural talent. It seems we have a hidden gem. Very quickly, everyone arrived at the summoning island. The practice area for the summoning class. The students quickly jumped off the griffins, bowing their heads in fear and throwing up. Leo was completely fine. He put his hands in his pockets and walked forward, looking up at a ripe fruit on a tree. Leo reached out and plucked the fruit. On the stem of the fruit was a feather. Xia, seeing this from behind, asked curiously, what is it? Leo, holding the feather on the ripe fruit, shook his head and stated, it's nothing. He then gave the ripe fruit to the griffin. As he was feeding the bird, Yura's voice rang out, stop fooling around and focus. All the students, hearing this, quickly gathered in one place. At this moment, Yura said, from now on, you will be participating in a practical exam. Hearing this, a student spoke up, what, a practical exam on the very first day? We are still in the exploratory class period. Why, not letting the student finish speaking. Yura immediately interrupted him. Compared to the other two fields, the path we must take is much longer. Does anyone here not know this? For summoning, it's not enough to just control mana. To make a contract with a spirit, you also need to be liked by spirits. And to command summons, taming ability is essential. That's why summoner heroes are fewer than those in the other two fields. However, compared to other heroes, summoners who become heroes achieve far more. Isn't that why you all came here? Because you dream of becoming that kind of hero. Hearing this question, everyone replied in unison, that's right. Suddenly, one person stepped forward. This person was Eliza Hergen, the famous summoner from the hero family of the north, the Hergen family. She asked, so, what exactly is this exam? Yura said slowly, the name of this island is Summoning Island. As its name suggests, it is filled with summons, and summons are a type of weapon for summoners. We will test your taming abilities. The content of the exam is simple. Tame a summon in this forest and bring it back. After taming it and forming a contract, it will be your summon. These words made the students quite excited. They rushed out in all directions, starting to search for summons, shouting excitedly. Wow, this is really something. Lumine Academy. Leo was still standing still, observing the situation. Just then, a voice rang out behind him. Oh my, if it isn't the distinguished new recruit's representative, the one who had spoken was Eliza. She walked towards him slowly, talking as she approached. The rumors of you defeating Duran have already spread. So, I can look forward to seeing you in summoning class, too. Xia and Walden, who were standing on the side, turned to look when they heard this. At that moment, Leo turned and walked away. He waved his hand, leaving behind only one sentence. I'm just killing time. Eliza, hearing this, frowned, her gaze fixed on Leo's back. Yura stood on the side, watching the situation. She smirked, thinking to herself, it seems they will be the key players of the first year. The students went deeper into the forest on the island, encountering many summons. Some students had already successfully tamed some. They looked up and saw Leo. Whispering to each other, oh, it's the new recruit's representative. He's going too deep into the forest. Someone replied nonchalantly, let him be. If he fails to tame a summon and gets a 0, I believe he'll go back to the night course. Does he think summoning is that easy? Leo didn't bother to pay attention to these comments and continued deeper into the forest. Reaching a secluded spot, Leo reached into his pocket and took out the feather he had picked up earlier. He held the feather in one hand and made a hand sign with the other, raising it high. Immediately after, a blinding red flame engulfed his body. The feather in Leo's hand quickly absorbed the flame. Seeing this, Leo laughed and said, haha, just as I thought, this is... Meanwhile, outside, in a certain forest, The sky above was very clear. A fried egg and beef were being cooked on a small frying pan. At the same time, a woman's voice, tinged with worry, rang out. Leo is still doing well, right? Another person, taking the egg and beef from the pan and placing them on a plate, said slowly, "It's only his first day, Reina. You're already worried." Reina, hearing this, still felt restless, worrying about her son. Meanwhile, deep in the forest on Summoning Island, a fierce flame had erupted. Leo stood next to the flame, raising one hand to shield his face, and at the same time, his mother, Reina, smiled and said to the person in front of her, "What could possibly happen?" Inside the great fire vortex, Leo, sweating, thought to himself, "This intense heat, it's one of the three great summons." The phoenix. From within the fiery red flames, a phoenix gradually formed. The phoenix spoke, "Child of the Zardinger family, I smell the flames of Reina." Hearing these words, Leo immediately asked, "You know my mother?" This question took the phoenix by surprise, but after a moment, it nodded and stated, "Your mother? Huh, it's not wrong. If I had a child, it would be your age. Do I know your mother? Of course I do. I owe Reina a great debt." The sea of fire gradually disappeared, and a true phoenix appeared before Leo. It was the phoenix Farina, one of the three mythical summons. The phoenix looked at Leo and then introduced itself unhurriedly. "My name is Firina, son of Reina." Hearing it say this, Leo replied, "Greetings, Phoenix Firina. My name is Leo Plove. What is your relationship with my mother?" "You said you owed her a great debt." The phoenix Firina nodded and stated, "Reina saved the life of my summoner, Ellen Lunda." Upon hearing this name, Leo's eyes widened, and he thought to himself, "The hero Ellen Lunda." Not paying much attention to Leo's expression, Farina continued, "Ellen was conquering a dungeon in Siren. She lost all her comrades and was about to lose her life. Then your mother appeared and saved her. In that process, Reina lost her brilliant aura. If that event hadn't happened, Reina would surely have a place among the heroes." Hearing the phoenix say this, Leo lowered his head slightly, his lips whispering, "Mother." After what seemed like an eternity, Leo suddenly spoke up. "My mother said she didn't regret what she did." Hearing this, Firina laughed and replied, "Haha, yes, she was a knight like that." Leo, looking slightly confused, asked, "But why are you in Lumine, Firina?" The phoenix, hearing this question, shook its head and stated, "I cannot say, but you're not a knight, are you? What are you doing on this island?" "I'm studying summoning," Leo said honestly. Hearing this, the phoenix Firina exclaimed in shock. "What?" The phoenix's eyes widened. It looked Leo over from head to toe, then laughed and stated, "Ha, interesting. This must be fate, Leo Plove. I can finally repay my debt to your mother." "Reach out and take this, Leo," Firina said. Obeying the phoenix's instructions, Leo extended his hand, and a flame suddenly burst into life in his palm. After a moment, the flames faded, and an egg appeared in Leo's hand. The phoenix Firina said, "This is my child. One day, when you become a great summoner, I hope you will sign a contract with it. It is fortunate for a summoner to be destined to receive it." Hearing the phoenix Firina say this, Leo asked, "Can I do it now?" The phoenix Firina, thinking it had misheard, asked, "What?" As soon as she said this, Leo on the opposite side had already begun the process. The phoenix Firina, seeing this, hurriedly stated, "It's too early, Leo. You could lose your life. Stop it." Leo paid little heed to the phoenix Firina's words and continued the contract process. Seeing this, the phoenix Firina said helplessly, "Oh no, it's too late. Your willingness to challenge the impossible without flinching reminds me of Reina. Good luck." It's unknown how much time had passed. Where Leo was standing was shrouded in darkness. With only a small flame burning in front of him, Leo reached out and slowly touched the flame in front of him. At that moment, the small flame suddenly burst out fiercely. The red flames immediately rushed to engulf Leo's body. Feeling the incredible heat, Leo, sweating, thought to himself, "The heat is so intense, I can't breathe." This is the phoenix flame, the result of burning the body to release powerful flames. Enduring this pain every day, a living creature, regenerating burned flesh for all eternity. I understand that pain, and I hurt along with you. Time passed slowly. The flames around Leo gradually disappeared, and the phoenix egg reappeared in his hand. The eggshell cracked. A small crack appeared. Leo's gaze fell slightly. He focused intently on the egg in his hand. The phoenix egg gradually rose, floating in the air. Beams of red light escaped from the cracks on the eggshell, causing one corner of the forest to glow red. Seeing this, the phoenix Firina exclaimed. He succeeded. Leo wiped the sweat off his face, took a breath, and smiled, stating, "I did it." The phoenix Firina, narrowing its eyes, praised happily, "You are truly a genius, Leo Plove. You will become the greatest summoner in the world." As soon as she said this, the egg in the air shook violently. The phoenix Firina spoke up again. "Leo, congratulations on successfully signing a contract." A small phoenix hatched from the egg. The phoenix Firina also transformed into her human form and held her child, stating, "This child is Fiora, one of the 3 mythical summons." The phoenix Firina, in human form, narrowed her eyes and smiled at Leo. "I trust you with my child." Looking at the small creature in Firina's hand, Leo thought to himself, "Is that really a phoenix? It looks like a baby chick." As he was thinking this, Fiora on her mother's hand suddenly chirped, hearing that. Leo was even more certain. It's a baby chick. At this time, outside of Summoning Island, the students were introducing their summons to their teacher. Yura nodded, smiled, and praised them. "A banana wombat, that's cute." As she said this, Yura turned her head and asked Carlo, "What time is it?" Carlo held up a hand and smiled. 5 more minutes." Hearing this, Yura thought to herself, "There are still 4 more people." Just as she said this, a loud commotion came from afar. A giant bear rushed out of the forest. On the bear's back was Sha. She leaned out and asked with a smile, "Professor, it's not over yet, right?" Seeing her, Yura, slightly surprised, said, "You tamed a small water bear to be a future knight. Impressive." Xia, hearing this, jumped off the bear with excitement. At the same time, a large black shadow appeared in the sky. Walden, clinging to the leg of a giant crow, slowly descended to the ground. Seeing this, Yura stated, "A dark raven. Even famous summoning families struggled to tame it." Hearing this, Walden said honestly, "I haven't signed a contract yet." Yura, hearing this, did not scold him, but rather stated, "That's enough, more than enough." A moment later, Eliza returned, sitting on the head of a white snake. She crossed her arms and stated slowly, "I signed a contract with it because my family doesn't have a summon like this." Yura nodded, and stated approvingly, "Aran Gorgon, excellent." As she was saying this, Carlo on the side called out, "Professor, it's time." As he said this, he paused for a moment, and glanced far away, stating excitedly, "Oh, that's perfect. The last student is back." Following Carlo's words, everyone looked at the forest behind them. They saw Leo slowly walk out, and the baby phoenix Fiora was now sitting neatly on his head. The students around them started to laugh, pointing and mocking him. "Ha, what's that? Did he tame a chicken? Idiot, ha ha. He must have given up after sensing his lack of talent in summoning." But at this moment, Yura, observing the situation, her eyes became sharp. She took a closer look at the creature on Leo's head. Then, she, unable to believe it, cursed under her breath, "Damn it, that's a phoenix." The sun was setting. The students left the summoning island and returned to school. When Leo arrived back at school, instead of returning to his dorm, he went to the entrance of the teacher's room. He quickly adjusted his clothes and then raised his fist and knocked on the door. A voice from inside said, "Come in." Leo pushed the door open and entered. Yura, who was looking at documents in the room, looked up and smiled, stating, "I heard you were looking for me. Have a seat." After Leo sat down on a chair, Yura continued, "You know, Leo, this is the first time I've seen a baby phoenix. Actually, I didn't know that there was a phoenix on Summoning Island, a new student signing a contract with a phoenix. It's unprecedented in the history of the academy." Hearing her say this, Leo had a start. He quickly looked up and exclaimed, "Professor." Yura placed both hands on the table. She looked directly into Leo's eyes and stated seriously, "I know who you really are, Leo Plove." Leo, slightly surprised, looked up and said, "Professor." Yura then placed her hands firmly on the table, lowered her head slightly, and said seriously, "I think I know your identity, Leo Plove." Hearing this, Leo suddenly clenched his jaw. As he was wondering how to respond, Yura unexpectedly wrapped her arms around him, and then pushed him away, exclaiming happily, "You're a summoning genius, an unprecedented genius. I want to praise you for what you've achieved, but I think the fact that you signed a contract with a phoenix should be kept a secret for now. If it gets out, things will get very complicated." Hearing these words, Leo let out a sigh of relief. Yura let him go and patted him on the shoulder, stating, "The day the exploratory classes end, you must choose summoning as your major. You have the talent to become a summoning hero that goes down in history." The next morning, at the academy, Chloe was walking leisurely through the corridor, raising her hand to cover her mouth and yawned widely. As she was still yawning, a teasing voice sounded behind Chloe. "You're drooling, Car." Along with Leo, approached from behind, Car asked, "You look tired." Chloe, hearing this, replied, "I stayed up late to read magic books." Leo, standing next to her, looked at her and asked, "You are Chloe Muller, right?" Without waiting for a confirmation, Leo took out the card he picked up on the street and showed it to Chloe. On that day, during the first day of school, the two bumped into each other on the school grounds. Remembering this scene, Chloe's eyes widened and exclaimed, "Ah!" She took her card, thanked him quickly, and stated, "So it was you. Thank you, new recruits representative." After exchanging a few words, the three quickly arrived at the classroom. As they entered the classroom, Chloe asked, "But, Leo, it seems like you're planning to attend the magic lecture too." Leo nodded and replied, "Since it's still the exploration phase, I want to attend as many lectures as possible." Hearing these words, Chloe excitedly exclaimed, "That's great, because I'm only interested in magic. I'm only attending the magic classes." The three quickly found empty seats. Carr turned his head slightly and whispered into Leo's ears, "That icy girl is aiming for the top spot in the magic department. Her name is Chloe Muller." Chloe, sitting beside him, heard this and turned to look at Carr. Sensing danger, Carr quickly stood up, embarrassed, and said, "Oh my. It seems a bit cold here. Huh, I think I should go to the back." And before he could finish his sentence, a cold force struck him across the face. A huge block of ice suddenly sprouted up in front of Carr, blocking his retreat. Chloe slowly stood up and placed her hand on the icy table and stated coldly, "Carr, let's go to the front." After saying this, Chloe grabbed Carr's hair and started dragging him away. While she was dragging him away, she said, "It seems like you're interested in this class. Then, let me help you." Carr was wailing and unable to resist. He could only cry out, "Leo!" Just then, Chelsea's voice rang out behind Leo. Leo followed the sound and turned his head, seeing that Chelsea and Abad were at the next table, smiling and waving at him. Leo, as a matter of courtesy, smiled in response. Suddenly, he noticed an unusual sound. His eyes immediately widened in alertness. There were slow footsteps outside the door. The classroom door was opened, followed by a voice stating, "It is a pleasure to meet you. Those participating in the magic class. I will be teaching magic for the next year." The teacher slowly entered the classroom. Some of the female students, seeing the teacher's appearance clearly, were excitedly exclaiming, "He's so handsome." The teacher stood at the front of the class and introduced himself. "My name is Len Orr." Len Orr walked to the teacher's desk. He looked at the documents on the desk and stated unhurriedly, "Before we begin today's exploration class," he stopped for a moment, raised his hand, and lightly snapped his fingers. The documents on the desk, following Len Orr's actions, began flying around the classroom. The documents quickly found their owners, landing in front of each student. At this time, Len Orr continued the rest of his sentence. "You will be taking a theory exam on magic." Hearing this, someone asked, "What? A test on the first day of the exploratory class?" Len Orr slammed his hand on the table, stating seriously, "Yes. Students who do not meet certain standards cannot attend my class. If you are a student of Lumine, then this is a basic requirement. After finishing, please hand them to my assistant, Anna," he said. As soon as he said this, Anna, the first-year magic department assistant professor, who was sitting on the side, raised her hand, smiled, and stated, "Please hand the completed test to me." Everyone, Leo, who had been focused on looking at the test, felt his hands slightly tremble. He thought to himself, "Is this really the trend of magic nowadays? Why are the formulas so complicated?" The students began to lower their heads and started doing the test. The sound of pen tips scraping across the paper echoed faintly in the classroom. The time on the hourglass was slowly passing. After some time, a few people had finished. They turned to each other and whispered, "It was easier than I thought." "But, what was the answer to the last question? I solved everything but that." Hearing these words, Leo sat silently, thinking to himself, "I only solved one question correctly." Leo stood up to submit his test. As he handed the test to Anna, he exclaimed, "I should have studied more about modern magic before coming here." After handing in his test, Leo didn't return to his seat, but rather opened the door and left the room. He said to himself, "I should just study magic on my own." In the classroom, the sand in the hourglass had run out, and the testing time was over. On the podium, Len Orr stated slowly, "After 100 years, it seems that magic has evolved significantly. Magic that used to require the complete understanding of a person can now be used just by memorizing the activation conditions." As he said this, the tests that Anna had finished grading were handed to Len Orr, and he snapped his fingers. The tests for each student were returned to their respective places. After this, Len Orr continued, "However, this progress has worsened the overall level of the mages." As soon as he finished saying this, Len Orr raised an arm high. From his palm, a blinding light suddenly burst out. On the ceiling of the classroom, following Len Orr movements, a magic that looked like a galaxy was gradually formed. Before the students who were looking at the scene in excitement, Len Or explained, "This is the origin of the magic I create. I created it from start to finish. I want you to be able to research and create your own magic. That's why I had you do this test. 49 questions, each worth 1 point, based on basic memorization, and the final question, worth 51 points, was to analyze the true origin of magic. I hope everyone can become a mage capable of solving it." Holding her test in her hand, Chelsea exclaimed, "No wonder that was the only question I couldn't solve." She then looked at the spot where Leo had been sitting. At that time, the spot was empty, with only his test neatly placed on the desk. Chelsea, looking slightly saddened, thought to herself, "Has Leo given up? I wanted to attend the magic class with him. What a pity." As she was thinking this, on the podium, Anna suddenly stepped closer to Lenore and whispered something into his ear. Anna said, "Professor, one student solved question 50. Hearing this information, Len Or suddenly smiled happily. He called out, "Where are you? Among you, there's one person who has achieved a perfect score for the first time in history. Please stand up. Who is it?" Seeing the excitement on the professor's face, Anna, slightly nervous, murmured, "It's not a perfect score, Professor." "Really?" Len Or asked doubtfully. "It seems some of the questions were missed because too much time was spent on the last question. What a pity. But, it's okay. Okay. Stand up then." As soon as he finished saying this, Anna shook her head and stated, "No, it's not." She paused for a moment and said hesitantly, "He only solved the last question." Hearing this made Len Or's eyes widen in surprise. He quickly asked, "What is his name?" Anna took Leo's profile and stated, "It's the student Leo Plove." Len Or nodded, and then, looking down at the class, called out, "Student Leo Plove, please stand up." Hearing this name, Chloe immediately turned to Carr and asked, "Where is he?" Carr shook his head and whispered, "It seems that he's not here." At this moment, Chelsea raised her hand and said hesitantly, "Student Leo left after finishing the test." "What?" Len Or looked slightly surprised by this. Leo's test was worth 51 points. In the academy's cafeteria, after hearing Leo's story, Celia chuckled and stated, "So, you left after solving only one question," she said, and took a spoonful of ice cream and put it in her mouth. And then continued, "A chick in the summoning class and solving one question in the magic class. Leo, you realize you did something wrong, right?" The two were sitting, eating ice cream together. After putting her spoon down, Celia stated, "If your major is knight, then you should focus on your swordsmanship." Hearing the other side say this, Leo, while eating his ice cream, calmly suggested, "Then, would you like to do some physical training with me?" Hearing these words, Celia, slightly scared, stuttered, "That's a bit." Before she could finish her sentence, a cold voice rang out above them. "I see. So you're in the night department." As soon as he said this, both Leo and Celia looked up. The person who had just spoken was none other than the teacher. "Len Or," he asked coldly, "you're Leo Plove, the one who made a fool of my class. Why did you leave after only solving one question? Were they too easy that you thought they were not worth answering?" Hearing this, Leo quickly stood up and explained, "Professor, it seems like there's a misunderstanding. I thought I wouldn't pass the test." Hearing him say that, Len Or exclaimed in surprise, "What?" Leo continued to clarify, "All the questions except for the last one were too difficult, so I couldn't solve them." These words made Len Or frown slightly. He paused for a moment and said hesitantly, "You mean," before the other person could finish his sentence, Leo replied honestly, "I learned magic on my own by reading old magic books, so I'm not familiar with any modern magic." This answer greatly surprised Len Or. He thought to himself, could it be he's? As soon as he thought this, Len Or couldn't help himself and bent down, lifting Leo up. Leo didn't understand what was happening. His eyes widened. Looking directly at the other person, Len Or, with his eyes gleaming, smiled gently and said, "Follow me for a little bit." As soon as these words left his mouth, without waiting for Leo's agreement, Len Or quickly pulled Leo out of the cafeteria. Celia, sitting alone, was utterly confused. She took a scoop of ice cream and muttered softly, "Isn't that the professor of magical theory from Lumine Academy? What a strange person." Just as she was speaking, Anna rushed in from afar, panting. She gasped to Celia, "Miss Celia, have you seen Professor Len? Or has anything strange happened?" Celia, hearing this, replied, "He was just here a few minutes ago, but suddenly he grabbed Leo and dragged him away," Celia said, frowning. Anna, hearing this, became extremely anxious. As she ran out of the cafeteria, she was sweating and thinking to herself, "Oh heavens, that madman, what is he up to this time?" In Len's classroom, a stack of books and a piece of chalk were taken out by him. He slapped his hand on the board covered with writing and then smiled, saying to Leo, "Solve these questions." Student Leo, Leo didn't bother resisting, grabbed the chalk and approached the board to solve the exercises. Watching Leo's back, Professor Len thought to himself, if he hadn't solved the last question by pure luck, then he must have had a complete magical system in his mind already. Now show me. I've seen through your true nature. Len smiled contentedly and quietly sighed. It's uncertain how long it had been. Leo turned around to look at Professor Len and said, I've solved everything. Hearing this, Len immediately looked up at the board, scanned through the content on it. His eyebrows suddenly furrowed together. Len suspiciously asked, You solved all these questions in your head, Leo? Hearing this, honestly replied, Yes, roughly. At this moment, Professor Len didn't know whether it was because of shock or what, but his face suddenly flushed red. He was silent for a moment and then uttered two final words, and at this moment, outside in the academy corridor, Albie, with his hands in his pockets, was slowly walking along it. Just then, Len frantically ran from a corner, looking extremely hurried. It was unknown what emergency there was. Running close to Albie, Len stopped and gave a bright smile. Albie, seeing this, was completely puzzled, his eyebrows furrowing together. Ignoring Len, Albie abruptly turned around and walked in the opposite direction. Seeing this, Len quickly fell to the ground and hugged the other's leg. His eyes sparkling as he gasped, Professor Albie, thank you so much. Albie stopped, raised his hand and with one wave, lifted Len's entire body up. Then he said, This isn't the first time I've seen you act like this, but today you've gone too far. Len, hanging upside down in the air, quickly retorted, He's a magical genius. Leo Plove, the student you recommended to represent the freshman class. He's a genius. Hearing this, Albie asked suspiciously, Magic, isn't he a swordsman? Len shook his head and said, No, by all means, Leo must become a mage. I can't let his talent be wasted just because of those iron sticks. Just as he finished this sentence, Anna rushed in from the distance. Len, not paying much attention, continued, Putting him in the swordsman rank is an insult to the field of magic. No sooner had he finished his words than he was thrown to the ground by Albie. Luckily, Anna had rushed in time, and she quickly spread out her arms to catch him. At this moment, Albie said, Take him away, Len, realizing that he was unharmed, turned and smiled at Anna, saying, Thank you, Anna, trying to suppress her anger, gritted her teeth and said, We really have to get back to class. Then she thought to herself, One day, I will definitely kill this madman. Very quickly, Anna took Len away. Only Albie remained in the corridor. It's unknown how much time had passed when behind him, the slow sound of Leo's footsteps could be heard. Albie, hearing the sound, turned around and smiled brightly. Leo slightly lifted his head, looking directly into the other's eyes. It's uncertain how much time had passed before Albie turned around and walked away. Standing motionless and watching the back of the other, Leo thought to himself, Mages never change with time. They are all lunatics. A week later, the temporary classes ended. Leo was lying lazily on his balcony, a thick book in his hand. The title of the book was Kyle, the Hero of Genesis, really just a fraud. After looking at the book for a long while, Leo sat up and looked down at the schoolyard below. At this time, outside the headmaster's office, the professors rushed inside. Headmaster Kalia, sitting at his desk, was slightly surprised and looked up. Ein, leading the way, rushed in, his face furrowed as he cried out, This is unbelievable, Headmaster. Then he raised a piece of paper he was holding and said, Please look at this, sir. The paper was Leo's class registration form. The professions he chose included swordsman, mage, and summoner. At this time, behind Ain, Len, and Yura, their eyes wide, simultaneously exclaimed, Leo must come to our department. Ain pointed at the registration form in his hand. He looked straight at the headmaster and seriously said, No, he must join the swordsman team. Wait a minute, that's not what I wanted to say. This has never happened at the heroic military academy. He must focus on a single profession. Headmaster Kalia, hearing this, stroked his beard and chuckled. Ho ho, well, indeed, this reminds me of that fictional hero. No sooner had he spoken these words than all three professors stopped arguing and all exclaimed, What? Headmaster Kalia rested his hand on the table and slowly explained, The fifth great hero. Also known as the Hero of Genesis, he stopped halfway, looking up at the sky through the window, and after a moment he slowly continued, Kyle, the only one who was a master of all classes in history. The bright sunlight was now shining on the training ground, on the running track. Chelsea and Celia were running fast ahead. Leo was sitting with his back against a tree observing when Carr came from somewhere and curiously asked, Why are they training on the weekend? Leo, hearing this, said, Chelsea asked me to train her. Carr sat down next to Leo, hearing him say this. Asked puzzled, Then why are they just running? Where are their weapons? Leo casually replied, there is something more important than weapons. That is, before he could finish the sentence, Celia had approached, she gasped and continued, our physical strength. Following behind, Chelsea continued, physical strength is the most important factor for a battle mage. That's why we're jogging. Move away. Car. Chelsea pushed Car aside and sat down next to Leo. Gasping for air, Leo took out a water bottle and handed it to Celia. After a short rest, Chelsea turned and smiled. Jogging on the weekend is great. I've missed this feeling. I want to run with you too, Leo. Really? Leo turned and asked. Celia, who had just taken a sip of water, hadn't even swallowed before she spat it all out. Seeing this, Chelsea wrinkled her face and cried out, disgusting, what's wrong with you? At this moment, Leo glanced at Celia and said, either way, I was going to run with you, might as well do it right. Hearing this, Celia quickly stomped her feet and cried out, and I said, I won't run with you. Sitting on the side listening to the three of them talk, Car, not understanding anything, bewilderedly said, what's going on between you two? Why are you so close? I thought you two were dating. Hearing him say this, Celia quickly cried out, heavens, he is my cousin, the son of my aunt. This answer surprised Car and Chelsea, their eyes wide. Chelsea exclaimed, you're a Zardinger. Celia, hearing this, explained, not exactly, there are some family matters, but forget about it. Hearing her say this, Leo stood up and said, then let's do it for real. Chelsea, hearing this, excitedly shouted, all right, let's go. Seeing them continue to train, Car also stood up and said, then I'll go explore the city of Lumeria. Hearing this, Celia quickly called out, take me with you. But before she could finish her sentence, she was grabbed by Leo and pulled away to train. Seeing this scene, Car, with one hand in his pocket, gave a forced smile and sighed. Why, in my life, do I not have a noble acquaintance who is legitimate? Very quickly, the day for class assignment arrived. The first year, students quickly gathered in one place. Leo walked over and pushed open the door to classroom 1-on-5. Inside the room, Car was already settled in a seat. Seeing Leo arrive, he raised his hand and called out, Leo, over here. Leo walked over to where Car was sitting. He frowned and asked, do you know which year you're in? Car, hearing this, smiled and replied, there's nothing that I don't know, Leo snorted. He looked around and then asked again, is Chelsea here too? Chelsea, who was lying on another table, looked extremely tired. Hearing this question, she struggled to lift her head and weakly answered, Leo, hello. At this moment, Car realized the person sitting there was Chelsea. He asked, puzzled, what did you put her through on the weekend? Leo shrugged and replied, just the basics. Chelsea, hearing this, cried out in fear, never again. Just as they were speaking, someone in the class suddenly mocked, oh wow. So this is class 5, the class of suffering. Hearing this sentence, Leo glanced over slightly. He saw near the classroom door. There were 2 male students standing there. Looking at their demeanor, they didn't seem to be first-year students. Seeing Leo look towards them, the dark-haired student continued, I wonder how many of you will be left after the first semester. The person next to him, a blonde-haired student, smirked and added, poor freshman, condolences. No sooner had they finished their words, someone from behind them slowly approached. This person asked in a voice, poor. In my eyes, you two are more pitiful. As soon as this voice rang out, the 2 male students' faces turned pale as they trembled and turned around. Behind them, a male professor with long hair coldly asked, you disagree? The person who had just arrived was Herod Edmund, the homeroom teacher of class 1-5 at Lumine Academy. He had the nickname the Howling Wall. Looking at the 2 students in front of him, Harid said coldly, with just one word, chairs. The 2 students quickly responded with yes sir. Then, they quickly lowered themselves to the ground. Forming the posture of a chair, Harid, satisfied, stepped forward and sat on the 2 of them. Then, he looked down at the students sitting in the class, and contentedly said, it's a pleasure to meet you all, you useless lot. This is a class for failures. Those with the lowest scores among the newly enrolled students, you've probably heard the rumors about me, haven't you? The Howling Wall. Does anyone here know why I chose to be the homeroom teacher for this class? Hearing this question, Car immediately raised his hand to answer. Is it perhaps to help us improve our scores? As soon as he finished speaking, Harid said, Car Thomas, a typical answer from someone ranked last. Pausing for a moment, and seeing the entire class silent, Harid asked again. Doesn't anyone in this inept class understand the mission of a student at Lumine Academy? Sitting below, Chelsea gathered her courage and raised her hand. It's to conquer the heroic world through practical missions. Harid praised her. Satisfied. Correct. That's it. But I only see the faces of those who will die immediately when stepping into the heroic world. It's better to expel those pitiful ones who will only burden their teammates and die first. That's why I decided to take charge of Class 5. And that's why I'm called the Howling Wall. Speaking to this point, Harid suddenly noticed the position where Leo was sitting. He observed Leo for a moment and then thought to himself, that kid might actually survive. Thinking this, Harid then surveyed the other students in the class, and then he cleared his throat and said, "All right, you lot, change into your gym clothes and head to the training ground. It's time for the combat studies lesson." Very quickly, the students gathered again outside on the training ground. An umbrella and a chair were brought and placed neatly above. Harid held a carton of milk in his hand. He took a sip and then looked up, saying, "This class is starting now, designed to correct the flawed thinking that has developed since entering Lumini Academy. What do you think will save your lives in real life, where lives come and go so easily?" Hearing this question, a student named Nella Carvin, from the Night Division with a special note about light healing, questioned, "Isn't it my teammates who will protect me by my side?" Hearing this, Harid shook his head. "No, it's your own ability. Only when you train your own skills, making them shine through every danger, can you help your teammates. But are you confident in your ability to protect your teammates?" As soon as these words were spoken, a hand shot up into the air, followed by the words, "I am confident, Professor Harrod." Seeing the person who had just raised their hand, Harid took another sip of milk, then exclaimed, "Oh really?" and said, "Then we'll see your ability as a magic knight. Create a fireball." The person who had just raised their hand was Eliana from the Magic Knight combat class. Hearing the professor's order, she immediately spread out her palm, a fireball flaring up on her palm. Harid, seeing this, waved his hand and said, "Is that all? I don't know if that fireball could even kill an ant." Hearing this, Eliana smirked. She lifted her other hand and poured more mana into the fireball. Immediately, 2 fireballs formed. Eliana smiled and asked, "If I add more mana, what do you think?" Observing this, Harid nodded and said, "Not only increasing the number of fireballs by 1, but also doubling the size. Impressive." Then Harid brought the milk carton up to his mouth and took a gulp. Then he raised a finger. From the tip of his finger, a blinding blue light burst forth. Harid said, "Why don't you try hitting this kid with your amazing fireball?" As soon as these words were spoken, the blue light faded, and immediately, a sprite appeared in front of everyone. This sprite, with incredible speed, shot straight towards Eliana. It landed on her shoulder, a little happy as it covered its mouth with its hand and laughed. A moment later, Eliana looked as if she was in some kind of discomfort, her face full of pain and her body trembling slightly. Eliana immediately flung both hands up, throwing the sprite away and launching the 2 fireballs from her hands. The sprite quickly flipped once, easily avoiding the attack. The sprite quickly returned to hover beside Harid. Harid finally spoke, "What's the point of increasing the number to 2 if you can't even hit anything? See it clearly. What you lack is the ability to use your skills effectively. You need to hone your abilities and break through your own limits. Have you forgotten that? The lesson won't end until you catch this Sylph sprite. Unleash everything you have." Descendants of Lumine, standing below and listening to the other person say this, Leo slightly lowered his head, thinking to himself, "His words are harsh. But he's right, I should try it once." Then he turned to leave. Harid, sitting under the umbrella, watched his back and said in a low voice, "Let's see." Leo plove. Through Leo's back, Harid was reminded of the hero named Kyle. He murmured, "Will you be as deceitful as that fictional hero, Kyle?" The students began to spread out, surrounding Sylph, trying to catch it. Sylph had a small body, so it was extremely nimble. It moved about swiftly and gracefully, and the students couldn't even touch a single hair on it. In the distance, Leo was observing everyone's actions. A burst of bright red power suddenly erupted on his feet. He bent his knees once, and his whole body suddenly became light, shooting straight forward. His face was sharp. And he said to himself resolutely, "Be the first to be truly born with all-around ability." On the side, Chelsea and Carr were panting in place. Chelsea frowned and lamented, "Damn, why is Sylph so fast?" Carr, next to her, called out, his face dark, "How are we going to catch it? Huh?" Leo was still running quickly towards Sylph. His footsteps were extremely firm, and a sharp glint was in his eyes, taking advantage of the moment when Sylph was laughing with the other students. Leo bent his knees and leaped into the air. His hand spread out, aiming for Sylph, which was hovering, and he rushed towards it. Just as his hand was about to touch Sylph, it flapped its wings and turned to the side, causing Leo to miss. This failure didn't make Leo angry, he smirked. From Leo's palm, flames, as red as blood, slowly emerged. Seeing this, Sylph was a little surprised and quickly tilted to move away, avoiding them. At this moment, a change occurred. A figure rushed from somewhere, taking advantage of Sylph's distraction, and grabbed it tightly. This action happened so unexpectedly that Leo didn't have time to react. He landed on the ground, maintaining his balance. On the other side, the person who had grabbed Sylph had also landed. This person was none other than Duran. He stood firm in place, glancing toward Leo. At this moment, applause rang out in the training ground. Professor Sejin, the homeroom teacher of Class 1-1, ranked second in the graduation vote, stepped forward, smirking, and said, "It seems that Class 1 will have to teach you a thing or two." Herod, still lying back in his chair under the umbrella, sipping his milk, didn't even bother to open his eyes as he said, "Oh, really? So you'll be teaching my class for me?" As he said this, Harid opened his eyes to look. He was ranked first in the graduation class vote. Sejin was taken aback by such a statement, his face suddenly contorted in frustration. Listening to this from the side, Carr exclaimed, his eyes wide, "A confrontation between the two pillars of Lumine Academy." "Pillars?" Leo asked. Carr nodded and replied, "Both of them have worked at Lumine Academy for over 20 years. From what I've heard, Professors Ain, Yura, and Len are their students." Nella, standing nearby, exclaimed in surprise, "Wow, really? How do you know so much?" Hearing the other person ask this, and seeing her sparkling eyes, Carr scratched his head and replied, "I'm quite sensitive to information." "Ha ha." Chelsea, hearing this, turned away in disgust, full of disdain. At this moment, by the two professors, Sejin suddenly laughed ha ha a few times and said, "Harid, I don't know what you're plotting by deciding to take on this failing class. But I'll soon find out." As he said this, a small ball appeared in his hand. Sejin held the ball up, looked at Harid and smirked, saying, "I request a competition between Class 1 and Class 5. Harid, still not standing, lay still and responded, "Why not try Lumine's historic ball sport, Baestra?" Pausing for a moment, he stood up and then continued, "You really are a genius, Sejin. Learning from practical experience is the best." Hearing this, Sejin frowned and asked, "Class 1 will probably win, right?" Harid didn't answer immediately but lay back down in the chair, putting his hands behind his head, taking a breath, and then finally said, "It's all right. You can just continue teaching the class." Seeing the other's attitude like this, Sejin thought to himself angrily, "Why do I always lose the graduation class vote to this guy?" The students behind them also shared the same thought. For some reason, Professor Sejin looks really pitiful. Just then, Harid's voice rang out again. He said seriously, "Class 5, I'm giving you a chance to practice using your skills. There will be a Baestra match with Class 1. Pausing for a moment, hearing the students discussing it, Harid got up again and said, "Oh, and one more thing." Saying half of that sentence, he crossed his arms, his eyes sweeping across his class, his voice a few degrees colder, and said, "If you lose, you will be expelled." Harid leaned on the back of the chair, stood up once again, and said, "Oh, besides that." As he said this, he paused for a moment, scanning the students below. He slowly raised both hands, crossing them in front of his chest, and then seriously continued, "If you lose, all of you will be expelled." As soon as these words came out, the students of Class 5 were all stunned. Someone asked doubtfully, "Are you serious? This is just the first class of the day, and Class 1 has 3 team captains, sir?" Hearing this, Harid casually replied, "Then you'll have to try harder, surpass your limits." The students, hearing this, all became silent. At this moment, Harid sat back down in his chair, one hand supporting his head, the other holding his milk carton. He continued, "Besides, what's there to worry about?" He said this and looked at Leo, who was standing there, and seriously added, "Especially when the representative of the freshmen is in your class, choose 6 representatives to go with you to Baestra, Leo." As soon as the professor finished speaking, Leo's eyes widened. He was a little surprised and thought to himself, "This is clearly a test, but Professor Harid is looking at me like that. It's not because he dislikes me. Some children have lost their spirit after only a week at Lumine Academy, and it's not difficult to understand why. Perhaps Professor Herod wants me to lead the children of Class 5, who act as if they've already lost." While he was thinking, Professor Sejin of Class 1 had already taken out his staff, from which a blue light burst forth. Leo was calculating. Then there has to be some kind of breakthrough in this Baestra match, a way to raise the morale of Class 5. The two classes prepared to enter the match. Class 1 had familiar faces like Duran and Celia. Class 5 had Leo, Chelsea, and Carr. Seeing his class seem tense, Leo turned to Chelsea and asked, "Why is everyone so scared?" Chelsea gasped and said, "It's probably because you've never heard of Baestra, have you, Leo? Since you're from the outskirts, Baestra is a combat sport and a long-standing tradition in Lumine." Hearing her say this, Leo frowned and asked, Isn't it just a game with a ball? Car, hearing this from the side, explained, it's not just a game with a ball. The problem is that it's an extremely dangerous game with a ball. Just then, Celia's voice rang out from behind. Hey Chelsea, why do you look so scared? She slowly walked over, covering her mouth and laughing as she said, hoo. Looks like you've accepted that you'll have to face inevitable defeat, hearing the others taunt. Chelsea angrily yelled, who's scared? Do you really think I'll lose to a Zardinger? As she was speaking, Leo suddenly reached out and put his arms around Chelsea and Car's shoulders. He smiled and encouraged them. Don't worry, our class won't lose. Hearing this, Celia loudly said, TSK, Leo, you too. I'll show you the results of my special training. Chloe from Class 1 also joined the match. She stood behind Celia. Hearing the others say that, her eyes suddenly became extremely determined. She thought to herself, this time, I won't lose. Leo Plove. Seeing that both sides were ready, Professor Sejin spoke, participants from each class, please enter the arena. At this moment, Leo asked his classmates, who will go with me? As soon as he said this, several people stepped forward, Chelsea and Eliana among them. Chelsea cracked her knuckles, full of determination, and said, I'll definitely make those guys know their place. I'll be by your side. Eliana also smirked, adding, if losing means being expelled, I will use malice to seize victory if necessary. I'll show the professor what I can do. Behind them, Nella and another male student named Tide also stepped forward with determination. Seeing that one person was missing, Leo looked in one direction and called out, Car, you know the last spot is yours, right? Car, who was hiding behind another person, hearing this, hesitantly poked his head out and stammered, but why? Leo didn't bother saying much. He grabbed Car by the collar and dragged him out. Then he turned to Professor Sejin and said, Class 5 is ready, sir. Hearing this, Professor Sejin nodded, saying, good. He then tossed the ball in his hand. Without wasting any more time, Professor Sejin's arm swung, and the ball in his hand was thrown high into the air. The members of both teams focused intently, following the ball. Professor Sejin's voice rang out to announce, the match begins. As soon as these words were spoken, the members of both teams immediately soared into the air to compete for the ball. Duran and Leo were the two fastest, their hands very close to the ball, but it seemed Duran was one step faster. He caught the ball and quickly landed. Holding it tight, Professor Sejin's voice immediately rang out. All right, Class 1 got the ball first. Leo also landed on the side. He turned to the person beside him and quickly said, Tide, explain the rules to me quickly. Tide, hearing this, said, the rules of Bastra are simpler than you think. Channel your light energy into the ball and shoot it into the goal without using your hands or feet. The team that scores 2 points first wins. It's coming, get ready. As soon as these words were spoken, Car, standing on the side, was already sweating nervously. At this moment, Duran had already used light energy to shoot the ball. The ball shot straight towards Leo, moving at an incredible speed. In the critical moment, Leo bent his knees and jumped to the side, avoiding the ball. The ball hit the ground and then bounced up, shooting toward Car. Hitting the goal, Leo landed firmly on the grass. The students of Class 1 cheered joyfully. Duran Moira, great job. Unlike the joyful atmosphere on Class 1's side, the students of Class 5 were all sad and worried. Tide, sweating, said sadly, it seems Professor Harid is planning to expel all of us. Hearing this, Leo asked, how do we gain control of the ball? Tide, hearing this, quickly said, there are 3 ways. When the ball goes out of bounds on the opponent's turn, when we catch the ball, and, he hadn't finished speaking when Nella suddenly cried out. Get out of the way. Tide was shocked. Leo, standing beside them, seemed more composed. In the air, the ball flew in a line, hitting Eliana, who was standing there. She couldn't dodge it and fell to the ground. On the opposite side, Celia pulled her hand back and smirked. Eliana, what are you gossiping about over there? Don't you have to focus on the match first? Tide ran over to help Eliana up. He looked at Celia and then said to Leo, you can't directly block or attack the opponent's players. Just now, that was the 3rd way. When a member of a team is neutralized after being hit by the ball, the only way you can attack them is with the ball itself. After hearing these words, Leo reached out and picked up the ball that had fallen beside Eliana. He smiled and said, thanks for explaining. Now, it's our turn. On the match scoreboard, Eliana was now neutralized, outside the arena. The 2 professors were carefully observing, the only difference being that Professor Harid looked extremely relaxed. Lying back in his chair, Professor Sejin, standing next to him, frowned and thought to himself, a team with a player that has high fire destructive attributes has a significant advantage in Bastra. And among the human families, the Zardinger fire is the most powerful. Thinking this, Sejin said, You're still accepting even though you know that our class has Celia Zardinger. I don't know what you're planning. But it will be extremely difficult for your class to win. Hearing this, Harid didn't even bother to get up, but sighed. Hearing that sigh, Sejin frowned and said, "Why are you? Just talk like a normal human being." Seeing that the other seemed annoyed, Harid finally opened his mouth and called out, "Sejin." He sat up straight, pushed the glasses on his face, and then asked, "Do you remember your first student, that child from the Zardinger house?" Sejin, hearing this, nodded and replied, "Of course, how could I forget, the Queen of Bastra?" Harid smiled slowly and said, "The child of that very queen is in class 5. As soon as these words were spoken, Sejin's eyebrows immediately furrowed. He looked very surprised. The sunlight shone down on the playing field. A few light breezes passed by. Some of the students from class 5 were sadly talking to each other. "We're doomed. How do we try so hard to get into Lumine, and it's ending so easily?" Before they could finish speaking, these students were stunned by the flames that burst out on the playing field. On the field, Celia smiled and said, "It seems you finally decided to get serious." And opposite her, Leo was holding the ball firmly in his hand, and around his body, a red fire glowed. Someone warned, "It's coming, be careful." As soon as these words were spoken, Leo raised his hand, gathering strength to attack. The ball, following Leo's control, shot quickly toward the opponent's goal. The power of the ball was terrifying. The entire playing field seemed to be engulfed in a sea of flames. But at this moment, Chloe used her power to create a giant ice mountain. The ball still went crashing forward, hitting the ice mountain. On the giant ice mountain, there was a huge hole. Chloe, sitting below, smirked and said, "Leo, as long as I'm here, scoring a point will be impossible." Before she could even finish the word impossible, Leo had already stepped forward and patted Chloe on the shoulder and smiled. "Is that what you meant?" On the giant ice mountain, there was a large hole. Chloe, sitting below, smirked and said, "Leo, you won't be able to score while I'm here." She had barely finished speaking when Leo's voice rang out in her ear. Leo, who no one knew when he approached Chloe, leaned close to her ear and slowly said, "I can score." As he finished speaking, Leo launched himself high into the air, raising his hand to control the ball. The ball, following the movement of his hand, shot straight through the ice mountain. Seeing this, Chloe was in disbelief, her eyes wide, filled with shock and disbelief. Standing outside the arena, Sejin, after seeing this attack, thought to himself, "His combat sense is amazing." Harid, on the side, also slightly curled his lips into a satisfied smile. The students cheered joyfully. "Leo Plove, go class 5. At this moment, Sejin smirked and said, "Ah, I see now. So this is when the real game begins." On the playing field, the ball, carrying Leo's power, sped toward Celia. It brushed past her and crashed towards the goal that Duran was guarding. The match was extremely dramatic. Chelsea also used her skills to try and fight. The two sides alternated possession of the ball. The ball was now controlled by Class 1 and was shooting toward Tide. The score on both sides changed constantly, and Class 5 was now gaining control of the ball. Chloe raised her hand again, preparing to create an ice wall for defense. The ball was now in Duran's hand. He was preparing for another attack. The ball, when thrown, sped toward the goal Carr was guarding. Around the ball, a golden light shone. Carr reacted very quickly, spreading out his hand to catch the ball. This catch was quite accurate. The ball was now safely in his palm. Carr quickly landed on the ground. He held the ball in his hand, his face dirty, but still happily said, "My mana has dropped significantly. Leave the rest to you, Leo." Then, Carr flung the ball towards Leo. Immediately after, he was helped to the side by Chelsea and Eliana to rest. Leo stood still, silently calculating. The score was now tied at 10-10. This was the deciding move, but his opponents were 3 top students. Thinking this, he bent down and picked up the ball. Someone from Class 5 suddenly said, "We only have Leo. We're really at a disadvantage." Opposite Leo, Chloe said coldly, "I may have lost in the magic theory test, but this time, I won't lose." After saying this, Chloe's eyes also became extremely determined. Leo sat down, getting into an attacking position. He looked up to face his opponents from Class 1. Both Celia and Duran were ready, their bodies surrounded by powerful light. Celia said, "Here it comes." Leo said nothing. His heels slightly lifted, preparing to launch. In just a blink of an eye, Leo's entire body seemed to disappear from the playing field. Seeing this, the students of Class 1 were all shocked. They all shared the same thought. "He's too fast." Leo, with the ball in his hand, rushed away like the wind. Seeing his figure rush past her, Celia cried out, her eyes wide. "He's not thinking about attacking. He's focusing on scoring." Chloe, Hearing this, Chloe widened her eyes and focused on observing Leo's direction. She thought to herself, an illusion magic. How shallow. Where is the real one? The real one, the real one, the real one. As she was thinking, Chloe's pupils suddenly contracted. She muttered, this magic. In front of her, many figures of Leo were rushing forward at full speed. Chloe's face was covered in sweat. She didn't know how to handle it. Her whole body suddenly stiffened, unable to move. A moment later, as if she had realized something, Chloe muttered, her face pale, the magic of the stars. How can a human use the magic of the elves? The score at this moment was 11-10. And the winner was Class 5. Leo's name was loudly praised by the students of Class 5 throughout the entire playing field. They shouted for a while and then rushed to hug each other, happily saying, "Hick, I'm glad we weren't expelled. I was afraid I would have to go home right away." Professor Sejin, hearing these words, curiously asked, "Expelled? What are they talking about?" Herod, sitting in his chair, casually replied, "Perhaps I should call it motivation." Hearing this, Professor Sejin looked at the students of his class on the field who were slumped over because they lost. He watched them for a moment and then let out a long sigh. He raised a hand and patted his head. Sejin then stepped towards the students of his class. He brought his gloved hand in front of Chloe and then asked, "Are you angry because you lost?" Hearing this question, she was a bit surprised and called out, "Professor." Sejin then said, "Once the match is over, no matter what the result, you must greet your opponent." He paused for a moment to let Chloe stand up and then continued, "To win for Class 1, all of you worked together extremely well. You all knew how to cooperate in battle. That's why you must be steadfast and proud." After hearing these words, the sad mood of the students seemed to disappear. They looked towards their professor, their eyes sparkling, and called out, "Professor Sejin." After calling out like that, Harid's voice suddenly rang out from afar. "Hey, loser, come over here and finish this." The joyful atmosphere suddenly became extremely awkward. Sejin angrily gritted his teeth and cursed twice. "Damn it." After settling everything, Sejin said, "Both classes did very well. Class 1 showed their talent and abilities. And Class 5 did not give up until the very end and gave it their all. Despite the challenges, they understood their limits and overcame the situation successfully. I hope you will work and compete with each other harmoniously. You all, shake hands." As soon as Sejin finished saying that, the two teams lined up and shook hands with each other. Celia smiled and said to Chelsea, "You lasted longer than I thought. I thought you would lose sooner." Hearing this, Chelsea also smiled and replied, "That's what I wanted to say to you. You're really tenacious. I thought you were an octopus." Beside them, Carr, as he shook hands with Duran, happily smiled and said, "Ha ha ha, Prince, this time we won." These words touched the pride of the losing team. The slightly joyful atmosphere suddenly became very awkward. And at this moment, Chloe was lowering her head, silent, not saying anything. It seemed she was still quite sad about losing. Just then, Leo's voice rang out. "That was amazing, Chloe." He walked over, reached out a hand, and then smiled as he continued, "With just a little more experience, you'll definitely become a wonderful player." Hearing these words, Chloe frowned and asked, "Are you making fun of me?" As soon as this question was asked, the smile on Leo's face suddenly froze. Chloe lowered her head, thinking to herself, "One day, I will definitely defeat you." Thinking that to herself, Chloe accepted and reached out to take Leo's hand. A month later, at the academy cafeteria, three people, Carr, Leo, and Chelsea, were sitting together. Carr, as he brought food to his mouth, asked, "By the way, which club will you guys join?" Hearing this, Leo raised his cup and took a sip of water, saying, "I'm thinking about starting a club." As soon as he said this, Carr, in shock, spat out his food. Chelsea yelled in disgust. "Eat properly, Carr," not paying attention to this, exclaimed, his eyes wide. Starting a club, Chelsea changed her attitude, turning to smile and said, "If Leo is starting a club, I want to join." Carr, who was quite curious, asked, "What kind of club?" Hearing this, Leo slowly said, "The Hero Research Association." As soon as these words were spoken, both Carr and Chelsea simultaneously said, "The Hero Research Association." Leo nodded and explained, "I want to learn more about Forgotten Heroes and the hero of Genesis, Kyle. Kyle. Isn't he the forgotten one? He is a fictional character." Carr said, then smiled and added, "It seems that no one will join your club." Hearing this, Chelsea thought to herself, "Does this mean I will be alone with Leo?" Thinking this, she quickly raised her hand and said, I want to join." As she was speaking, a commotion suddenly spread through the cafeteria. Someone loudly said, "They're back." Hearing this, Carr, curious, stood up and looked outside, then said, "Oh, right, It's today, Chelsea, not understanding what was happening, curiously asked, "What is it?" After asking, she also stood up with everyone and rushed outside. Car, walking in front, then slightly turned his head to explain to Chelsea, "It's the day the fifth-year students return after completing a heroic dungeon." Car, along with Leo and Chelsea, followed the other students as they rushed outside. Car explained, "This is the day that the fifth-year students return after dealing with a heroic dungeon. Heroic record fragments are scattered throughout the world. Over time, they run wild and form dungeons. These are called heroic dungeons." Leo, standing in the cafeteria, looking outside, thought to himself, "The seniors of Lumine, to deal with these heroic dungeons and collect the heroic record fragments, they will leave for at least 2 weeks, sometimes a month. Perhaps my mother went through this too." Chelsea watched for a moment and then admiringly exclaimed, "Wow, so they are the pinnacle of Lumine." Car, standing beside her, hearing this, covered his mouth and coughed a few times, then introduced her to the students. The muscular Oriental guy at the front is Senior Lee Jamua. The southern girl beside him is Senior Tarua Yen, and I think the pale person wearing a hooded robe is Senior Ulta. He paused, a bit hesitant, "But I don't see that person." Leo, standing behind Car, heard him speak. Just at this moment, a hand reached out and patted his shoulder. In an instant, Leo was pulled away by the hand. Then, Car's voice rang out again, "That person is the one at the top of Lumine." The student council president, Reese, as soon as he finished, he turned his head to look behind, then said, "Oh right, Leo, you." He only got halfway through before stopping because he didn't see Leo anywhere. He quickly asked, "Huh? Where did he go?" Leo, at this time, was pulled outside. He looked at the person who pulled him, frowned and said, "Celia, what's going on? This is a bit." Celia, hearing this, released his hand, then said seriously, "There is a place you absolutely have to go with me." "Where?" Leo asked curiously. Celia slightly turned her head and said, "Lumeria City. The student council president said he wants to meet you." Hearing this, Leo asked, confused, "The student council president, why would he be looking for me?" Celia shook her head and sighed, You really aren't interested in anything related to school." "Huh, just go there and you'll find out." Very quickly, the two of them arrived in Lumeria City. They found the restaurant they had agreed on and sat down to wait. Celia said, "I wonder why he would schedule a meeting in a place like this." Hearing her say this, Leo asked, "Why? The smell is all right." Just then, Celia's eyes focused on the entrance. Her eyes lit up and she smiled. Immediately, she stood up and rushed to hug the person who had just arrived, calling out, "Brother." This person was Zeiss Zardinger, a fifth-year knight and the student council president of Lumine. He reached out to pat Celia's head, then looked at Leo, who was sitting there, smiling as he greeted him. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Leo Plove. I've heard a lot about you. You're aiming for the all-classes path, right?" After exchanging greetings, the three of them sat at the table. Food was brought up. Celia took out her knife and fork and began to eat. Zeiss, sitting next to her, looked up and smiled, asking, "Is the food to your liking, everyone?" Leo nodded in response. At this time, Zeiss noticed his younger sister beside him. He asked, concerned, "What's wrong, Celia?" Celia looked at the food on her plate, frowning, and answered, This is the first time I've eaten something like this." She said this and then slowly put the food into her mouth. After taking a bite, Celia's eyes suddenly lit up. "It's delicious," she exclaimed. Hearing her say this, Zeiss laughed and said, "Ha ha ha, this is the restaurant that I wanted to take you to when you entered Lumine." Then, he turned to Leo and sighed, "But I didn't expect that you would be her son." Hearing this, Leo asked curiously, "You've met my mother before?" Zeiss nodded, replying, "I've met her a few times when I was young. Plus, she was very famous when she was still a student." "My mother." Leo was rather surprised by this and blurted out. Zeiss nodded, "Yes. She was someone who did many things that became legendary. For example, she said that the desserts in the dormitory restaurant were terrible, so she gathered all the students and invaded the headmaster's office." Celia suddenly exclaimed, "She was the main person of that famous incident." "Yes," Zeiss said, narrowing his eyes to confirm. The food on the plates was quickly finished by the three of them. At this time, Celia was talking to her brother. Leo, sitting on the side, remained silent, thinking to himself, "Indeed, he deserves to be called the strongest in Lumine. It seems like it's only a matter of time before he becomes a hero." After resting for a moment, Zeiss stood up and said, "All right, let's go grab some dessert. Let me pay, you guys go ahead." Hearing Zeiss say this, Leo and Celia went to the front door. At this moment, Zeiss was rummaging in his pocket for his wallet. Suddenly he stopped and let out a cry. From his pocket, Zeiss pulled out a small box, a dazzling white light shining around it. Looking at the box in his hand, Zeiss muttered, "Why is it like this?" At Lumine Academy. In Professor Harid's classroom, the blackboard was covered with writing. Harid had his feet on the desk, leaning back in his chair, relaxing. At this moment, a student spoke up. "Professor Harid, I have a question." Hearing the call, he opened his eyes and said, "Eliana Layden, let me hear what your silly question is this time." Hearing this, Eliana asked, "Why haven't we chosen a class representative yet? I heard that the other classes have already chosen theirs." Tide, sitting next to her, also nodded, agreeing, "Yeah, right, on the lecture platform." Harid raised his hand and wiggled his ear a few times, then said, "Class representative. Oh, right, I completely forgot. Leo, you do it." Hearing this, Eliana yelled, "Ah, what's with that?" Tide also said, "Professor, shouldn't we choose democratically through a vote?" Not bothering to listen to these words, Harid got up and threw a stack of documents onto the desk. Then he said sternly, "Class representative, take this and sort it." As soon as he said this, Eliana's enthusiasm suddenly disappeared. At this moment, an announcement rang out in the hallway. "In a moment, we will hold a combined hero research class. All first-year students, please prepare to go to the auditorium. I repeat, in a moment." Hearing this announcement, Leo said, "Professor, we should get ready." Hearing him say this, Professor Harid snapped his fingers a few times in response. As expected of the class representative, the students quickly gathered in the academy's auditorium. Leo and Carr stood together, observing their surroundings. Seeing someone he knew, Carr called out, "Hello Chloe, you look tired." Hearing the call, Chloe turned her head, her eyes dark, and weakly said, "Do you have any fatigue recovery potions left? Can you sell some to me?" Hearing this, Carr rummaged in his bag and took out a few bottles to give to Chloe. He said, "I only have 2 of these left." Leo, beside him, out of courtesy, also asked, concerned, "The new school year just started. Why are you pushing yourself so hard?" Chloe didn't respond immediately but tilted her head back and drank a bottle of fatigue recovery potion. After drinking 1 bottle, she wiped her mouth with her hand. Finished, Chloe turned around to leave, only leaving behind the words, "I'm fine," to the 2 of them. Watching her back, Carr sighed. "Wow, that's amazing. She is the top student in magic theory." Chelsea, who no one knew when she had approached, poked her head out and said, "I think Chloe is forced to worry." At this time, Leo had already left. Chelsea then continued, "The moment that Leo learns the newest magic trends, he might even catch up in the magic theory test." Hearing this, Carr was still a little confused and asked, "So what if she's second place?" This question made Chelsea quite disgusted. She said with a frown, "Do you really have no brains? You idiot, she's a sorcerer of the tower." Hearing this, Carr shrugged and said, "I'm a battle mage, so it's okay if my theory is a little behind, but investigating and researching magic is the core of the tower sorcerer. Her pride is being threatened." Hearing him say this, Chelsea asked suspiciously, "Are you really a sorcerer?" Carr smiled proudly and said, "Of course, I use magic to live. I guess self-sufficient magic is my pride." Standing beside him, listening to him ramble on, Chelsea said angrily, "Die." At this moment, in the distance, after drinking a bottle of fatigue recovery potion, Chloe's complexion had improved considerably. She was holding a notebook and steadily walking forward. At this time, in the headmaster's office, Headmaster Kalea was slowly wiping down a potted plant. He was silent for a moment. Then, he looked up and asked seriously, "Did the damaged hero page react?" On the table was a box, inside which was a small piece of paper. Headmaster Kalea's voice, full of suspicion, rang out, "Is it really true that this hero page reacted?" Zeiss, standing in front of him, nodded, "Yes sir, it was a page that was damaged to the point where it shouldn't have been able to react, but it definitely did, and there weren't any achievements nearby either." Hearing this, Headmaster Kalea asked, "Did it react in any way after that?" Zeiss shook his head, "No, it didn't react." Headmaster Kalea picked up the wooden box on the table and observed it for a while. He stroked his chin, saying seriously, "I will have to investigate this. You have just returned. You must be tired. Good job." Hearing this praise, Zeiss placed a hand on his left chest and bowed deeply. After Zeiss left, Headmaster Kalea closed the box in his hand and then called out, "Elena." Hearing this, a girl pushed open the door and stepped in. She looked up and smiled, saying, "Yes, Headmaster." Headmaster Kalea raised the box and instructed, "Take this to the auditorium. The Genesis Hall. The combined class for first years will be starting soon." Elena, hearing this, nodded, "Yes, I understand." After she had left, only Headmaster Kalea remained in the room. He stood up and looked outside through the window, thinking to himself, sometimes, small fragments like this will react. If someone recorded in the hero's book comes into contact with it, it will react. At the Lumine Academy auditorium, the combined first-year hero studies class was underway. The noise in the auditorium was incessant. Artian Nira, the professor in charge of class 1 to 8 and the first-year hero studies class, stood on the podium and called out, "Everyone, please be quiet." It seemed that none of the students heard her. Everyone was still talking amongst themselves. Annoyed by this situation, Artian suppressed her anger and gritted her teeth. "Everyone, if you don't want to get hit," she paused, still unable to suppress the conversations. She couldn't take it anymore and opened her mouth to shout. "Shut up, you bastards, want to die." Seeing that a male student was still chatting, Artian pointed directly at his face and scolded, "I'll kill you first." "Okay." Artian said this, but no one below paid attention to her. She sighed in frustration. These bastards won't listen." At this point, Artian was completely helpless. She tilted her head back and shouted loudly in anger. Hearing this shout, the entire auditorium suddenly fell silent. No one dared to talk again. Artian, very satisfied, said, "Finally, they're quiet." She waved her hands and said in a soft voice, "Thank you." Sitting in a chair, a student trembled, sighing, "So scary. No matter how many times I see her. Our professor is really too terrifying." Leo, who had been silent, supported his chin with one hand, thinking to himself, "So she is a spirit master. Even in my past life, they were hard to find." On the podium, Artian raised a small sword she was holding in her hand. She smiled and began her lecture. "We will now begin the combined first-year hero studies class, after the appearance of the Book of Heroes. The reason why hero clans appeared is like this. To open the world of a hero, one needs an item deeply related to or associated with that hero. Therefore, descendants of heroes can open the world of the hero more easily. That is why Lumine Academy, where the books of heroes are preserved, and these families have deep ties, even though this is a political issue. Should I say it is like the relationship between a key and a treasure chest?" Below, listening to these words, Carr had already fallen asleep. Leo, sitting beside him, was very excited and thought, "Interesting." Artian was still lecturing. Outside the door, Elena slowly walked in. Artian's voice continued, "Everyone, do you understand now why hero studies are important?" "Yes," the whole class answered in unison. Artian, satisfied, continued, "Hero studies are very important because they help us find clues to explore the world of a hero or learn more about them. When you are approaching your final year, you will choose a hero to inherit their power and attempt to complete the hero's pages." While she was lecturing, Elena stepped forward in front of Artian. Seeing the box in the other's hand, Artian introduced, "Everyone, this is a fragment of a book of heroes that the fifth-year students of Lumine collected." Receiving the box that Elena gave her, Artian slowly opened it. The students below, quite interested, all focused their attention on her hand. Seeing that the students were so attentive, Artian closed the lid of the box and cleared her throat. "All right, before we experience the fragment of the hero's book, can everyone say what they want to do when they become a hero?" Hearing this, Celia immediately raised her hand and said, "I want to become a knight who surpasses those in the previous generation of my family." Artian, hearing this, praised, "Oh, that's a wonderful goal." Chloe also raised her hand and said, "I want to write a spell book that only contains spells created by me." One by one, the students all stood up and said their aspirations. When it was Carr's turn, he clenched his fist and very seriously said, "I want to become someone useful to heroes." Hearing this, Artian said, "It seems that student Carr wants to become someone who can support heroes. That's wonderful." At this time, it was Leo's turn to say his aspirations. He stood up, one hand on the table, and very seriously said, "My goal is to completely destroy Erebos." As soon as he said these words, Professor Artian and Carr were quite surprised and stunned. Other professors like Herod and Sejin also had similar expressions. After a long moment, Artian regained her composure and exclaimed, "Ah, that's a wonderful goal. All right, next." Everyone continued to stand up and say their wishes. Two male students sitting behind Leo turned to whisper to each other. "Is he dreaming too much? Ha ha ha." It seems the dream of the freshman representative is on a different scale. Standing to the side, Sejin suddenly turned to ask Harid, "What do you think?" Harid crossed his arms and frowned. It's terrifying because he's not the type of person to just talk. After saying that, Harid slightly lowered his head, thinking to himself, it has been thousands of years since Erebos was scattered into pieces and sealed. But he is revived many times over the years. Calamities have come just from a single piece of him being revived. but his dream is to completely destroy Erebos. His thoughts were suddenly interrupted by Artian's voice. Artian said, "So, today we will read the hero page that was collected from the dungeon." Then, she immediately opened the box and said, "After each class guesses whose hero page it is, we will learn how to solve the world of a hero. By the way, just in case something unexpected happens, the class professors will also observe, so please do not cause any trouble." The students below, hearing this, were all very nervous. Nella, gripping her hands tightly, said anxiously, "This is the first time I've touched the hero's book." Tide, sitting next to her, hearing this, was even more nervous and replied, "I'm so worried." On the podium, Artian raised her head and looked over the entire hall. She then smiled and said, "All right, first, representatives of each class, please come forward." The representatives of the classes were all familiar faces, like Celia, Leo, Abad, and Shia. Everyone quickly moved to the podium. Artian, standing on the opposite side, said, "This time, 2 hero pages have been recovered. Of course, in this lesson we will only use one. The other one is a very small piece, but we brought it out for you to see that such fragments exist." Student Leo, upon hearing his name, stepped forward. Closer to the box, he reached out and touched the small piece of paper inside. As soon as he touched the paper, a warm, golden light burst forth in front of him. The hero's book had been opened. At Leo's feet, a complex circular formation gradually appeared. On the podium, a strong surge of power suddenly erupted. Sejin, who had a keen sense, quickly noticed the problem and cried out, "Is it rebelling?" Streams of power poured out throughout the hall. The professors, Leo, and the representatives of the other classes all watched in shock. The hero's book had been opened, but the chapter name was completely unidentifiable. The classroom quickly transformed into a desolate mountainous area. The space was extremely dark, and the ground was covered with countless corpses of giant monsters. A female student, witnessing this scene, cried out in fear, "Corpse!" Hearing this, Professor Harid quickly reassured them, "Everyone, calm down. This is a hero dungeon." Standing beside him, Professor Sejin suddenly pointed in one direction and said urgently, "Harid, look at the wall over there." Leo followed the direction of the professor's hand. As soon as he saw the image there, his face fell. He thought to himself, "The age of disaster." The final defense line is the last city, Gardsran. This image reminded Leo of things that happened before. He recalled the words he had spoken in the past. It was his wish, "I am really stupid." At this moment, the situation was quite dangerous, and everyone was worried. Leo looked into the distance. In his eyes, the figure of a woman slowly moving towards them appeared. The woman suddenly spoke, each word echoing Leo's thoughts, "But we will save this world." Images from the past overlapped in Leo's mind. His eyes glistened with tears, tinged with melancholy. One person in the present and one person already in history. Leo and the woman seemed to look towards each other. After some time, Leo quietly called out, "Lycinas, Lycinas," in the past. Seemed to hear the call of her comrade. She narrowed her eyes and gave a bright smile. The memories quickly shattered. The lights in the auditorium flickered continuously. They had left the dungeon and returned to the present. Someone cried out in fear. What the hell was that? Shia's face was covered in sweat. She asked with a frown, "Professor, what's happening?" Hearing this, Harid quickly reassured them. "The lesson is cancelled. Please calm down and leave the auditorium." Hearing these words, the students stood up and left the class. Leo was still standing in the same place. In his hand was the piece of paper he had just held from the box. Observing the piece of paper in his hand, Leo thought to himself, "This is Kyle's page, also my own record." Professor Harid stood with his arms crossed, opposite him. His eyebrows slightly furrowed as he observed Leo. After leaving the auditorium, Leo, along with Eliana, Carr, and Chelsea, gathered in one place. After hearing Leo's story, Eliana didn't dare to believe it, and jumped up, saying, "You said you saw the King of Wisdom." Sitting next to her, Chelsea also chimed in. "Amazing! So that was the hero's record of Lycinas." Eliana, at this moment, exclaimed with regret, "I should have been the class president. What a pity." Carr, sitting on the table, hearing her say this, scoffed in disgust. Hearing this scoff, Eliana angrily raised her fist and yelled at Carr's ear, "Today is your death anniversary." Just then, Harid, who no one knew had been leaning against the door, suddenly spoke casually. "I was going to see which class was the loudest, and it turns out it was here. Study on your own, or you'll be expelled. Choose." After saying that, he turned and slammed the door shut, and left. Everyone in the room immediately fell silent, not daring to make a sound. Leo, sitting with his arms crossed, thought to himself, Why are my hero records so chaotic? This world doesn't even recognize me. It's as if someone is deliberately destroying my hero records. The hero's records are items that inherit the power of a hero. If there is someone who doesn't want the birth of a new hero, it would be Erebos. I need to investigate why my hero records are chaotic. A month later, at the magic class of Lumine Academy, Professor Len pointed to the exercises on the board and said slowly, "Original, in other words, that is the characteristic magic. This is a practical exercise for your midterm exams." Hearing this, all the students in the class silently lowered their heads. Len, not paying much attention, continued, "Original magic is a type of magic that clearly expresses the personality of a mage. In the present era, when charms have become widespread, mages no longer pursue original magic. Original magic can become a unique move to protect yourself in a critical situation. The magic of the stars is magic that all spirits know. In reality, it is just a copied version of original magic. The only person to use the true magic of the stars in history was Luna, the creator of the magic of the stars and the ancestor of the Tin Van." Hearing this, Chloe suddenly glanced at Leo, who was sitting beside her. She remembered the match on the training field a few months ago, when Leo had transformed into countless figures, rushing the ball towards her. Thinking like this, Chloe slammed the book on the desk. Looking at her book, Leo frowned slightly as if he recognized something. Noticing the curious gaze of the other, Chloe suddenly felt a little flustered. She quickly picked up the book and put it away. At this time, Leo also averted his eyes, thinking to himself, "That is the forbidden book." His meandering thoughts were interrupted by Professor Len's voice. He said, "I know you're all looking forward to your original magic. The lesson is over here." Chloe and everyone else quickly packed up their books to leave. Just as she reached the door, Leo quickly ran after her, grabbed Chloe's hand and said, "Wait a minute, Chloe." She stopped and turned to look at him. At this moment, Leo smiled and said, "Let's have lunch together." As he said this, he slightly glanced at the bag that Chloe was carrying on her body, thinking to himself, "She hid the forbidden book in there." Just then, Chloe snatched her hand away from Leo's. She frowned and said, "I don't have time for such things. I will definitely win you in this practical exam." Hearing this, Leo was very confused, and quickly asked, "What's wrong with you?" As soon as he said this, from behind, Carr walked over and put his arm around Leo's shoulder, and said with a squint, "Leo, are you daring to threaten the magic champion position of the Ice Queen?" Hearing such a comment, Chloe was not angry but said, full of determination, "Although I lost to Leo in the battle, when it comes to magic studies, I must be the most outstanding, so this time, I will definitely win against you." Hearing this, Leo also smirked. It would be a shame to back away. Chloe remained silent. Leo stretched out a hand, smiling and said, "Then, I wish you the best in your preparations." This time, she didn't wait long. Chloe quickly reached out and took Leo's hand. Seeing this, Carr's eyes sparkled. He thought to himself, they shook hands. That was natural. Dusk gradually fell, covering Lumine Academy. Leo went alone to the Hero Tower. Looking at the paintings hanging inside the tower, Leo thought to himself, "Somewhere in this place is a forbidden library of Lumine. If it's there, perhaps there will be clues about my lost hero records." Thinking this, Leo went up the stairs and began to search. Two female students saw him and whispered to each other, "Isn't that a first-year student? What is he doing here? So cute." After taking a few steps, someone suddenly called Leo's name. He looked up. He saw on the upper steps a girl standing with her arms crossed in the middle. This person was Tarua Yan, a fifth-year student from the Lumine Magic Division. She said, "Professor Len has mentioned you a lot." "Hello." As a courtesy, Leo bowed in reply. "Hello." Then Tarua asked, "What is a first-year student doing at the Hero Tower?" Hearing this, Leo smirked and said, "I'm here to see the president of the student council." As soon as he said this, Tarua's face suddenly froze. A moment later, she adjusted her expression and continued, "If you're from the magic department, then I'll let you go. I heard that you registered for the magic studies class." Saying this, Tarua gave a slight smile. She retracted her leg, moved aside from the stairs and made way for Leo to go up. Seeing this, Leo smiled and thanked her. He had just taken a few steps when Tarua, from behind, called out to him, "Leo, I hope you choose magic studies as your major." Waiting but not hearing him say anything, Tarua turned around and gave a smile and said, "I'm reminding you." Hearing this, Leo smiled in response. He didn't say anything but gave a slight nod. At this time, the sound of footsteps rang out at the end of the stairs. Several people came out of the elevator. Seeing this, Leo stepped into the elevator and pressed the button. After waiting but not seeing the elevator move, Leo became a little nervous. He reached out and pressed the button again, murmuring in confusion, "Why isn't it going up?" As he finished saying this, a hand from behind reached out to help Leo press the elevator button. Following this action, a warm voice rang out. You need to channel mana into it for it to move. Hearing this, Leo turned around to look at the person behind him. Just then, he heard this person say, "It's a pleasure to meet you." Leo Plove. The person who had just appeared was Lee Zamwa, a fifth-year student from the Lumine Night Division. He paused for a moment, a smile on his lips, and then continued, "You're the first-year representative that everyone is talking about."
Leo Plove looked up in bewilderment at the person greeting him. "Hey, nice to meet you, Leo Plove." Jamua grinned cheerfully and asked, "So, you're the rumored freshman class rep, huh?" "I'm Lee Jamua, fifth year from the Lumerna Night Department." Leo bowed politely. "Hello." Jamua cut straight to the chase. "What brings you to the Hero Tower?" Calmly, Leo replied, "I've got some business with the student council president." Jamua's eyes sparkled as he rubbed his chin, chuckling to himself. "Oh, look at this, a newbie who isn't fazed by me one bit, bold enough to march solo into the student council president's office." He smirked. "I wouldn't call that marching in. You should seriously consider joining the night department. What do you say?" Leo froze for a second, letting out an awkward laugh. At the door to a room, Leo sighed inwardly. "I'm already exhausted before the main topic even starts." He knocked and called out, "President Reese, it's Leo Plove. May I come in?" A voice from inside answered, "Come in." Leo slowly opened the door and stepped inside. Reese Sardinger, seated at the desk, looked up as he entered. "What's up, Leo?" Leo paused for a moment. But then he spoke his mind. "I want access to the Forbidden Library." Reese's expression turned serious. "Leo, I know you're not the type to joke around." He explained, "There are only two ways for an ordinary student to enter the Forbidden Library. The first is to conquer the Hero Dungeon. Tradition says the conqueror personally returns the retrieved book pages to the Hero Archives." Leo coolly prompted, "And?" Reese fell silent for a moment before continuing slowly, "As for the second way, I'll tell you once you join the student council." Above, the sky glowed with radiant golden light, white clouds drifting against a vivid blue. On the night department's practical exam day, at the training grounds, someone shouted, "It's finally here, the first practical exam of the night department." Tons of people showed up to watch. Carr, thinking gleefully of delicious popcorn boxes, chimed in, "You can't watch a match like this without popcorn." Chelsea groaned tiredly. Looks like Carr's really passionate about his business. Eliana, on the other hand, slung an arm around her shoulder, laughing. That's Carr's style all right. He'd still rake in cash even outside Lumerna. Leo wove through the crowd, glancing around and thinking to himself, seems like Chloe didn't show. Nearby cheers erupted in surprise. "It's starting." Walden stood tall with his arms crossed, exuding confidence. He declared firmly, "The first sparring match." Looking toward Hall Snafe, he announced, "Hall Snafe, Class 1. Leo Plove, Class 5. Step up." Carr, standing nearby, seemed to recognize someone. He dashed over to Sejin, calling out, "Professor Sejin." The stern man turned and asked, "What is it, Carr?" Grinning ear to ear, Carr held up 2 popcorn boxes. "Want to buy some popcorn and soda, Professor?" Sejin closed his eyes with a faint, dismissive smirk. "Humph, you think I'd buy that? Ask Harlan." Carr glanced over, brow slightly furrowed. Celia stood there, her face stern. Then she clapped her hands together, eyes sparkling as she beamed at the professor. "Professor, are you buying popcorn for us? It looks so tasty." Sejin shot her a sidelong glance. All the students raised their fists in unison, chanting loudly, "Sejin." They kept at it, "Sejin, Sejin." But he crossed his arms, eyes shut, ignoring them. His gaze flickered slightly. Sejin finally muttered, "Give everyone." Carr perked up instantly. "Yes, sir." Out on the field, Leo faced Halls. He spoke first. "Good luck, first-timer." Hall Snafe, from the night department and the heroic Snafe lineage, smirked wickedly. "Looks like you don't care about me. You'll regret that." Lumerna Basics by Carr, the night department's midterm practical exam, passed by winning 5 sparring matches. A girl in the stands wondered aloud, "How's the class rep's skill level?" Her friend beside her replied, "Since Leo's juggling 3 subjects, there's bound to be a gap compared to those focusing on just one." Hall Snafe gripped his spear tightly, his power swelling as a dark green glow radiated around him. "Don't forget, Hall Snafe ranks 3rd in Class 1, right behind Celia and Duran." He swung his spear fiercely, mentally snarling, "Leo Plove, that arrogant jerk always hovering around Celia." Walden proclaimed boldly, The one who renders their opponent unable to fight wins. Treat this spar like a real battle. Leo's eyes snapped open, revealing blazing red pupils. A shroud of purple-black energy enveloped him. He glanced toward the building. Focusing harder, he realized silently, that energy. The scene shifted to a room where Chloe sat hunched over a stack of thick books, scribbling under lamplight. But then she tore the page apart decisively. Trembling, she tried to steady herself, muttering, "No, no way. There's no way I could create this unique magic with my skills alone." Furious, she clenched her fist and sent a book flying. Her glare burned with thoughts of Leo as she rallied herself. I absolutely can't lose to him in this practical exam. Her fist tightened, staring at the book on the floor. A magical tome glowed with mysterious purple-black light. She told herself, with this, I can win. She repeated it in her mind. This time, I'll definitely win. The purple light stretched toward Leo Plove. He looked up. Halls gripped his spear, sneering sinisterly. Too careless. He thought gleefully, gotcha. The spear had thrust toward Leo, but he calmly tilted his head to dodge. The spear extended, writhing upward like a serpent, surrounded by swirling green energy. It shot straight for Leo's chest. He swiftly grabbed the shaft. Halls growled in confusion. What kind of strength is this? Leo seized the spearhead, yanking it upward with unwavering resolve. With a sharp pull, Halls stumbled forward, unable to resist. Seizing the moment, Leo landed a crushing punch square to his face. Halls crashed to the ground. The sky cleared instantly, bright and blue again. Leo asked casually, "Who said I was careless?" But darkness crept back in. Hall's snafe rose, clutching his spear, shrouded once more in eerie, menacing power. Don't get cocky. The match is just getting started. His thoughts surged. A guy who can't even use light aura, having raw strength doesn't mean your basic weaknesses are fixed. As green mist enveloped the area, Leo extended a hand, conjuring a red aura. Unique light aura. Huh? Interesting. With a flick of his wrist, the red glow wrapped around him. Halls, smirking wickedly, channeled power from his palm. He laughed. Unless it's Celia's fire-grade light aura, you'll have a hard time pushing me back. Red light flooded the field. Leo said firmly, "You're the one who's always sloppy." Halls faltered, caught off guard. Leo charged at Hall's snafe, his red aura overwhelming the green. In the stands, students munched popcorn, enjoying the show. Durand stood with arms crossed, his face grim and thoughtful. Celia gasped, "Leo. Since when did he boost his fire-grade light aura to this level?" As the fiery red aura slowly overpowered the green light, Hall's snafe panicked internally. What the? Fire on par with Celia's? Leo boldly advanced toward him. Seeing Leo's smug expression, Halls cursed silently. This lunatic, stubbornly chasing every discipline, if he's this strong. A sinister grin crept onto his face as he muttered, "I originally prepared this to take down Celia. Never thought I'd use it on you, Leo Plove." His unleashed power morphed into a massive, menacing serpent, the serpent prison. The snake coiled around Leo, binding him tightly, its jaws gaping wide. Leo looked up calmly and said, "Oh, not bad." Halls sneered, mocking inwardly. "How's that, Celia?" He glanced up at her in the stands, thinking, "This is the technique I crafted to counter your fire." Celia tilted her head, pointing forward in curious confusion. Leo stood still as the green serpent wrapped around him. With a surge of strength, he shattered the snake into pieces, the red aura around him blazing even fiercer. Halls, unable to believe his eyes, stubbornly denied it. "No way." Gripping his spear tightly, he raised it high with resolve. Leo drew his sword in response. With one swift strike, Leo knocked the spear from Halls's hand, sending it flying. His blade pointed straight at Halls's chest as the boy collapsed beneath it. Leo spoke coolly, "As long as the fire's still burning, you shouldn't let your guard down." The sword hovered at Halls's throat as the announcement rang out, "The winner is Leo Plove." Chelsea, beaming from the stands, shouted, "Awesome, that's our Leo." Carr cheered, "All right, I knew I could count on you, Leo." Leo turned to leave, while Halls exited the field, wrestling with his thoughts. Didn't expect his combat skills to be this good. No wonder he's always around Celia. Suddenly, someone encouraged him. "Not bad, Halls." Celia stood before him, praising, "You were great." Caught off guard, he stammered, "Huh, really? You think I was great?" Then he burst into laughter. The referee's voice echoed again. Next up, Ileana Loudon from Class 5 versus. Eliana, brimming with energy, cracked her knuckles excitedly. "All right, Who's my opponent? The referee continued. Chen Xia from Class 5. Both fighters, step forward. Eliana blinked in surprise. As Chen Xia approached, Eliana thought, of all people, it's one of the top 3 in our class. The two faced each other on the field. Xia clasped her hands in a formal salute. Please teach me. Eliana returned the gesture. You too. The referee called, begin. Xia's slender hands moved gracefully, summoning swirling torrents of water. Eliana sprang lightly, conjuring a blazing red magic circle around herself, radiating red and golden energy. She lunged forward, thrusting her sword straight at Xia. Leo, watching from the stands with arms crossed, mused, looks like she's pretty banged up. Eliana strained to pierce through Xia's sturdy water barriers. But she was repelled, crashing hard onto the ground. Writhing in exhaustion, she lay sprawled on the field. The referee declared, the winner is Chen Xia. Xia clasped her hands in respect. Eliana struggled to her feet, muttering, at least I didn't back down against Chen Xia. Leo analyzed, the matchup was unfavorable from the start, but it's a shame, if she'd stayed calm, she could have done better. The referee announced, next, Celia Zur, Dinger from Class 1 vs. Duran Moira from Class 1. Duran stepped up silently behind Celia. Celia smiled lightly. This might be fun since it's you. He said nothing in return. Carr, munching popcorn, froze in awe. He shoved some popcorn at Leo. This is gonna be a good one, huh? Grinning, he looked at the field. Here we go. A loud cheer erupted. Go for it. The sheer power on display left the crowd gasping. The two stood as clear opposites. Celia radiated fiery red energy, while Duran countered her. She taunted, let's see who's the top knight of Class 1. Duran stayed silent, his gaze sharpening. He swung his sword in a wide arc. Celia matched him, parrying with her own fierce strike. A student in the stands squinted at the overwhelming force. So this is the combat prowess of the top students? Carr covered his mouth in amazement. Insane. Who do you think'll win, Leo? Leo popped a piece of popcorn into his mouth. Well, on the surface, Celia's gonna lose, Carr gasped. No way. But Leo recalled Celia's fierce determination, thinking, still, those eyes of hers. She's got a trump card to turn this around. His expression softened slightly. Duran charged at blinding speed. With a decisive slash, Celia instinctively dodged to the side. Gripping her sword tighter, she locked onto Duran's position. She thrust her blade skyward, channeling energy to the tip, unleashing powerful red tendrils. A vortex of flame spiraled above, freezing Duran as he stared up. The stands buzzed with shock. Whoa, they're getting serious. Leo nodded in approval. Smart move, Celia. Carr, puzzled, asked, huh? What's happening? Leo pointed to the scene. A red spherical barrier now encased them. He explained, look, the freshman training field is small. Celia realized she couldn't match Duran's speed, so she turned it into her own arena. From now on, his movements are restricted in that fiery dome, and the heat's messing with his vision too. She's always been amazing, but Celia's grown even stronger. Duran grimaced amidst the searing energy. Too hot. Celia dove from above. Sensing her, Duran sprang up, his sharp eyes blazing with fury. Gritting his teeth, he thrust his sword upward at her descent. Unfazed, she grabbed the blade with her bare hand. A triumphant smirk crossed her face. Gotcha. She wrenched the swords from both their grips, then slammed her forehead into his with full force. Caught off guard, Duran crumpled to the ground. He lay sprawled as Celia stood tall. The referee called, the winner is Celia Zerdinger. The crowd roared in awe. Celia waved down at Duran. Why not work on your physical strength a bit? She offered a hand to pull him up. He rubbed his forehead, wincing in irritation, but took her hand and stood. A girl in the stands gushed, wow, that victory pose is gorgeous. Her friend snapped a photo, thinking, gotta capture this. Leo smiled. Looks like all that training paid off, Celia, Carr shouted beside him. You're incredible, Celia. Arid Edmund, sitting behind them, munched popcorn and commented, so Celia really pulled it off. He grabbed another piece and walked off, adding, thanks for the breakdown, class rep. Leo and Carr stared after him, baffled. When did he start listening? The night department practical exam concluded. Celia Zerdinger, 4 wins, 1 loss. Duran Moira, 4 wins, 1 loss. Chen Xia, 4 wins, 1 loss. Leo Plove, 5 wins, 1 loss. 1 week later, the written language exam took place. After the test ended, the teacher gathered the students' papers, sorting them while saying, "Good work, everyone." As if finally free from the mountain of tasks in this class, he hurried toward the door, not without a parting jab at the students. "Don't fail and get yourselves expelled, all right? Study hard." Watching their immature teacher, the students could only sigh helplessly. "Should I just drop out before I get kicked out?" The door slammed shut, leaving the students with a space to let loose. Eliana fumed, literally steaming with anger as she growled, "Expel this, expel that." Meanwhile, over with the top student Chelsea, she was swarmed by classmates showering her with praise to sneak a peek at her answers. "Chelsea, let me see your answers," she puffed up proudly, feigning indecision. Who should I show first?" Seeing her agree, they clamored, "Chelsea, me first. Chelsea, show me first, please." Ignoring the classroom chaos, Leo slumped over his desk, fast asleep. But the moment he dozed off, fate always sent someone to wake him. A voice piped up, "How'd the test go, class rep?" Rubbing his neck groggily, he sat up and replied politely, "I don't think it was too bad." Nella beamed. "Oh ho, the class rep always acts like he's got everything under control. Maybe it's just that face of yours." He raised an eyebrow, skeptical. "Do I really?" Nella brushed it off, continuing, "If you're hurting anywhere, let me know, okay? I'll heal you with my magic." Seizing the chance, Carr barreled in from nowhere, his face grim as he rubbed his aching neck. Like a beggar spotting a feast, he wailed, "Oh, Nella, my shoulders and back are killing me. Help me too." Before he could finish, Chelsea smacked him on the neck, nearly making him choke. She cackled, "There, no more pain, right?" Carr's back stiffened, now worse than before, and he slinked away cradling it, wincing. Chelsea spun around 180 degrees to face Leo, her eyes sparkling with admiration. "Leo, how's your summoning practice going? Tide says you barely show up to the summoning room." He replied casually, "I've been training hard where no one can see." Carr, still reeling from Chelsea's fangirling, shot her a suspicious look as she kept chatting Leo up. "That's so you, Leo. So, what rank do you think you'll get in the summoning exam?" At the question, the corner of Leo's mouth twitched upward. With unshakable confidence, he answered, "First place, obviously." The day of the summoning department's practical exam arrived. Facing the contestants, the lively MC announced, "Hello, it's that time of year again, the biggest event of the first semester for our rookies. Welcome to the summoning race." He continued, "Honored to be here with you all. I'm Roomba Tess, third-year summoning department student." Celia sat beside Reese Zardinger, eyeing the festive so-called exam with skepticism. "Is this really a test?" He chuckled, explaining, "The summoning race is a long-standing tradition in the summoning department, making it super popular. Plus, since it's one of the events chosen for inter-department exchanges, it's always a hot topic." As if to prove his point, Carr stood in a corner, buzzing with excitement, clutching a Coke and a bag of popcorn to watch the showdown, humming a tune as he walked. Elsewhere, students gripped their own popcorn and sodas, ready for the spectacle. Tide, however, wasn't thrilled, muttering with a scowl, "Why's everyone crowding around and making so much noise? It's throwing me off, so annoying." A group of students glanced up, all frowning in shared irritation. One grumbled, "So annoying," echoing the group's sentiment. Meanwhile, Leo stayed quiet, staring ahead with unwavering resolve. On the other side, Izila glared at someone with murderous intent, as if ready to charge. Nearby stood Shia and Walden. Walden's gaze was equally unfriendly. Izila feigned praise, though it was really a subtle sizing up. "You showed some impressive skills in the night department's practical." Turning to Leo, who was stretching his shoulders, she asked, "Leo, you ready for the summoning department's practical?" His face remained neutral as he pressed his shoulder, replying offhandedly, "Of course," but Izila pressed further, unrelenting. "For someone so prepared, I've never once seen you at practice." Her attitude riled up the others, fists clenching as they chimed in, "Yeah, exactly." They snapped at Leo, "If you're taking this lightly, just drop out. We've never even seen you bond with a summon." Tide, sensing trouble, waved his hands to calm things down. "Hey, what's with you guys?" Their anger flared higher. "Don't side with him just 'cause you're classmates, Tide. That guy's always disrespecting our department." Shia, stone-faced, sighed. "The tension's thick. If it's like this before the exam." Sen Lu from the Eastern Continent Summoning Department, hearing Shia, stood up to stir the pot. "Chen Sha, since you scored high in the night department, you don't care much about summoning, right?" She tried to clarify, "Well, but before she could finish, Walden's face darkened. He barked, "Too loud." Silence fell instantly. Stepping to the center, he scowled at the drama stirrers. clearly unimpressed. As Wareden, top scorer of the Southern Continent's summoning department, he could speak with authority, and without fear of getting punched. If you want to argue over who's ridden a summon longer, don't do it in front of me. Take it somewhere else. His words stung the pride of many, especially Sen Lu, who bristled. What'd you just say, Wareden? Walden's aura grew colder, the air around him chilling as he glared down at Sen. I said it's pathetic when people who've ridden a summon a bit longer act like it's some grand achievement. Sen wasn't one to back down. Oh? Feeling guilty? You barely show up to taming practice either. Walden's icy laugh carried a menacing edge, his eyes glinting with malice. That's because it's not worth my time. I'm not some idiot who can't even handle a griffin. That single line struck Sen Lu's sore spot, shattering his mental defenses. Unable to take it, he raised a fist, snarling, "You bastard." A hand shot out to stop him. Leo grabbed Sen's arm mid-swing, warning firmly, "If you fight before the exam, it won't just be a warning, you'll lose your eligibility too." Sen froze, clicked his tongue in frustration, and yanked his arm back, fuming. With the situation somewhat diffused, Tide scratched his cheek helplessly, turning to Leo. "The first years in the summoning department have been in a bad mood lately." Leo frowned. "Why's that?" Tide sighed. "Summoning's a field with a huge skill gap between the few and the many. But since you and Shaw, non-specialists, keep topping the charts, the second years called us all out once. Plus, you guys rarely show up to practice." Recalling the resentful glares in Tide's words, Leo nodded. "True, it might look like I'm slacking. It's not that I mean to be lazy." Elsewhere, Lou stormed off alone. In the distance, someone watched. Clad in a black cloak beside a dark magic portal, they murmured, "It's finally begun." Unbeknownst to Lou, his fury fueled a blazing red energy radiating from him. As he walked, he seethed. "Just wait for the exam, you arrogant jerks. I'll crush you all." His eyes burned with rage, lips pressed tight, teeth grinding. The spirited MC continued hyping the crowd. "Before we start, let me explain the rules. First years in the summoning department can only use summoning skills in this exam. Even dual-class students are banned from using light aura or magic. When the event begins, tame the griffin in front of you, cross Summoning Island, and use Stillwater Lake as your checkpoint to return. Who'll be the star of the summoning department's midterm practical? We're about to find out." His words sparked tension as everyone braced themselves. Yura shouted encouragement. "Rookies, don't get nervous. Do it like you've practiced. Anyone who buckles under pressure will fall behind in this exam." Despite her words, the anxious students couldn't shake their nerves. The fear of failing lingered, their hands trembling as they muttered, "Don't shake." Yura, buzzing with excitement, called, "All right, get ready." Lou shot a glance at his red-haired teammate. They exchanged knowing smirks, brimming with confidence. The starting signal blared. All contestants surged forward. Moments later, aura gathered in their hands, but their eyes gleamed with malice. Then, they targeted Leo and Walden, shocking and confusing the crowd. "What's this?" Roomba yelled, the summoning department students. It seemed premeditated. They were all aiming for rookie rep Leo Plove and Southern top dog Wareden. Leo deftly blocked Lou's fire attack, child's play compared to his skill. Tide and other students, seeing Leo under fire before mounting their griffins, turned back, shouting, "Class rep!" Fending off the barrage, Leo yelled to his team, "Don't worry about me, just go. This is the exam." Tide nodded, realizing he was right, and climbed onto his griffin to finish his run, though he glanced back guiltily. "Sorry." Students in the stands jeered. "Dirty play. That summoning department bunch should just drop out. Fight fair." Leo frowned, countering attacks while thinking, "I knew we were disliked, but I didn't expect them to team up and sabotage like this." Roomba, still hosting, chimed in gleefully, "The fifth years are loud, huh? But this is a form of strategy." "Oh, as I'm speaking, Warren's already dispelled the elemental magic." After neutralizing Class 5 spells, Walden strode calmly to his griffin for the exam. Mounting it, he glanced back at Leo, still swarmed by magic, and asked coldly, "You look like you're struggling. Need help?" Leo brushed off the offer with confidence. "No, I'll handle it myself." Hearing that, Walden said no more. He spurred his griffin skyward, the force shattering the ground beneath. A spectator in the stands watched Leo, still tangled in magic, unable to reach his mount. It was Chelsea, peering worriedly. "Oh no, Leo." Yura fretted over the strained friendships among the academy's students. "The rift between the first years runs deeper than I thought. They're openly teaming up against him." Leo emerged, wreathed in fiery power. She knew her student better than anyone. His forte wasn't spirits but summoning. This exam's going to be tough for him. Yura's eyes widened at the surge of abundant energy before her. Leo pleaded for aid. Purina, Silid, lend me your strength. O spirits, break my chains and clear the path ahead. Grant me nature's great mercy. O spirits, unshackle me and open the way. The scene was serene, with only leaves drifting lazily through the air. He mused inwardly about his eloquence, spirit speech, and so fluent too. A gentle breeze stirred, strong enough to lift the fallen yet still green leaves. Even he didn't fully grasp how he wielded such power. How did I do this? What could have caught her attention? Yura planted her hands on her hips, grinning without overthinking it. He's definitely got to master summoning. High above, other students raced atop their beasts. Carr, astride his griffin, scoffed early on. Serves him right, and he's supposed to be the department rep and the South's best? He can't even get started. Lou joined in the mockery. He's definitely finishing dead last. Hey, how's that feel, Eliza? Pretty satisfying, huh? Eliza, confident in her skills, replied bluntly, I don't like this. I could beat Leo Plove, Warden, or anyone without resorting to tricks like this. Lou blinked, stunned. What? Her frustration flared, humiliated by Lou's impulsive actions. What do you think others will say about the summoning class after this? Lou didn't care about whispers behind his back. Who gives a damn? Those losers will face their own shame. Not forgetting to warn Lou, Eliza urged her beast upward. Think before you act next time. Lou fumed but was powerless. That arrogant brat, acting high and mighty just because her family backs her. Calming down, he steeled himself. Still, I'll definitely snag second place. Instead of focusing on the exam, Lou boldly declared, besides Eliza, I'm the best at controlling flying beasts. This time, I. A classmate shouted in panic, cutting him off. Lou, look behind you. He turned, jaw-dropping as Shaw stood atop her beast. What kind of stance is that? Recognizing a formidable rival, Lou rallied the others. She's too fast without even boosting her beast with spirit power. It's impossible. Everyone, let's take her down. A twin-tailed girl reached out, summoning spirit strength. All right, take this. Her speed was impressive, but the spirit nearly caught up to Xia. A power orb hurtled toward Xia's beast as it soared. A brown feather drifted to the ground. Even more shocking than standing on her griffin, Xia now hung upside down, still steady on its wing. The twin-tailed girl gaped. What the? No one knew who attacked, but a scream echoed across the sky. Xia leapt from her beast, landing a kick on the twin-tailed girl. She plummeted from her griffin, shrieking in defiance. This is cheating. Xia's confident poise spoke volumes of her skill. I didn't even use my light aura. She accelerated, her beast slicing through clouds and wind to surge ahead. She soon greeted, Hey, Lou. Lou flipped faster than a pancake. He'd rallied the others against her. You messed up, making us your enemies. With her sharp wit, Xia easily soothed her friend's anger. I'll admit I'm not great at aerial combat, but I'm not your only opponent. Lou blinked. Huh? She smiled, her words layered with meaning. Someone's really ticked off about your petty stunts. Lou froze as a massive mid-air explosion erupted behind him. Every move he made drew attacks. Walden, it seemed, was the vengeful type. Walden faced Lou head-on, unflinching. You piece of trash. Spirits joined the assault. Here's your payback. Lou flailed, nearly flung from his griffin, barely clinging on. Back at the arena, the announcer chimed in. Ah, first-year rep Leo Plove, famous across Lumerna for aiming to join the Academy's elite. Today, he's pushing hard to steal the spotlight in this contest. But could summoning be his fatal weakness? Before him stood a fierce, battle-ready griffin. Yet, unexpectedly, its wing was injured at that very moment. Leo hesitated, his reluctance clear. As a hero candidate, joining these games feels shameful. Still, his hand gripped the reins. He knew he had to compete. The announcer remarked as the beast roared in pain. Leo's trying to tame the griffin. My advice? Don't ride one that's on high alert like that. A ponytailed girl fretted. Oh no. Why's Leo pushing himself so hard? Rhys speculated. He must have his reasons. Leo pulled the griffin with all his might. I know how you feel, but right now, you've got to follow me. Losing patience, he scowled and barked, Kneel. The mighty beast froze, petrified by Leo's vampire-like glare. He released the reins, his grip easing. Whatever he whispered to the griffin held its rapt attention. With no wasted motion, Leo plucked out what injured its wing. Ready for the race, he mounted the griffin. It spread its wings wide, yielding to his command. The announcer spoke as Leo and his beast appeared on the big screen. Ah, Leo's griffin has joined the race. A rough start and a streak of bad luck. Seems like last place is inevitable. Leo gently patted its neck, praising, "That must have hurt a lot, but you held up well. Very brave." Tiny sparks glowed vividly against the dark expanse. In Leo's eyes burned a fierce flame. "In the name of the pact-bearer, I command you, appear before me." As expected, Fiora materialized beside him in an instant. Sparks enveloped the griffin's wings. Leo's energy now coursed through its entire body. The ponytailed girl puzzled over Leo's image on the screen. "What's with that fire?" Reese pondered, unease mixing with recognition. "Zardinger's fire? No, this isn't light aura fire. What is it, then?" The sky's flight paths warped under gusts of wind. A short-haired classmate grew anxious. "Their injuries are bad. At this rate, we won't hit top speed." But a green-haired boy shrugged. "At least we'll dodge last place. Relax a bit." Something by his side caught his eye. It was Leo and his griffin, cloaked in fiery power. Brimming with resolve, Leo was set on winning this time. "Now, let's see." Ahead were his classmates. He urged his griffin, "Pick up the pace." Something snapped him back to seriousness, a question mark flickering in his mind. Unbelievably, a purple dragon roared ferociously. Leo's jaw dropped. It had to be powerful. That's. One dragon faced countless griffins yet remained eerily calm. A few minutes earlier, thick smoke and dust billowed into the air. Eliza, riding her griffin, swooped toward where Walden stood. She shouted, "This is your end, Warreden." Her voice was resolute. "I won't let go of first place." Suddenly, Walden snapped his fingers. A flame erupted in front of Eliza, startling her. She yanked the reins of her griffin in a panic. Sure enough, a massive explosion detonated just as Eliza and her griffin darted out of its range. She analyzed silently, a critical strike using fire and wind spirits. Her face grew stern as she eyed the blast. "This isn't just a display of spirit control. I've never heard of him studying magic classes." She locked eyes with Warreden's piercing stare. Eliza's expression shifted, but, deftly guiding her griffin to dodge Walden's successive blasts, she taunted loudly, "No matter how strong your attacks are, they're useless if they don't hit." Walden responded with a cold lift of his hand. Sharp ice shards materialized. "Let's see if you can dodge this, then." With that, he urged his bird skyward, launching the icy projectiles at Eliza. Below, she stared, baffled. "Huh?" Her griffin faltered, unsteady, as if something within it was shifting. It reared back, roaring incessantly. The griffin lunged upward, spewing a blazing pillar of fire at the ice shards. Eliza calmly steered her beast. The griffin's flames melted the ice with ease. Walden frowned, quickly calculating, beast enhancement. At the same time, the announcer's lively voice rang out. "What an incredible clash!" Warreden's wielding 3 spirits in his attack, while Eliza counters with beast enhancement. Amid their duel, Chen Xia seized the moment, urging her griffin past them both. The announcer cheered, and right then, Xia exploits the gap to take the lead. She surges ahead, smirking. "Thanks a ton." Before she could finish, a purple cord lashed around her neck, startling her. It was Eliza's doing. She yanked the cord hard, gritting her teeth. "I won't allow that, Xia." A flame flared up in front of Shen Xia. She vaulted high off her griffin in an instant. An explosion burst from that small flame, but Chen Xia and her griffin evaded it just in time. Gritting her teeth, she tore the cord from her neck. She landed steadily on her griffin's back, and it sped toward the finish. Chen Xia smiled, marveling. "The top summoning department students, there's no pushovers." Suddenly, she spotted 2 more rivals. Her griffin's cry echoed through the sky. Xia saw Lu astride a black beast and cursed, "Damn it, a black dragon?" Lu, veins bulging on his forehead in rage, bellowed, "I'll kill you all, you bastards." Xia hurriedly caught up. "Riding anything but a griffin breaks the rules, Lu." But he snapped back, "Shut it. I don't care about that." He spurred Farnir past the others, snarling, "You talent-reliant fools, I'll slaughter you all." Onlookers buzzed at the sight of the colossal black creature. "That idiot bonded with a black dragon?" Chen Xia clarified, "It's not a black dragon. It looks more like a mutant." Just then, Leo approached from behind on his griffin. Flames of light aura blazed around him. Seeing Leo, Lu called out, "Leo." He sneered. "Why'd you follow me here? Whatever. I'll take you down too." Leo cut him off. "Hey." The other 4 froze, sensing something off in Leo's tone. They turned, alarmed and wary. Leo's face darkened dangerously as he asked, Where'd you get that lizard? Lu, sweating profusely despite his bravado, smirked. Jealous, huh? This is my power. I forged a pact with my summoning magic. You look pretty envious of my beast, don't you? Leo frowned, mistaking that for a summoned beast? Ridiculous. It's a mutant monster. A beast controlled by Tartarus mages, one of their mightiest from the Cataclysm era we eradicated. Where'd he even get it? Before he could dwell on it, Lu commanded, "Attack, Black Dragon." The black beast, Farnir, opened its maw, unleashing a deadly red beam of light aura. Leo, Walden, and Eliza hurriedly maneuvered their griffins to dodge. Only Chen Xia stood frozen, staring as the beam barreled toward her. The others shouted, "Dodge," but she knew inwardly, too late. She tried summoning a water aura shield. The red beam struck her griffin head-on with devastating force. Xia clenched her eyes shut, crying out. She and her griffin plummeted after Farnir's blow. At that moment, Leo's eyes widened with resolve. He sped forward at breakneck speed. Xia was still falling from that terrifying height. Leo reached her just in time, catching her. Assessing the situation, he thought, she's out cold from the fall. First, we need to get Chen Xia to safety. He called to Walden and Eliza, "Everyone, land now." The three guided their griffins to the ground. Only Lu remained, hovering atop Farnir in the sky. His face oozed satisfaction and menace. So this is what it's like to look down from above? Not bad. He drove Farnir at a ferocious pace. The announcer boomed, "The contestants have veered off course and out of broadcast range. Too much is happening at once." Car, mid-commentary, enthused, Senlu summoned a black inferno dragon and attacked the leaders, only to be cut off by Yura's kick. She snapped, "Hey, you idiot, you're still commentating now?" Yura snatched the mic. "Summoning department assistants, deploy flying beasts immediately." The matches paused. Sejin and Len burst in, asking, "What's going on, Yura?" She bowed, replying, "It seems Lu bonded with a high-tier monster instead of a standard summon." The two gasped, "What?" Sejin frowned, worried. He won't withstand its influence much longer. Is Lu really controlling that high-tier monster alone? Arid, at the door, spoke up. "Are you saying someone else might be controlling it?" Sejin turned. "I'm not sure, but it's possible." Harid issued orders. "All right, Yura, take the summoning assistants and intercept Senlu. Restrain him if needed and eliminate the monster. Remaining instructors, spread out to protect the students." Everyone replied, "Yes, sir." Harid added, "Sejin, you're with me." Sejin's brow furrowed in thought. The two strode out, faces grave. Outside the arena, the scene was eerie. Griffins stood still, awaiting commands. Xia remained unconscious, wincing as if in pain. Leo glanced back as Walden and Eliza landed. Walden looked skyward. "It's coming." Lu brought Farnir down to the ground, sneering, "If you were gonna run, you should have hidden better." "What? All gathered in this open space?" Leo replied abruptly, "I'm not hiding." Lu froze. "What? And that thing you're riding isn't a summon, or a black dragon?" Lu retorted, "I'm from the summoning department. I say it's a black dragon. Why act like you know better?" Leo interrupted, "It's a monster." Lu's rambling halted. He stared, stunned, at the figure before him. Walden and Eliza were equally shocked. Before them stood Kyle, as if stepping from the past, when comrades fell to Farnir's. "I'm." His face was stern, brimming with resolve. "Here to destroy that vile monster." Kyle advanced step by step to face Farnir.